The traffic light was red, prohibiting pedestrians from crossing the road, and the crowd of people was growing, waiting for the light to turn green, and one young man in this crowd was looking at the screen of his smartphone. He read the correspondence intently, and his face showed irritation from the dialogue. They wrote to him that today was June's birthday. The guy replied that he had other plans and they asked him to at least bring a gift. Finally, the traffic light took pity and turned green, indicating that it was possible to cross the road. In a nearby chat, a guy was asked where he was now. He replied that the guy should hang out without him today. One of his friends even offered to buy him food, but the guy refused. In the hustle and bustle of people, the boy and the man bumped shoulders hard. The man angrily shouted at him to watch where he was going, and the boy sheepishly apologized to him. As he walked on, the boy thought that the day was already hard, and then this man crashed into him. The guy sighed sadly and tried to remember what June, whose birthday he was supposed to visit, liked. Suddenly, there was a deafening roar and crash that rolled across the entire area. People started turning around in shock, trying to understand what it was. Someone even suggested that it was an earthquake. Suddenly, lightning of unimaginable proportions fell from the sky to the earth. All the people, including the boy, froze in horror, not believing their eyes. From the place where the lightning struck, a shockwave began to fly out in all directions, sweeping away everything around. Panic reigned, cars exploded and buildings collapsed because of the wave. People ran forward, jumping over obstacles. A new powerful lightning strike hit the building, not far from where the first lightning struck. Immediately, the building began to collapse with a loud noise, and the glass flew in different directions from the shockwave. Panic grew. People screamed, ran, and tried to avoid being hit by flying debris from the building. But there were casualties. The man, clutching his head, called out to the woman, but she lay unconscious. After a while, a hail of smaller lightning bolts fell from the sky and rushed towards the ground. And at the sight of each strike, lightning left behind only destruction. Smaller lightning strikes sent people and cars flying like toys. Our hero, covering his head, ran forward, trying not to get hit by shrapnel and dodging running people and burning cars. He ran forward with all his might, his eyes wide open, not paying attention to the people running with him. The girl who ran out of the metro screamed loudly and called for help, not understanding where to run. Our hero waved his hand at her and shouted for her to run here, and the girl rushed towards him. But she didn't make it in time. Just a little before she reached it, she was hit by an ambulance rushing forward. Our hero kept running forward, not understanding what was happening and really hoping that this was actually a dream. But he was too immersed in his thoughts, and only when it was too late did he notice the truck flying towards him. Life flashed before his eyes, but he could no longer do anything. Awkwardly covering his head with his hand, as if it would save him from being hit by a truck, our hero cowered. But, not feeling the blow, he began to slowly and fearfully open his eyes. Fear gave way to surprise, and everything began to blur before his eyes. His whole body, as well as his mind, twisted as if he had been thrown into a washing machine. A flash of lightning lit up the sky again. Lightning quickly fell to the ground, bringing destruction in its wake. Our hero's eyes widened sharply, trying to understand what had happened to him. He looked around frantically but tried to do it without moving. Thoughts started to return and he wondered where he was, because he had just been run over by a truck. The boy tried to roll over onto his back and looked around, trying to figure out where he was. But as soon as he did this, his eyes widened in shock and surprise. There were two moons in the sky, one blue and the other red, and huge birds like griffins were flying across the sky. Not believing his eyes, our hero wondered what the hell was going on. He lay naked on his back, trying to comprehend what was happening, when he heard a terrible roar. The guy stood up and looked in the direction from which the eerie sound was coming. He came closer and clenched his teeth in shock, not believing what he saw in front of him. It was a giant bear, roaring and foam flying from its mouth. A pack of wolves attacked the bear. Each of them grabbed the bear's paw and several more stood nearby, preparing to attack. Our hero stood wide-eyed and in shock as he watched the battle. Instead of a bear, the guy sees a doctor in a white coat, who is carefully writing something down in a notebook. He asked the boy again if he had understood correctly that he had woken up on another planet with two moons and watched as a pack of wolves attacked a bear. Realizing that this sounded stupid, our hero remained silent, lowering his eyes. Having written this down in his notebook, the doctor asked the boy how he was able to return back from that planet. The question was logical and the guy understood it, but he didn't know how to answer it. The wolves tore at the bear, biting into its neck with their sharp fangs, tearing out pieces of flesh. Unable to withstand the pressure, the bear's huge body rose into the air and its paws stopped touching the ground. The bear fell to the ground with a roar, and from the impact, stones and chips flew in all directions. The pack of wolves united. The largest ones ran ahead, and the smaller ones stayed behind. They surrounded the bear's body and began to tear it apart, ripping out chunks of flesh. Hiding between the rocks, our hero watched what was happening in horror, afraid to make even a sound. He didn't immediately notice that one of the wolves with snow-white skin had crept up behind him. The wolf cub looked at our hero with interest, showing neither aggression nor friendliness. Our hero cursed mentally, looking at the wolf, and horror was visible in his eyes. Our hero ran away from the pack of wolves with all his might. Breathing heavily, he jumped over obstacles and clouds of dust erupted from under his feet. The first rays of the sun appeared in the sky and it began to turn orange, replacing the night. In order to survive, our hero ran with all his might, not paying attention to fatigue. Sweat clouded his eyes and it was hard to breathe. Every breath seemed to burn his lungs. Suddenly, a message appeared before his eyes that only he could see. It read, "Your physique has increased by 1." The guy didn't understand what kind of message it was and looked at it in surprise. Because of the message, he did not notice a protruding rock and caught his foot on it. Our hero stumbled and, losing his balance, began to fall to the ground. Not only did he fall while running, but he also fell on a slope, and instead of falling, he rolled down, sweeping away bushes. He ended up falling off a small cliff and landing headfirst in the thick grass. The guy started coughing and couldn't stop, sweat and tears dripping onto the ground. Having caught his breath a little, he wondered what that sound was, whether he was really hearing strange sounds now. Suddenly, something caught his attention, causing drool to flow from his mouth. In front of him, he saw bushes with something hanging on them. These were red fruits, similar to tomatoes or apples. The boy thought that he was very hungry and, looking at these fruits, wondered whether they were edible. He noticed one fruit lying on the ground with several ants crawling over it. The guy looked around and saw that other fruits were also covered with ants and decided that since they were not afraid, it meant that the fruit was not poisonous. He took one of the fruits and, kneeling, greedily bit into it with his teeth. He bit into the fruit several times when he suddenly felt something was wrong and froze. He peered closely at the thick grass in front of him. Our hero trembled, feeling someone's gaze, and suddenly heard a terrifying roar. The grass ahead suddenly moved and something ahead made a sound. Our hero's eyes widened in fear when he saw what was watching him. A huge red eye with a thin vertical pupil looked at him. Our hero was so frightened that he was afraid to even move and stood frozen with the fruit near his mouth. A giant snake with blue scales jumped out at him and opened its mouth predatorily. Still motionless from shock, the boy had already resigned himself to his fate, looking enchanted into the snake's eyes. Suddenly, a giant frog jumped out from somewhere and grabbed the snake by the throat, gnawing at it. The frog pulled the snake along with it, and the guy was still sitting on the ground, holding the fruit near his open mouth. Hearing the frog devouring the snake, our hero hiccuped and was finally able to close his mouth. He closed his eyes and thought this was a crazy place. As he fell to the ground, he thought that he was actually the only one who had gone crazy. A downpour fell upon this strange, unfamiliar forest, washing everything around. Raindrops trickled down from one huge leaf to another. A large puddle of water collected on one of the leaves and began to flow down in a thin stream. Our hero opened his mouth and caught this stream, quenching his thirst. He was sitting on a tree branch, with something like a bandage around his hips, leaning his back against the tree trunk and drinking greedily. It was already the 67th day since he had entered this unfamiliar world. He looked down and thought that the pack of those same wolves was still chasing him. Looking at them sadly, our hero thought that they could catch him at any moment. Looking around, he thought that the wolves were not the only danger and he needed to find a safe place. Night fell again and 2 full moons rose in an unfamiliar sky. A year has passed. Our hero found a bunch of bananas, each of which was his size. With a lot of effort, the guy was able to tear off one banana from this huge bunch. She started to fall down, but the guy managed to catch her and did not let his prey fall. And again he saw an unknown message that his strength had increased by 1. The guy felt himself getting stronger and pulled the giant banana towards himself. It took a while, but he was able to pull the banana onto the branch he was sitting on. While eating a banana, the guy thought that he had managed to survive, or rather, had adapted. There was a white wolf cub standing under the tree, and our hero thought that it was persistently following him. The boy stuffed his full cheeks with banana, thinking that he had already gotten used to the wolf cub and even missed him when he was not around. Suddenly, a stream of liquid began to flow down his back from somewhere above. Not understanding where it was pouring from, the guy raised his head up. Seeing the source of the liquid, the guy cursed harshly and instantly tensed up. There was a huge gorilla at the top of the tree. It growled and began to quickly descend. Spraying saliva, the gorilla descended towards our hero and swung its huge fists. Our hero watched as the gorilla rushed towards him and clenched his teeth angrily. Both of the gorilla's fists fell on the branch where the boy was sitting, and it split into small pieces. But our hero was quick, managed to grab the liana, saved himself, and even took his banana. Looking at the gorilla with indifference, our hero said that maybe she would be lucky next time. At that moment, the branch onto which the gorilla had jumped broke, and the huge carcass flew down. And a white wolf cub was watching everything that was happening from the ground. And at the moment of the fall, he was right under the gorilla. The giant monkey fell to the ground with a crash, sending rocks and branches flying. The white wolf cub also got caught in the wave and was thrown away from the gorilla with force. Holding on to the liana, our hero looked down and noticed that the wolf cub had been injured by the monkey's fall. Unexpectedly, after such a fall, the gorilla remained alive and its huge paw hit the ground with force. The gorilla began to stand up and its attention switched from our hero to the wolf cub. The shockwave created by the gorilla's fallen carcass caused a branch to stick into the wolf cub's paw. But despite this, the wolf was ready to fight back and bristled when he saw the gorilla's gaze. The gorilla growled in response, staring at the white wolf cub as if it had already forgotten about our hero. The gorilla growled and swung his huge fist, preparing to hit the wolf cub, who didn't even think about running away. The monkey hit, and the white top flew to the side, whining pitifully. Suddenly, our hero flew up from the gorilla's back and, letting go of the liana, flew towards the monkey. He dropped onto the gorilla's back and jabbed the stick into its eye with one hand. The monkey screamed in pain as the stick pierced its eye, causing blood to immediately flow. Our hero didn't have such agility, but the gorilla was able to grab him by the shoulders with both hands. She threw the guy forward with force and he flew like a straw doll. He crashed his back into the wall with all his might, but managed to notice that the top had come to its senses and was running away. The blow knocked all the air out of the guy's lungs and he tried with all his might to breathe. But the gorilla was not going to give up and was already running towards our hero, demolishing everything in its path. Looking at her with a mixture of irony and contempt, the guy said that it was stupid to get into this fight. The doctor interrupted the memories of the gorilla and asked why our hero did this. The guy said tiredly that he could no longer run away from the suffering beyond the territory. Constant running away did not solve anything. The doctor didn't know what to answer and just looked at the guy with surprise and distrust. Suddenly a smile appeared on the guy's lips and he added that wherever he went, there was always a ruler. Our hero sat by a tree and couldn't move, and the gorilla was rushing towards him. Swinging her giant fists, she was ready to crush the guy's head. But suddenly, from somewhere to the side, a large white wolf attacked the gorilla, trying to bite her throat. Our hero couldn't believe his eyes and watched this scene in surprise, not noticing the blood on his face. A pack of wolves surrounded the gorilla and attacked it, gnawing at its body from all sides. Watching the wolf pack attack, our hero lost consciousness. He thought that this was the end. But the wolves did not touch him while he was unconscious. The wolf cub circled around watching the big wolves attack the gorilla, and our hero decided that the pack decided that he was sleeping with the wolf cub, so they were helping him. Soon our hero realized that this white wolf cub was the son of the leader of a pack of crimson wolves. When the full moons rose in the sky, the howling of wolves spread through the forest. A pack of wolves climbed a high hill and howled in unison at the moon. The wolves ran as fast as they could, and at the same time howled with a single timbre. Our hero was also in this pack and ran ahead. Together with the white wolf cub, just like you and me, my best YouTube viewer, we are both lone wolves, wandering through the night forests in search of cool content. Let's not forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and like. All the best to you. Our hero stopped, trying to catch his breath from this mad run, and the wolf cub stopped with him. After a while, the wolf cub also stopped and tried to catch his breath, sticking out his tongue. The boy picked up the wolf cub in his arms and rushed forward with the pack of wolves. Over time, the wolf cub grew into a huge white wolf, and our hero was still nearby. It was the second year that our hero had been in this world, and a wolf howled on the hill. The crimson wolves immediately howled back at him. The boy howled along with the wolves. He thought that the wolves probably took him for one of their own. Our hero became stronger and stronger, and now the sheer cliff, along which he easily ran up, was no longer a problem for him. It is not surprising that he could climb it, because it was already the 31st year since he came into this world. Suddenly, a giant snake jumped out at the guy and rushed up the hill after him, but our hero was expecting this. Our hero took out a knife and thought that he had no idea how to get out of here. During all this time, he had not found any signs of civilization. He cut the snake from its mouth almost to its tail, and the wolves from below helped him, tearing apart its tail. The wolves began hunting the boar, and our hero thought that he had joined the wolves and was continuing to participate in the fights for the territory of his pack. The wolves were chasing the boar, and our hero was watching, following him along the vines. He flew high, preparing to attack, and let out a hunting roar. Releasing the liana in flight, our hero pulled out his knife and prepared to strike. He landed on the boar's head and his knife went into its head like soft butter. A flock of birds took off into the blue sky without a single cloud. Our hero stood on a hill and looked at a flock of birds, thinking that 120 years had already passed, and he was definitely the only person on this planet. He remembered mourning the wolf and thought that he had made many furry friends, but had also lost many. He sat on the cliff with a bloody knife and realized that he had lost count of how long he had been in this world. Hundreds of years had already passed, and he did not understand how he had remained alive. The doctor concluded that, having become the leader of the pack, even after 500 years he did not find any signs of civilization, and asked how our hero managed to find the way to Earth. Our hero remembered that on a hill under the moonlight, a pack of wolves was going against a pack of gorillas. The crimson wolves rushed forward, bristling, growling and baring their teeth. Gorillas were rushing towards them. They were also growling and ready to fight. Our hero also fled with the wolves, and during his time in that world he even made himself some improvised boots. The wolves and gorillas clashed in battle, attacking each other. Our hero looked like a beast. He took up a knife, ready to attack. With all his might, he pushed off the ground with one foot. Floating in the air, he swung his arm, preparing to strike one of the gorillas. Suddenly, a deafening thunder resounded across the battlefield, just like that time on Earth. Our hero froze, recognizing this sound, not believing that he was hearing it again. His consciousness began to slip away, twisting like it had last time. The whole world froze and began to spin. Everything began to quiet down. The battle, the roar, the attacking gorilla. Lightning struck the place where our hero stood, shaking the earth. In the light of lightning, the guy disappeared, and all that was left of him was the knife with which he had gone through many battles. Suddenly, a city appears. The buildings look old, and they are all covered with small cracks. 3 people walk along a road against a backdrop of destroyed buildings, and one of them has a radio beeping. One of the 3 slows down and says, "Great." The girl with long hair turned to her companions and said, "We're going this way." The radio in her hands beeped louder and louder, and one of her companions said, "But Captain." The girl said that the device was behaving strangely, and the spatial energy was off the charts. The guy said to send the coordinates to the portal control team right now. The boy with the instruments in his hands pressed the button and said that he was sending the coordinates. A pillar of light flashed in front of the trio, and one of them said that the portal was opening. 3 ran away from the portal. One said that it was unknown what would come out of it, and the second added that it was not for nothing that he had a bad feeling. The trio ran forward, and behind them the shockwave swept away everything around them. They didn't have time to escape, and the wave threw them in different directions like toy soldiers. One guy came to his senses and screamed in horror that the portal had opened. The second guy pressed himself against the wall and screamed that he didn't want to die. And only the girl boldly turned to the opened portal and grabbed the handle of the katana hanging on her side. She shouted that she would buy time and ordered the boys to run away. One of the guys tried to call the bureau so that they would send help as soon as possible. The portal looked like a bright red circle, and the girl boldly waited to see who would appear from it. "Come out, I'll tear you to pieces," thought the girl, staring intently into the portal. A silhouette of a man appeared in the red circle of the portal. The girl stared forward in shock, not believing her eyes. The haze cleared, and now the image of our hero was clearly visible in the portal. The girl's ardor waned, and she wondered in surprise if there really was a human in front of her. She felt her whole body go rigid and tremble slightly. Our hero was confused after a long stay in the world with animals, and the first thing he did was scream loudly. This cry, more like an animal's roar, brought the girl into complete stupor. The girl held the hilt of the katana tightly, preparing to fight in front of the portal. Our hero, who appeared from the portal, growled menacingly. The girl stared at him in shock, not believing that there was a person in front of her. Her instincts told her that she was facing a wild animal, and she began to tremble. The roar suddenly stopped, and the guy began to slowly sink to the ground. The girl continued to stand, holding the katana, watching the guy fall. The roar from the opening of the portal began to subside, and with it our hero fell to the ground, losing consciousness. The guys who called for reinforcements came closer, and were surprised that a man appeared in front of them. The girl calmed down and, looking at the guy, wondered what kind of power it was. She looked at his sleeping face and thought that she had never felt such pressure, even in high-level dungeons. The girl couldn't understand who this guy was who appeared from the portal. The guy said on the radio that they didn't need reinforcements. He had returned and they needed an ambulance. The guy was sitting on the couch when the doctor turned off the recording on the dictaphone. He smiled and thanked our hero for everything. He said that he would pass on his testimony to the Bureau of Awakened People. His health was normal, so he would be discharged soon. The guy, lowering his head, called the doctor by name. The man was already standing at the door and turned around in surprise when he heard his name. The guy said that for the first time in 1,000 years he talked to a civilized person and thanked him for listening to him. The doctor said that he had shared a valuable story and that they should thank the hero who had returned from a 1,000-year adventure. Our hero looked with distrust after the departing doctor. The door to the room where the guy was located slammed shut. The doctor walked down the corridor to his office, thinking as he went. He thought he was a very interesting patient. His story was so detailed that he could easily become a writer. The Bureau of the Awakened consisted of several high-rise buildings with helipads. The girl with the katana stood in the captain's office. She was reading the documents and asked if the information here was correct, because she thought it was not. The captain was surprised by such words and asked what was wrong. The girl looked at the card and said that it said that he had an F rank. The captain said that he was a rare patient with such a rank, and added that if he had at least rank E, they could receive benefits from the state. She looked at the card of our hero, whose name was Steve, and said that this rank meant that he was an ordinary person. The girl said that with such a rank, he would not be able to pass through the portal and once again clarified whether everything was correct here. The captain said that maybe he was lucky, sometimes that happens, or he was hiding and accidentally came across the return stone. He handed over the tablet and said that he had received the doctor's report from the hospital and offered to take a look at it. The diagnosis indicated that our hero had post-traumatic stress disorder and that he was prescribed antidepressants. The girl read the document with distrust and was especially attracted by the clause that stated that he behaved like a wolf. The girl remembered what Steve looked like when he first came out of the portal. She trusted her instincts, but she began to think she was imagining things. The girl asked if it was his document. The captain confirmed it and added that even though he was F rank, they should still treat him as a returned one. The girl asked to personally deliver these documents to Steve. The captain was surprised why the girl volunteered to deliver the documents personally. As she was leaving, the girl said that she wanted to see it with her own eyes. Despite the fact that many years had passed, the hospital building looked like everywhere else. Our hero lay on the couch, thinking that 2 weeks had already passed since he returned from that world. He thought that he wanted this more than anything in the world, but when he returned, everything felt foreign, and he didn't understand what to do next. A nurse entered the room with a tray and said that it was time to eat. The guy did not immediately return from his thoughts and looked with tired eyes at the nurse who entered. She placed the tray containing various dishes on the table by the bed. Suddenly, our hero felt that he was really hungry and his stomach began to rumble. Looking at the delicious dishes, he decided that he needed to fill his stomach first. There was a knock on the door of the room where Steve was. The door immediately swung open and the girl with the katana greeted Steve. Our hero squatted and ate food without using cutlery, like a wild animal. The girl with the katana was shocked to see this scene. But the guy didn't see anything strange in this and just turned his gaze to her, without looking up from his food. The girl said her name was Jean, and she was from the Bureau of the Awakened. Steve swung his leg off the bed and muttered, "That smell, that blonde hair." He squatted down next to the girl and sniffed, saying that they seemed familiar. The girl said that she was the first person he met after he returned. Remembering his appearance, the girl thought that when leaving the portal he felt like a predator. But now, looking at how he eats, the girl doubted her sensory abilities. The guy licked the tray of food and, putting it on the table, said that the food was delicious. He asked the girl what this Bureau of the Awakened was, and she asked him in response why he was speaking to her informally. Steve was confused for a second but replied that he was 1,000 years older than her. The girl remembered his diagnosis and that he was a patient and looked away. Jean put the papers in front of him and said that the Bureau of Awakened People helps people like him adapt, and said that everything was written in the document. She asked him to read it carefully and sign the agreement to disseminate the information. Steve gasped in surprise as he picked up the pen. He sniffed the pen, and the girl asked why he continued to sniff things. The guy replied that 1,000 years had passed and they continued to use pens. The girl angrily said that she asked him to sign it, not draw it. The guy apologized and said that she remained the same as she was 1,000 years ago. The girl swore at Steve, called him a Neanderthal, and showed him again where to sign, deciding that he was just an idiot. After thinking for a bit, the girl became a little embarrassed but still turned to Steve. The guy, without being distracted from drawing, asked what she needed. Looking at the drawing of the wolf, she asked if he had learned to draw there, and he replied that he had been able to draw before. The girl asked if he had learned anything there and, seeing his surprise, added, had he learned magic, voodoo, or martial arts? Steve replied that he had been living in the forest all this time to survive. The girl finished the sentence by saying that he had been running all these 10 years to survive. The guy looked at the girl in bewilderment, waiting for an explanation. To become a true returnee who can pass through the portal, you need to kill monsters and take their spatial energy. But Steve, apparently, just ran into a travel stone. That's what the girl thought and said out loud that she was simply mistaken. Steve said in surprise that he had been in the jungle not for 10 years but for 1,000. Jean said he was starting to get on her nerves and added that he had been in the jungle for 10 years, not 1,000. The guy started to get angry when he heard the girl's answer and asked her again why 10. She said to look at the records. It says he disappeared in 2015 and it's now 2025. Steve looked at the document in shock, not believing that only 10 years had actually passed. The girl threw the guy his ID card and said that it was his awakened card. The guy took it in his hands and read the inscription, the ID card of the awakened one. The girl said that half of his medical expenses would be subsidized with her help and asked him to read the documents. Before leaving, Jean said that when Steve recovered, it would be better for him to return to his family and said goodbye to him. The guy looked at the door that closed behind the girl, digesting what was said. He grabbed the documents, repeating the already forgotten word, family. Steve read the documents, shocked as he wondered if they were still alive. Remembering his life in the jungle, our hero thought that he had finally given up there. He assumed that even if he returned to Earth, his family would no longer be alive. But upon returning, he had to come to terms with the loss of his wolf family, and the fact that he was alone again drove him to despair. But these were just assumptions because only 10 years had passed. That's what Steve thought as he read the documents. He found the page with the data and gasped. Our hero's mother and father were already dead. Steve sadly repeated into the void that they were both dead, and began looking for information about his younger brother Chad. Having found information about his brother, our hero's eyes widened in surprise. He ran quickly out of the room with only one thought. Chad is alive. He was shouting at the nurses that he urgently needed to see Dr. Boldy, and he didn't hear the girl's words that he couldn't go there. Steve grabbed the door handle to the doctor's office with all his might, and behind him he could hear the screams of nurses. Our hero opened the door, not listening to anyone around him, and called Dr. Boldy. The nurse who ran after the guy said that he couldn't go there. The doctor was sitting at the table and was surprised by such an appearance. He smiled, looking at Steve, and asked him what happened. Our hero confidently stated that he needed the doctor's help. Dr. Boldy was calm and asked what kind of help the boy needed. Steve said that his brother was still alive and he needed to find him, so he asked the doctor to discharge him from the hospital. The doctor said that Steve was ready to return to society and suggested waiting until his brother came to visit him. Steve said that the doctor didn't understand the situation and that he wasn't here for his permission. The doctor just laughed when she heard these words and asked again if it was true. After thinking for a moment, the doctor ran his finger along the crease in his trousers and said, "Okay." With a conspiratorial expression on his face, he said he had one condition. Our hero was surprised by this answer and asked what condition he was talking about. Sitting in the back seat of the car, our hero thanked the doctor, promising that he would not forget it. The doctor and nurse stood near the taxi in which Steve was sitting, and the doctor was pleased with these words. The doctor told the driver that our hero had not fully recovered and asked him to make sure that he would get to the right place. The yellow taxi drove off to its destination, and the doctor and nurse watched it go. The nurse said the doctor paid for his hospital bill, bought him clothes, and even paid for the taxi. She asked why, since they usually leave F-rank patients on the side of the road, and for some reason he calls Dr. Boldy. The doctor laughed when he heard this question from the girl. He thought about it and replied that he probably would like to continue listening to his story. The nurse was surprised and asked why he should listen to this nonsense. Returning to the office, the doctor asked to fix the door handle quickly. The nurse said that she had already called a repairman and could not understand how it broke, looking at the flattened handle. Immediately, a picture appears of our hero, in his excitement, squeezing the door handle with force and it breaking like a toy. The doctor was in no hurry to answer and slowly sat down in his chair. He sat down in the chair, holding onto the handles, closing his eyes in thought. The doctor thought that the handle had broken for the second time and that he had not smelled anything unusual for a long time. The taxi was slowly rolling through rush hour traffic when the news announced breaking news. From the tablet screen in the car, they said that today during the day, due to the miscalculation of the portal's appearance time, monsters filled the unprotected field. The screen showed monsters. One of them looked like a huge predatory creature with several rows of teeth. From the monster's mouth grew another mouth, long and twisting, and the announcer said that in response, the ministry had sent the Army and Air Force on a joint operation. The situation was resolved within 50 minutes, but the Army and Air Force suffered numerous casualties. With 2 tanks disabled and 12 soldiers and awakened dead, the announcer ended the broadcast, adding that he would continue the report when there was news. The image of monsters and soldiers was replaced by the intro of the show, League of Zalem, a superpower fighting club, and another announcer said that a match between two C-class warriors was coming. Our hero watched the episode, and the driver admired the choreographed warriors. Two warriors were shown on the screen, and the announcer said that the winner would be able to fight the fighter who occupies the second place in the world ranking. Steve watched the episode attentively, not understanding what was being discussed or what kind of world the announcer was talking about. He remembered the doctor's words that the world had changed a lot, that since the Great Catastrophe, it had become a completely different place. A warrior in armor appeared on the screen, along with the words, "Rise up, mercenaries." He raised his hand with the sword, and the inscription read, "The greatest distribution of hunting rewards in the history of the Shilla Guild, and that this guild is recruiting new faces." The driver said that if he were awakened, he would quit this job and become a warrior, and our hero asked if there was really any land for hunting here. The driver was shocked by Steve's question and said that he must have hit his head really hard. The man forgave him incredulously. Our hero didn't know if it was true, and he asked him to just tell him and not beat around the bush. The driver said that 10 years ago, the door to another world opened for the whole world. They call that day the Day of the Great Catastrophe. That day, the first rapprochement occurred and their world merged with many others, from which monsters began to emerge. They tried to shoot down the flying monsters with a helicopter, but 10% of the population was lost that day. Despite their weapons, the military could not stop the monsters advancing from all sides. And where the military failed, mercenaries took over. Those who disappeared in that disaster, or as they are now called the Awakened, began to be given licenses and paid for killing monsters, and guilds began to be created. Steve asked again about the mercenary license and asked how one gets it. The driver laughed at our hero's seriousness and said that an ordinary person would not get it. First, he needs to be awakened, and then pass the exam at the Bureau of the Awakened. Steve listened carefully to the driver's story and realized that it was all too complicated. Our hero arrived at the outskirts of the city when the sun was already setting. They drove along narrow streets, between tiny houses and cars parked on the side of the road. The taxi stopped near one of the houses and the driver said that they had arrived. He pointed to a 2-story brick house ahead and said that our hero needed to go there. Steve thanked the driver, who wished him a good time with his little brother. Our hero hesitantly approached the right house and stopped near it. He took a couple more steps towards the house, not believing that he would now see his younger brother. An old woman was standing in the window of the house cleaning the glass. She noticed Steve and looked at him in surprise. She leaned out of the window with displeasure and shouted to our hero who he was. The guy replied that he came to see Chad. The old woman froze when she heard the name and looked closely at Steve. The guy didn't understand why the old woman was silent and continued to wait for her answer. She suddenly got angry, called him names and said that he was still wet on the lips. How dare he address his elders so disrespectfully? Steve was confused by this answer and just looked at her questioningly. The old lady shouted that there was no Chad here and told him to get out of there. She closed the window with force, leaving our hero in deep bewilderment. Steve was surprised and thought that maybe he had come to the wrong place. Suddenly, an old woman's screams were heard from the window, saying that the creditors were already tired of coming here, and in response, a child's voice asked if that terrible man had returned. Steve was shocked and confused when he heard about the loan in the child's voice. Steve heard the old woman comfort the child by saying that he had not returned, and was surprised at this world that could so frighten a child who was not guilty of anything. Steve approached the door, hearing the old woman say that his father worked around the clock, but the debts only continued to grow. A child's voice asked Daddy about his debts, and the old woman answered no, asking him to continue eating. There was a mailbox hanging on the door, filled with some envelopes. Our hero pulled out one of them. He brought it closer, reading the name of the recipient and the sender. He saw that the letter was for Chad, informing him of his debts, and he couldn't believe that his younger brother was a debtor. Steve decided not to bother the old woman any longer and walked away, thinking about what he had seen. He thought that in the wild world the only law was force, but the laws on Earth are much more complex. He hung his head, thinking that if force could simplify the complex, then in the civilized world. He clenched his fist, realizing that in this world, money was power. Immersed in these heavy thoughts, our hero came to the Bureau of the Awakened. Without encountering any obstacles, he entered the building and went to explore it. At the entrance to the premises, he put his ID card and saw a message, "Does not match." The girl sitting at the checkpoint said that his application for a mercenary was cancelled because he did not meet the requirements. Steve asked in surprise how this could be, since he was an awakened F rank. The girl replied that he was indeed F rank, but he lacked awakened points. The guy asked how this could be, since he arrived here 2 weeks ago through the portal. The girl giggled and replied that ordinary people cannot pass through the portal, otherwise their body will be torn to pieces. Steve replied that he had felt similar pain before, and the girl asked him to leave such illusions at home. The girl said that he could go to school or earn points on the field, and after that he could come back when he truly awakened. Steve walked over to the reward wall, which stated that if goblins appeared on a field, they would be rewarded with $500 for each one. He read it again, not understanding what goblins were being talked about, looking tiredly at the inscription. And if you look at the city from above, you can see that high walls run through it. Our hero asked the taxi driver if these walls were everywhere, and he replied that they completely surround the city. Everything is visible in the Maps app. Steve didn't understand what application they were talking about, and the driver explained that the city is divided into 12 areas. There are many gates in the city that allow you to move between them, as well as gates leading to the fields. After listening to the driver, our hero realized that he urgently needed to buy a phone. The taxi stopped, having arrived at its destination. The driver said that they had arrived at the field, gate number 27, and our hero thanked him. The guy got out of the car and slowly walked towards the entrance to the gate he had arrived at. The gates were huge, and above the entrance hung a huge inscription, 27. Steve thought that once he passed through this gate, he would find himself in a hunting ground called a field. He walked slowly through the checkpoint, looking around. Soon, our hero approached two soldiers who were apparently guarding the entrance to the field. One of the soldiers asked what brought the guy here. Without thinking, with a firm look, our hero said that he had come to hunt. The soldier's face turned angry when he heard the boy's answer. He asked our hero to show him his mercenary license. Steve looked down and sadly replied that he didn't have one. The second soldier stood up and said that civilians were strictly prohibited from entering the field. Suddenly, there was a noise from the entrance and all three turned around, looking at its source. Inside the wall, at the entrance, someone was shouting to close the entrance, and the second one answered him that it was too late. An SUV drove out of the gate at full speed, knocking down all the barriers. And the driver of the SUV was attacked by an unknown creature, which sank its sharp fangs into his neck. The SUV did not slow down, but only picked up speed and began to wedge to the side. It still flipped over and crashed into a wall at full speed, which was able to stop the SUV. One soldier was shouting into the radio in a panic that he was calling a special squad, while the second one just looked towards the car in fear. The soldiers began to surround the SUV. The most senior one gave the order to line up and take their positions. There was some movement in the car, and the soldier shouted for everyone to take aim. The car window was smashed by a large hand with green skin, bleeding from cuts. A green creature with long, sharp fangs emerged from the car and growled. The soldier gave the order fire, and everyone who took aim pulled the trigger. A deafening burst of machine gun fire rang out, and almost all of them hit the creature sitting on the car. The creature growled in pain, its entire body riddled with bullets. The senior soldier gave the order to cease fire, and his order was repeated, stopping. One soldier shouted an all clear, the second concluded that the monster was dead, and the third ordered an ambulance to be called. One soldier asked where our hero had gone, and the second asked again if he was talking about the crazy guy who had arrived in a taxi. The soldier turned around in disbelief and asked if he had really left. The second one replied that he most likely ran away, frightened by what he saw. But our hero took advantage of the commotion and made his way through the gates. He walked along the road and asked a question into the void. Is this really a field? He focused on his sensations and realized that he could feel. The guy heard the sound, felt the smell. All of this was around and was acutely felt. He walked slowly across the field and thought that he still needed to buy a car. The guy climbed up a hill, looking at the destroyed buildings and wondering if all cities had really changed so much. Our hero looked into the distance, thinking that this couldn't be. He watched the sun set over the dilapidated buildings, watching the sky turn orange. Not much time passed, and now the sky darkened and the stars appeared. And Steve still stood there, thinking that this darkness was very familiar to him. He took a step forward, towards the cliff, not paying attention to the fact that there was nothing under his feet. He flew down, closing his eyes and thinking that now was the time for his hunt. With his arms outstretched, he flew from the high-rise building like a bird without wings. He dropped quickly to the ground, bending one knee, and his landing sent up clouds of dust. After landing, he thought his body felt a little heavier. His landing caused cracks in the asphalt, but Steve ignored them, looking ahead. He was still squatting with one knee on the ground, and then he put his hand on the ground, preparing to lunge. And this jerk was so swift that pieces of asphalt flew in different directions, and our hero rushed forward. He ran so fast that the eye could not keep up with him, and one could only see a column of dust left behind. Picking up speed, Steve jumped up, flying up a 9-story building at once. But in flight, he cursed and realized that his breathing had become out of control. The strength of the jump was not enough, and our hero caught his hand on the edge of the roof. He sat down, breathing normally, and wondered if the return had caused him to lose his strength. The guy stood on the edge of the building, his hands in his pockets, and the full moon illuminated his silhouette. Our hero closed his eyes, concentrated, and sniffed the smells. Suddenly, the guy felt something and turned to the side. He trusted his instincts and decided to start where they led him. Our hero jumped from the roof of the building he was standing on, kicking up dust from under his feet. He ran to the very building that he had noticed while standing on the hill. Approaching the desired building, our hero looked ahead with concentration. A sound came from the depths of the building, which caught his attention. A white wolf with a bloody skin, cornered by 3 monsters, pressed himself against the wall and growled. The largest monster growled contentedly, having cornered its prey. But the wolf had no intention of giving up and growled in response, and a challenge could be seen in his eyes. Our hero approached closer, trying to step as quietly as possible. He looked the wolf straight in the eyes and tried to convey his thoughts to him, asking if he wanted our hero's help. The wolf looked into the guy's eyes and the answer was clearly read in them that he agreed to help. But the monsters did not see our hero and began their attack, attacking the wolf. Looking at the attack, our hero only smirked. Steve rushed into battle and addressed the wolf, saying that they were all now his prey. With one blow of his fist to the head, he stopped the first monster and it fell to the ground. The next second, the monster's head split into 2 parts like an overripe watermelon. Suddenly, Steve saw a message box in front of him, which said, "Searching for your class." These windows started to increase and they said either "searching for your class" or "system error." Steve looked at these windows in shock, trying to understand what was happening and what kind of system error there was. The guy looked around irritably, not understanding what it was, reading the text of the windows out loud. He waved his hand and shouted, "Delete!" in an attempt to remove the annoying windows. In a split second, the windows disappeared and our hero found himself surrounded by a pack of monsters who were about to attack him. The bravest of the monsters growled and rushed to attack, baring his teeth. The next moment, his teeth shattered into tiny pieces, mixed with blood. With the next blow to the head, our hero knocked the other monster off his feet. He kicked another monster in the stomach and it doubled over from the force of the blow. One of the monsters, breathing heavily, climbed up the wall of the building. He was frightened by the strength of our hero and tried to run up the building. Suddenly, he heard some noise behind him and turned around, looking down. Our hero easily caught up with him and grabbed him by the head with one hand, stopping him. Steve threw the huge monster down with all his might and it fell to the ground with a wheeze. The monster fell on his head, breaking his neck, and our hero jumped off, flying down. Steve landed on 2 feet, next to the lifeless corpse of the monster. Suddenly, a window appeared before his eyes again with the inscription, "Your class is a druid. Resetting statistics is impossible." Also, the following messages appeared. Failed to obtain new abilities and fatal error. Looking at the last mistake, our hero gasped and said that he had forgotten about it. It was about 100 years ago in the jungle. He received a message that his constitution had improved by 1 after it had increased to the maximum level. He no longer received the message about the increase. Steve was surprised that there were even statuses on Earth and thought that perhaps because of this mistake his abilities had weakened. Another window appeared, which said that access to the store was open. Our hero was surprised by the store and thought that he had never seen anything like it before. Pressing the store button, he thought that this was probably awakening. It opened up to me, where it was indicated that our hero had 7 Velk points, a bottle of water cost 1 Velk, and a loaf of bread cost 2. Steve was upset that for 7 Velks you can only buy this, choosing water and a bun. Suddenly, a bottle of water and a bun materialized in front of him and seemed to float in the air for a while. Our hero was brought out of his thoughts by a sound. Someone was whining pitifully. Turning around, he saw the white wolf he was protecting. It was a female and she was bleeding, and a wolf cub was whining nearby. To avoid scaring them, our hero quietly approached the wolves. He dropped to one knee next to the she-wolf, looking at her sadly. Our hero stroked the she-wolf's muzzle and realized that she was dying. Apparently, it was poison. The she-wolf closed her eyes. Her breathing was heavy and ragged, and the wolf cub continued to whine. Steve noticed the wave and looked at it in surprise. He told the she-wolf that he had not come here to become a nanny and asked her to talk, but the she-wolf only breathed heavily. The wolf cub stared at our hero with huge, sad eyes, and he said that it didn't matter how sadly they looked at him. But he immediately gave up and thought that perhaps this meeting was destined for him. The guy had a bottle of water in the outside pocket of his jacket, but he reached into the inside pocket. He took out a store-bought rye bun and handed it to the wolf cub, offering him something to eat. While the wolf cub was eating, our hero returned to the battlefield, looking at the killed monsters. He counted the monsters and found that there were 7 of them. Steve thought sadly that a car would have come in handy here. The sun slowly rose over the abandoned city, illuminating everything around. Steve stood with his eyes closed as if soaking up the sunlight. And then he opened his eyes, now looking around the city in the daylight. Our hero was sitting under a large tree. The wolf cub was sleeping in his arms, and in front of him was the she-wolf's grave. He stroked the wolf cub and said that it was time for them to go. There was a commotion as you exited gate number 27. A string of cars were driving, ignoring the orders of the soldiers. The soldiers said that everyone would be quarantined first, and the man behind the wheel got angry and asked why he was taking so long and not letting cars through. Suddenly, something caught the attention of the drivers and soldiers, and they all looked at the gate in surprise. The soldier was finally able to see what the drivers were talking about and couldn't believe his eyes. Our hero walked with the wolf cub, and on his back were the bodies of 7 monsters, from which blood flowed. Everyone around was in shock. One driver was surprised that our hero was carrying everything on himself, and the second asked if he was the only one who defeated them. As our hero came closer, the soldier finally recognized him. Steve came to the already familiar room, where the girl refused to give him a mercenary license. The girl calculated that for 7 goblins he gets 350, 3 heliotrope minerals, 60, quarantine and vaccinations for the puppy, 200, leaving a total of $210,000. Our hero asked in surprise what kind of heliotrope it was. The girl showed the red stone and said that it was taken from the heart of the goblins. The cost depends on the size and the energy stored in it. This stone is valued at $20,000. The girl said that since our hero does not have a bank account, he will receive cash and advised him to open an account because he is capable. Looking at the cash in his hands, our hero thought that if he opened an account and hunted, then earning money would not be a problem. A white van pulled up to the store, and the driver greeted the owner. The owner said that he hadn't seen Chad for a long time and asked where he had gone. The guy replied that he had a part-time job. The man complained that the boy had suffered because of the money, and the boy replied that the work in the field was hard, but the salary was adequate. The man handed over a chocolate bar, saying that Bill liked those, and the boy handed over another bottle of beer, asking him to count that too. After driving away from the store, the van rolled on. Chad was pleased with the job he had done and whistled to himself, looking forward to returning home. A yellow taxi drove down the street, but the guy didn't notice. The white van continued to drive forward towards the end point of its route. Upon arrival, Chad got out of the car with a bag in his hands and, whistling, walked forward. Suddenly, someone behind him called his name and he turned around in surprise at the voice. But as soon as he turned around, the guy treacherously hit him from behind, causing Chad to fall and the contents of the bag to spill out. The guy with the baton in his hand said that he was glad to see him, and added that they were already scared that he had abandoned the child and run away. Chad's head was bleeding, and he looked in horror at the men standing in front of him. The quiet residential area was filled with sobs and the sound of blows. The man with the baton said that the boy's face had improved and lowered the baton onto his shoulder. Suddenly, he screamed that he had to come here many times, and Chad only apologized, enduring the pain from the blows. He handed over a wad of cash, saying that this was all he had managed to earn, $240,000. The man took the money and began to count. $160 for the month, $120 in interest, gasoline, dry cleaning. The man sat down on the steps and said that it was too little, and 2 guys stood behind Chad. Hearing these words, the guy began to shake, and he only helplessly clenched his fist. He started crying and said that he would get the money by any means necessary in 3 days. The man hit him again and asked if he knew how much interest would accumulate in 3 days. He swung again and said that if he deceived him again. But he didn't have time to finish speaking because someone called him out and called him a freak. Our hero approached the group of guys, accompanied by a new friend, a white wolf cub. The man looked at our hero suspiciously and asked who the hell he was. But Chad immediately realized who had approached him and stared at the guy in disbelief. Our hero was beside himself with anger and his eyes were sparkling, foreshadowing trouble, and Chad could only remain silent. Big brother. The guy got up from his knees, not believing that his older brother was standing in front of him, and the bandit with a club looked at him in surprise. Steve took a step, and then another, seeing only his little brother in front of him. His whole appearance was threatening. There was no smile on his face, and his gaze was focused. Our hero walked up to his brother and knelt down in front of him, looking into his eyes. The first thing he could say was his brother's name, Chad. He looked at Chad with warmth and tenderness, and asked if it was really him. Chad also didn't believe that Steve was in front of him and could only squeeze out the word brother. For some reason, Chad remembered the moment when he was beaten up by 4 bullies at school. One bully ordered his pockets to be searched. Chad shouted that he didn't have any more, but the other bully didn't believe his words. The beaten guy looked up and noticed Steve walking by and shouted at him. Our hero was walking with bags of garbage and stopped nearby. Looking at what was happening, Chad reached out his hands to him, started screaming and asking for help, and the bullies were surprised by his brother's appearance. But Steve completely ignored the situation and walked further towards the trash bins, throwing out the bags. Having thrown out the trash, he went back, not even looking at his younger brother screaming for help. The bullies ignored Steve and continued to beat up Chad, asking if friends weren't supposed to help with money. Chad endured all the beatings and watched with tears in his eyes as his brother walked away, abandoning him. The bully said that he was tired of shouting about his brother and asked if he was really his brother. Chad thought Steve was the big brother who would never help. Planes flew over the apartment building and the news announced that a large explosion was growing throughout the country. Chad was sitting at home watching the news, which showed that red domes had appeared all over the city and monsters were starting to crawl out of them. The viewing of the program was interrupted by a sudden knock on the door, and Chad turned around abruptly. He ran to the door in fear, hurrying to open it. The first thing Chad could say when he opened the door was, "Mom." There was a man and a woman standing outside the door, and they said it was good that the guy was home. Alas, it was not his mother, but his aunt and her husband who came to him. The aunt said that she couldn't get through to her parents and asked where Steve was. The man started saying that they needed to leave quickly but didn't finish the sentence. There was an explosion outside the door, throwing Chad back into the room. The explosion was so powerful that the door and wall broke, and stones flew into the room along with Chad. A monster with 3 heads on long necks appeared at the site of the explosion, and people around were screaming. Chad lay on the floor with his head broken, afraid to move, looking forward. And from the broken wall, a giant eye of a monster looked at him. But the guy was lucky, the monster didn't notice him, and the eye disappeared almost immediately. Sitting in this devastation, Chell thought that he didn't care, even if Steve disappeared from the face of the earth. And now, looking at his brother standing next to him, Chad realized that this was exactly how he had thought about him before. Steve smiled and said that Chad had aged in that time. Chad still couldn't believe his eyes as he looked at his brother. He thought he was already dead. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by a bandit who sat down next to him and asked if Chad had hit his head. He pointed at our hero and asked how this brat could be his older brother. These words angered Steve. He grabbed the bandit by the head and began to press him to the ground. The next second, our hero threw the bandit back and he flew off, doing a somersault in the air. Chad was shocked by this turn of events and looked at his brother in disbelief. The bandit flew back and knocked down the sticks standing near the wall in flight. The sticks fell with a crash on the bandit lying on the floor. The 2 guys who came with the bandit got angry at Steve as they watched their boss get hit. But our hero ignored them and asked Chad if he was hurt. He replied that everything was fine. Angry at being ignored, one of the boys yelled at Chad and Steve. He kicked our hero in the shoulder, shouting, "Did they really want to die here?" Steve didn't even move when the bandit's foot hit him in the neck. And at that very moment, the bandit flew off to the side with a scream, and his nanda was twisted into an unnatural position. He was doubled over on the floor, holding his leg and screaming in pain. Our hero was still sitting calmly and Chad jumped up. The second guy was afraid to even move and immediately guessed that Steve was one of the awakened ones. Our hero turned to the standing guy and told him to come here. The guy was seriously scared, started saying that he had not attacked anyone, and even tried to dissuade others from attacking. But Steve wasn't going to hit him. He put a wad of money on the floor and told the guy to take it. The boy was shocked by this turn of events and only stupidly mumbled something unintelligible, relaxing a little. Our hero looked at him with eyes full of hatred and told him to take the money and get out of here. The guy took the money and bowed, thanking our hero, and he and his brother walked away. Steve and Chad arrived at his house when it was already dark outside and the stars appeared in the sky. The same old lady who had recently sent our hero away looked at the guys in shock. Everyone stood silently. The old woman looked at the guys. Our hero lowered his head, Chad held a bag in his hands, and the wolf cub looked at the old woman with interest. The old lady asked incredulously if he was really his older brother, and Chad confirmed it with a smile and laughed. Our hero handed the old woman a bag and said that it was beef. She opened the package incredulously, looking at the contents, and then swore quietly. The old woman went ahead, saying that she should have told him earlier that he had a family, and added that he fell asleep while he was waiting. Upon entering the house, the wolf cub immediately became interested in the boy lying on the floor. He sat down next to the sleeping boy's head and began to sniff him with interest. Steve sat down next to the boy, asking if he was his son. Chad replied that his name was Bill, and he was his only treasure. Our hero asked what was wrong with his mother, and Chad replied that she chose a different life. Chad added that it was his fault, and the wolf cub stopped sniffing the boy and licked his head. Our hero offered Chad a drink, looking at him sadly. Chad didn't mind, and after a while they were already sitting in the diner and clinking glasses. Chad was amazed that his brother, who had gone missing, had returned unharmed and had even become the awakened one that was shown on TV. Steve asked seriously how much more Chad owed, and he replied that it was about $5,000. The guy smiled and said that he would be able to give everything back because now he had a job. Our hero asked incredulously what kind of job he had. Chad replied that he worked as a loader. He explained that the distances were long and no one would take on such dangerous work, so they paid him well. Steve asked if the truck was his, and the guy said it belonged to the old lady's son. She lent it to him. Our hero asked what her son was doing if he could give away the truck. The wolf cub woke the boy up by licking his face, and Chad told him that her son had died during transportation, and she looked after his son as if he were her own and became their savior. The boy woke up and looked at the puppy in surprise, but the puppy's surprise changed when he heard a voice from the kitchen. The boy ran into the kitchen with the puppy in his arms and exclaimed joyfully when he saw his dad. Chad broke into a happy smile, seeing that his son had woken up. Sitting down next to his dad, the boy asked who it was, and he replied that Steve was his uncle. The boy said hello, and shyly asked if he could play with the puppy. Steve, of course, gave his permission and broke into a touching smile, looking at the boy. Bill was having fun playing with the puppy, humming something cheerfully to himself. Chad smiled and said that the boy had wanted a puppy for a long time, which is why he was so happy. After thinking for a while, our hero suggested that Chad work together. Chad didn't expect such a proposal and asked in surprise what he meant. Steve said he would do everything himself, and Chad just needed to help him with the truck. Chad was surprised and asked what job our hero was talking about. With a sinister smile, Steve said he was talking about hunting monsters. Chad didn't believe what he heard and asked again what Steve meant. The next day, our hero came to the Bureau of the Awakened. The girl looked at the documents with delight. She said that now our hero was registered as awakened and immediately increased his level. The guy received the card, having read Druid rank F on it. The girl said that now he will receive money directly to the card. The girl handed over a box with a phone and said that it was a gift from them, and once again congratulated him on receiving the rank of awakened. She said that Steve needs to download a special application, after which he will receive information about hunting and new locations. The girl said that if he caught a lot of monsters, he would increase his rank to E and receive more bonuses, and added that if he was just as persistent, the land could be saved. She added that our hero can open a status window. There were errors in the system, but they managed to fix them. A status window appeared in front of our hero, and he began to study them with surprise. Steve didn't understand why some of the numbers, like harmony, were so low and decided that it would be hard to raise them. A white van sped along the highway against the backdrop of mountains and the rising sun. Chad's phone, which was attached to the panel, rang and the screen showed, "Brother." The guy congratulated our hero on purchasing the phone and asked if he had already registered with the Bureau. He said that he would be there soon. He had one last delivery left and he was going straight to our hero. Chad learned that our hero only had to pass the mercenary exam. Our hero walked through the city, talking on the phone, and said that first they needed to pay off all their debts. Brother said that he is still level F, and it will be difficult for him to kill monsters. But our hero didn't listen to the end and hung up, slightly angering his brother with this action. Chad wondered if it was really his brother, because his personality had changed so much. Steve was walking through the city, looking at his phone. He received a notification about bonuses for monsters, and he just passed by one portal. There was a big traffic jam at the entrance to the gate. Drivers were cursing at the slow speed of those ahead and asking them to go faster. In the stream of cars, there was a green SUV not attracting attention to itself. There were guys in white jackets sitting inside, and the guy in the passenger seat was looking tiredly out the window. In the back seat, 3 young men were trembling as if they were afraid of the coming battle. The driver asked the boys to calm down because they were awake and had nothing to be afraid of. They all said that if they passed this test, they would be accepted into the Shinra Guild as core members and promised to do whatever it took. The guy in the passenger seat got angry when he heard the words of the guys in the back seat. He thought that these guys had no abilities, that they got here thanks to their rich parents, and he decided that they would fail again. The soldier at the checkpoint looked at the monitor screen and called the next one. He looked up at the man who had approached and looked at him in surprise. Our hero stood alone, in a brand new tracksuit without any equipment. The soldier asked if he was alone and asked him to show his pass card. Our hero placed the card on the terminal and it lit up green. The soldier read that our hero's name was Steve and that he had the rank of F. Our hero went to the entrance of the gate and the soldier tried to stop him, asking if Steve knew that it was dangerous there. Something caught the attention of the man sitting in the front seat of the SUV. He noticed how our hero walked towards the gate. The soldier wondered if they could send the guy alone since he didn't have any equipment. Another soldier recognized our hero and said that it was he who killed 7 goblins at gate number 27 yesterday. The men in the green SUV overheard this conversation and were surprised. One was shocked that he was going to enter there like that, and the other decided that our hero had gone crazy, going into the gate without equipment. A soldier approached the men in the green SUV and said that the system was a little frozen, but now they could drive through. The man in the passenger seat ordered the driver to step on the gas, surprising him with this order. He shouted for him to quickly catch up with our hero. The driver understood the order and rushed after Steve, who was already turning the corner. The green SUV sped through the gate, chasing our hero. The driver turned the corner sharply in the same direction Steve went. Both men were surprised when the car turned the corner and stopped. There was no one around the corner. The driver did not understand how this could happen, because they almost caught up with the guy. He looked around, trying to understand where our hero had disappeared to. The man, with a sinister smile, thought that he had caught a great catch. Meanwhile, our hero was already running through the forest, raising clouds of dust. He ran as fast as he could, taking long strides. Having run through the forest, the guy stopped, putting his leg forward. Our hero put his hands on his hips and tried to catch his breath. This run was a test, and Steve realized what state his body was in now. He opened the characteristics menu, realized that he really had become weaker, and decided that he needed to return to training. Suddenly, he heard some sounds ahead. Our hero concentrated, trying to understand where they were coming from. Listening closely, he made out human speech. Someone was saying angrily, "Come on, attack, coward." Continuing to listen, Steve thought that they were probably fighting with swords. The second voice shouted, "Do you want to die?" Steve determined which direction the voices were coming from by looking to the left. His lips spread into a predatory smile. He thought that this was not a fight between monsters but between awakened ones. He could not miss such a spectacle. Someone's hand holding a sword flew off with a fountain of blood and someone screamed in pain. One man shouted, "Attack!" running forward. Our hero stood on top of a ruined building and watched the fight. One shouted, "Attack!" and the second asked whose hand to cut off next. Steve watched the sword fight in silence, and someone below shouted, "Stop talking nonsense, go away!" The 3 guys in green were surrounded by a group of men in brown who looked like bandits. One of them shouted at them to drop their things and leave, but the men in green did not want to give up. Steve watched the men and thought that none of them wanted to fight. A blue pickup truck stopped near the collision and a man got out of it. Putting his foot on the ground, the man asked why they were taking so long to deal with them. The guy in green looked at the man who appeared with fear. The man was big and muscular and said that there were only 3 of them. Why were they taking so long? Someone recognized him and said that it was Sheik, for whose head there was a reward of 400 million. This information was heard not only by the guys below, but also by our hero. He was surprised to hear that the man was worth 400 million. The guys in green were scared and said it was a sea-level robber. Sheik. The guys in brown said they should have surrendered while they had a choice, now they're dead. The man rubbed his hands and said that he was that same Sheik, and offered to catch him if he had the courage. The guys in green were scared, convinced that it was that same Sheik in front of them. One of the guys asked if they would let them go if they left everything. Sheik suddenly ran forward and said that it would not be interesting anymore. One of the guys in green asked fearfully to wait. He said that he didn't care about their things anymore, and at that moment our hero decided to go down, simply jumping from the roof. He landed with a thud between the guys in green and Sheik, without even taking his hands out of his pockets. The man was clearly surprised by Steve's sudden appearance and stopped. The 3 guys in green were also surprised by the appearance of our hero, and the guys in brown looked at Steve with fear, asking what was going on. When the dust cleared under our feet, he took a step forward. Sheik asked who he was. Did he really imagine himself to be an angel descended from heaven? But our hero ignored his questions and asked if it was true that 400 million. The man was a head taller than our hero and asked who he was. Steve responded threateningly that he just needed money. The guys in brown were in shock, not understanding what was wrong with the guy, and decided that he just wanted to die. And Sheik, hearing our hero's answer, only laughed loudly. The guy in green was surprised by Steve's answer and Sheik's reaction to his answer. With a sinister smile, Sheik said that it was unlikely that our hero was from the commission. But Steve didn't answer and just looked at him questioningly. The man's eyes suddenly turned red and he said that it would be good if he would mind his own business. Without taking his eyes off the man, Steve froze in surprise. His body began to glow slightly red, and Steve couldn't understand what was happening to him. One of the guys in green knew what was happening and his face was covered in sweat from fear. Sheik replied that Steve looked into his eyes for 5 seconds. He chuckled and said that now our hero couldn't move. Steve clearly didn't expect such an answer and still looked at the man with confusion. Sheik turned to the guys in green and asked what they were waiting for, ordering them to grab him. The boys became bolder when Sheik appeared and went to Steve, asking why he interfered during their conversation. The guys in green still stood there, frightened with their weapons pointed forward. But, to everyone's surprise, our hero was able to hit Sheik. The guys in brown couldn't believe their eyes, and the team in green was surprised that Steve was able to hit the man. But the one who was most surprised was Sheik himself, not understanding how our hero was able to hit him. Meanwhile, Steve clenched his second fist, preparing to strike. He bared his teeth in some kind of animalistic grin and said that it was just magic. Sheik was frightened by our guy's reaction and looked at him silently, clenching his teeth. "You're funny," Steve said, raising his fist and his eyes glowing blue. Sheik's red eyes widened in fear at our hero's words. Our hero bared his teeth in some kind of animalistic grin and said that it was just magic. Sheik was frightened by our guy's reaction and looked at him silently, clenching his teeth. "You're funny," Steve said, raising his fist and his eyes glowing blue. Sheik's red eyes widened in fear at our hero's words. The man roared, "Stop," and his eyes glowed red again. Surprisingly, our hero froze and his fist stopped a few centimeters from the man's face. With a smug smile, Sheik said that our hero, it turns out, is not so simple. Sheik pulled a knife from the sheath hanging on his belt. He swung his weapon and told our hero that he should never let his guard down. But as soon as he said this, his nose collided with our hero's knee. The knife slipped from the man's hands, and our hero asked, "What else could he do besides this pathetic trick? Is there anything more interesting?" And he swung his fist, aiming at the face. The man tried to use that magic again and began to say a word but did not manage to finish. Steve silenced the man with a hook, knocking out his teeth. The next blow landed in the solar plexus, knocking all the air out of the man's lungs. And Steve's final kick was aimed at the ribs, finishing the man off. Our hero grabbed his jacket with his hand, making a grab. And with one precise movement, he threw the rather large man over himself. Sheik flew backwards, crashing into the window. As a result of such a blow, the glass in the window was knocked out and the fragments flew in all directions. Without even losing his breath, with a smile on his face, our hero said that it was too easy. The guys in green didn't believe that our hero was able to defeat Sheik and wondered who he was. Finished with Sheik, Steve turned to the guys in brown who were holding their swords in front of them. He asked if they wanted to attack, and the boys said no. He just misunderstood them. Steve gave them the order to gather in one direction and the guys rushed to the designated place. Our hero turned to the guys in green and asked if they had a rope. One of the guys said with a smile that he had a rope. Steve asked the guys in brown who were gathered in one place how much they would pay for them. The guys started vying with each other to say that there was no reward for them, that they were only paying for Sheik and in general he had threatened them. Sheik came to his senses and listened in shock as the guys said that having turned Sheik in, our hero was already rich. Tears involuntarily appeared in the eyes of the beaten man, and he angrily called the guys Judases. He said that the guys, like leeches, stuck to him and sucked out their share, traitors. Our hero was surprised, looking at the man who had come to his senses, and asked if he had really woken up already. The guys in brown started to shut Sheik up and said that his place was in prison. Steve asked if they needed these people, and the guys in brown confirmed that they didn't need them. The guys in green couldn't take it anymore and said that they were all lying, and if our hero brought them together, he would receive an increased reward. But the guys in brown started arguing, saying that they were just servants. Sheik turned to our hero, asking if he was not being oppressed by the laws of the government. Steve turned around irritably, looking questioningly at the man. Sheik said that here he is free and can do whatever he wants, and if Steve puts him down, then for him he will be the king. But this speech was interrupted by the approach of our hero's sneaker. He kicked the man hard in the face and told him to sleep a little longer. Sheik passed out, leaving a sneaker sole imprint on his face. Having dealt with the man, our hero turned to the guys in brown. He asked the guy in green if there was a reward for them too, and the guy replied that they were all criminals. Realizing that they had been found out, the guys became depressed, not knowing what to do next. Steve said that there were too many of them, and one of the guys in green said that they had a car, making our hero happy. With an evil smile on his face, our hero wished the guys good night. The sounds of blows and screams echoed through the forest, and some men still did not give up and said that there would be no reward for them. The red pickup truck sped along the road, through green forests and ruined buildings. And in the trunk of the pickup, like firewood, were loaded men in brown, wrapped in ropes. The guy behind the wheel said that he was very grateful to our hero for saving him, but he replied that he didn't want to save them. The guys in the back seat said that despite this, he helped them, and now Steve is their savior. Not feeling any joy from these words, our hero agreed, since they insisted so much. On the way, our hero asked what abilities the driver had, and he replied that he had the skills of a fencer, stalker, and scout. Steve was surprised that the guy had 3 skills, and he replied that initially he had one, and he was able to master the other 2 in the process. Our hero pondered this information, wondering that skills could be acquired. The driver was surprised and thought how the guy could not know about such a small thing. Remembering how Schick had shouted "stop," our hero thought that it would be a good idea to learn some kind of magical skill. Suddenly, our hero's attention was drawn to something ahead. Through the buildings in the forest, a huge blue dome could be seen, standing out against the pink sky. The red pickup truck was racing forward, right in the direction of that blue dome. Looking at it, our hero asked the driver if this was the portal. This question greatly surprised the driver. He replied that this was a first-level portal, the easiest one, and it was their original target. Looking at the portal, our hero said that he was sorry that he did not have a mercenary license, otherwise he could go in. The driver asked in surprise if our hero really didn't have a license. Not noticing the surprise in the guy's question, our hero replied that he really didn't have a license yet. The driver continued to glance at Steve in surprise, thinking that when the portals opened, the military would open fire. After their attack, only a small portion of the monsters that came out of the portal remain on the field. On the field of such a first-level portal, the experience is small, and to raise it, you need to kill stronger monsters and accumulate experience. And for this you need a second-level portal, but such portals contain terrible monsters. That's why the guy was surprised how Steve, who hadn't even passed through the first-level portal, was able to defeat a level C Schick. Our hero finally noticed the driver's look of surprise and asked what was going on. He couldn't find the words and could only ask about the level of our hero. Steve replied that his level was F, and the driver almost drove off the cliff when he heard that. Our hero looked at the driver and said that he had a request. The driver tensed up a little when he heard these words. The military stood next to the portal, and nearby there was a gathering of equipment, tanks and ambulances. At first, only the silhouette of a man in the haze appeared in the portal. And when it cleared, that same guy from the green SUV appeared. There were 4 people following him, one guy holding the other and saying that they were almost there. The blonde-haired boy moaned that his arm hurt, but instead, there was a bloody stump. Coming closer to the military, the guy called the medics so that they could help the guy quickly. The guy walking in front said that licenses were being handed out to everyone and that guilds with such members should be destroyed immediately. Another guy tried to calm him down, adding that all the guys were like that lately. The man was not reassured by this answer and he cursed angrily, clenching his teeth. He thought that rich kids just buy monsters through brokers and just finish them off. After that, they hire bounty hunters and raise their levels with them, and then join guilds, completing missions. But in such situations, casualties cannot be avoided when the monster turns out to be too strong. The guy was the captain of this group and said that he was already tired of life, where money reigns, and his partner suggested calming down and having a drink. Approaching the military, they asked why it was so noisy in the first-level zone. Maybe something had happened. The captain asked what had happened, and the soldier replied that 10 robbers had been caught, and that among them was a C-level robber, Sheik, who has a bad reputation. The captain was surprised that someone was able to catch Sheik. He said that he was probably captured by someone of high rank, but the soldier replied that he was captured by a boy of F rank. The captain and his partner did not believe what they heard and asked how. The soldier replied that he had simply beaten him up, and that Sheik had a broken nose, cheekbones, and ribs on both sides. For some reason, the captain immediately remembered how our hero entered the gate alone. He loudly asked the soldier where that man was. The soldier replied that it seemed like he had just entered the portal. The captain rushed towards the portal, ignoring his partner's cries. He ran and thought that he had to see for himself, and if it was true, it was incredible. The captain ran towards the soldier standing at the portal. He ran closer and loudly called out his rank. The soldier with headphones turned around in surprise and looked at the captain and asked what happened. The captain asked the guy who caught Sheik whether he entered the portal or not. And at this time, our hero and one of the guys he saved came out of the portal. Steve said that it really didn't hurt, and that the clothes didn't disappear after going through the portal. The guy said that things made in our world can't be transferred through the portal, and these clothes are made from materials from different worlds and cost a fortune. Our hero's gaze was drawn to something to the side and he turned around in surprise. He saw a large glowing rectangle behind him and asked what it was. The guy turned around and said that there was a door to the portal. He said that the portal inside was divided into 38 more sub-portals, and they entered the 24th. Suddenly, the very portal that our hero was asking about disappeared. He asked why the portal had disappeared, and the guy replied that they needed to clear the place and then the portal would appear. Steve asked if they really had to kill everyone, but the guy replied that they only had to kill the boss. Our hero began to warm up and told the guy to wait here, adding that he would be quick. But the guy was against it and asked how he could wait here. But Steve no longer listened to him and prepared to run, making a dash forward. A hole formed in its place, raising columns of dust. The guy looked after him, wondering what kind of person he was. Maybe he was one of those. But then he decided that the person who had defeated Sheikah Rance S would easily be able to handle the first-level dungeon. Suddenly it dawned on the guy that he had forgotten to tell him important information. He didn't tell where the door would appear after killing the boss, and that he needed to have time to get out. The guy ran forward, thinking that if Steve didn't manage to get out, he would stay here forever. And behind the portal, a soldier in a booth was wondering what to do after reading the sign that door 24 was closed. The soldier told the captain that the door to the 24th portal had just closed. The captain cursed and became angry at this news. In the forest, beyond portal number 24, a light fog was spreading. 3 monsters stood between the trees and looked around warily, holding their weapons at the ready. One of the monsters heard something and turned around, growling. But the next moment he was already knocked down by one blow, which smashed his head. The second monster was hit in the stomach and flew to the side. Our hero hit the third monster in the stomach and he fell, dropping his knife. Raising the knife, our hero said that they had a pretty good weapon. He squatted down and plunged the knife into the chest of one of the monsters. His face was hidden by a bandage, but even through it the boy could smell the stench of monsters. Our hero took the red stone out of the monster's chest and began to examine it. He said that the stone was only in one of the 3 monsters, but money is not a problem for him now. He opened the stats menu and thought that it was more important to level up now. The guy caught up with our hero and came to the battlefield where the dead monsters lay. Walking past the corpses, the guy was surprised at how many of them Steve had managed to cut out. Suddenly the guy's eyes lit up white, and he thought that he needed to find him quickly. The skill helped him determine which direction our hero was in, and he went there. And Steve stood among the killed monsters and looked at the window with information about the levels. He read that with the points he had, he could buy 2 skills: Beast Taming and Tree Spirit Summoning. He opened the description of the Beast Taming skill, but suddenly 2 monsters jumped on our hero from above, holding weapons. Steve sensed them immediately and turned around, calculating his movements. With one hand, he struck the monster in the face as it flew closer, and with the elbow of his other hand, he hit the second monster. The beaten monsters flew in different directions, and our hero was left without a single scratch. Suddenly, a window appeared before his eyes that there were now 545 achievements. Breaking the jaw of another monster, our hero was glad that his level had been raised. Suddenly, a message about an unrecoverable error appeared and additional synchronization continues. Steve thought with disappointment that there was another error, but synchronization occurred for the first time. He opened the menu with all his statuses, seeing that his level had risen by 1. He also noticed that his status had risen slightly. The guy unlocked the skills and decided that he would buy Summon Tree Spirit for 100 points. He received a new ability and decided to use it immediately by summoning a spirit. A small ball surrounded by bright light appeared in front of him. Inside this ball was a small creature that looked like a fairy with wings. Our hero remembered that he had already seen her in the jungle, but then he thought it was an ordinary firefly. Steve turned to the tree spirit and asked him to find the remaining goblins. The spirit accepted the order and the glowing ball flew forward. The ball froze and a beam of light appeared from it, directed at the tree and the ground. The guy realized that she was reading the memory of trees and vegetation and transmitting it to him, but it was happening very slowly, probably because of the low level. After reading the descriptions of other skills, our hero decided to buy himself the reconnaissance skill for the remaining points. Crouching down, Steve placed his hand on the ground and activated the reconnaissance skill. His eyes lit up white and he said, "Tracking." Our hero closed his eyes, reading the information and could not understand why it was only about the dead. Suddenly, something caught his attention and Steve became wary. Deep in the forest, he heard some sounds and realized that this was where he needed to go. Listening closely, he realized that it was not a goblin and grinned sinisterly. Steve jerked from his seat and rushed forward, through the forest to the right place. He climbed a small rise and looked around, searching for the right place. At that moment, a goblin of enormous size tried to stab the boy with whom our hero came. Steve turned to the guy and asked what he was doing there. The guy was happy when he saw that our hero had arrived, while the goblin was aiming a knife at the guy's face. Our hero got angry and said that he asked the guy to wait for him. The guy looked at Steve with fear and, clearing his throat, said that he was being attacked, as if asking for help. Steve smiled, saying he understood the situation. The knife was getting closer to his face, and when it was almost touching the skin, the boy screamed, asking for help. And at the very last moment, when the knife had almost pierced the skin, the goblin turned around. At the last moment, he managed to put up a shield, which saved him from our hero's kick. But the shield did not provide complete protection, because the force of the blow sent the monster flying to the side. But the goblin was not going to give up, and putting his shield forward, he prepared to attack. But he didn't have time to do anything when our hero's foot hit him from below, breaking his jaw. The monster flew forward, crashing into a rock, sending shards flying. But Steve didn't stop there and rushed forward towards the monster. The goblin was bleeding, but still alive, and bared his teeth at the approaching guy. Our hero jumped up and swung his knife high, preparing to strike. He lowered the knife into the monster's chest, and with the blow, he saw a message that a new level had been reached. The next message said that another 120 experience points had been received, and he thought that they were being generous with the points. And the guy who watched this battle was shocked by Steve's skills. Having dealt with the monster, Steve turned to the boy and asked if the door would open now. The guy was at a loss and stuttered, saying, "Yes, of course, the door should open now." The door actually opened, and the boys walked through the portal back to their world. As they walked past the military vehicles, the soldiers standing nearby noticed them. One of the soldiers asked if he had caught Schick. The second confirmed it and said that it was he the captain was looking for. The soldier said that everything should be reported to the captain, but the second soldier suddenly laughed. He looked at the monitor in confusion and asked if it was really possible to finish everything in such a short time. And at this time, the boy said goodbye to our hero, saying that he would return to his group, and our hero said that the work was excellent. As Steve left the storage room where he had left his things, he realized he was hungry. The captain approached him and greeted him, and our hero asked who he was. The man said with a smile that he was from the Scylla Guild. The commander of the 27th attacking party was Morris, and offered to talk. The men came into the diner and sat down at a table next to each other, ordering coffee. Our hero looked at the business card, asking again about Scylla's guild, and the man nodded in satisfaction. The man with a friendly smile invited our hero to join the guild, adding that it offered excellent conditions for growth. But Steve was clearly not interested in this proposal, and he refused, calmly sipping his coffee. The man did not believe that he had been refused and, frowning, looked questioningly at our hero. He thought about how he could really refuse him entry into the guild, and decided that he was trying to push his own value. Morris didn't give up and said that if Steve was already a member of the guild, then they were ready to make him a formal offer to join. But our hero was not attracted by this offer either, and he refused again. Starting to get angry, the man said that even though the guild was in 4th place, it didn't mean anything among the top guilds, and assured that if he was offered something, he was ready to make the best offer. After listening to the man, Steve abruptly put the cup of coffee on the table. With a melancholy smile, he said that he simply did not want to work under someone else. Morris didn't know what to say to this and just looked at the guy. Having finished this conversation, Steve went to his younger brother's house. Our hero entered his brother's room, but there was no one there. He looked around and said out loud that there was probably no one at home. Steve climbed up to the roof of the house and lay down on the table, enjoying the warm sun. He thought that probably his brother and his son were spending time together. An old woman with a basket of laundry on her head climbed onto the roof and asked why the young man was lounging there during the day. Steve smiled and invited Granny to join him, saying it was perfect weather for a nap. In response, the old woman asked if he couldn't see that she was busy hanging out the laundry. After looking at her, Steve stood up and began to help hang out the laundry, and the old woman occasionally made comments to him. Suddenly, she became serious and asked if he was really Chad's older brother. Our hero smiled and said that it was true without looking up from hanging out the laundry. Hearing the answer, the old woman became cheerful and said with a smile that it was amazing, asking if he had really grown up. Steve pretended to be angry and said that he had grown up a lot, and the old lady added that he was a rascal. The old woman added that it would be strange if he remained the same after the monsters attacked, people died, and the world turned upside down. She said thoughtfully that since Steve had returned after 10 years, he should take care of himself so as not to hurt him. Our hero realized that the old woman was very worried about his brother and smiled at her gratefully. Steve said that everything was fine. He wouldn't die that easily. And the old lady replied that those who say that usually die first. Chad and his son returned home, and on the way, they met an old lady. The guy asked if Steve was upstairs, and she replied that he was there. The boys went upstairs and joyfully greeted our hero, and the wolf cub ran ahead, wagging his tail. Steve put an envelope on the table, and Chad asked in surprise what it was. Our hero answered with a smile that there were $40,000 and asked his brother to pay off his entire debt. Chad took the envelope, not believing that there could be so much money in it, and asked where his brother got such a sum. But Steve decided not to answer this question and suggested that the guy go and give the money, and then they would have dinner together. Chad was touched by this act and asked our hero how he could repay his kindness. Steve looked at Bill as he happily played with the puppy and said that he didn't need anything, asking him to come back soon. Chad turned his back to his brother and, wiping away tears, said that he understood everything, and our hero conspiratorially called out to him. The guy turned around in surprise and tears still glistened in his eyes. Steve smiled and asked if he could pick up some meat and booze on the way. Chad smiled happily, promised to buy everything, and asked his brother to look after Bill. While Bill was playing with the puppy on the roof, our hero opened the menu with his statistics. He saw the inscription in the window. "The object is fixed. Choose a name." Steve asked the boy what to name the puppy, and without hesitation, he named him Pecky. Steve repeated the name and liked it, so he said with a smile, "Okay, it'll be Pecky." He turned to the puppy and said that from now on he was Pecky, and the window showed that the puppy was level 1 and his combat power was 3. Steve threw the ball and ordered the puppy to bring it, and he rushed after the ball like a bullet. Amazing Bill, with such great speed. The boy praised Pekka and called him to him, and he came running, happily wagging his tail. The sun was already setting when the boy and the puppy lay down on the table, tired after playing, and the boy asked why his dad was gone for so long. Steve looked down and said that he thought he was getting there. He saw that his brother's truck was parked in the parking lot, but for some reason his brother didn't come out and he offered to go and meet him. The boy ran first and, seeing his father's silhouette, joyfully called him. But as they got closer, they noticed that Chad was covered in blood. It was flowing from his head, nose, and mouth. The boy froze, not understanding what was happening, and only quietly whispered, "Dad?" The boy could barely stand on his feet and could only say his son's name when his legs gave way. The beaten boy fell to the ground, bleeding, and Bill rushed towards him, screaming. Steve was confused at first, but the boy's scream seemed to bring him back and he began to get angry, listening to the boy ask what was going on. In one of the residential areas, on the first floor of an apartment building, there was a sign, "Trust, Instant, Interest-Free Loan." Inside, men in formal suits were sitting and playing cards, and one of them was sitting at a computer. The man at the computer asked what the betting was like this week, and the guy next to him gave him some numbers. He asked if there was a competition between Mikhail and Jorvins this week, and the guy said yes, and everyone was focused on Mikhail. He asked if Beyond the Horizon was in trouble and reminded him of what had happened last time, how one player had turned the whole game around. Suddenly, the men's attention was drawn to a noise outside the door and they froze tensely. The man at the computer shouted to the men sitting there, "What's outside?" He got angry and sent them to check what was going on behind the door. The door to the office swung open and the silhouette of a man appeared on the threshold. Everyone in the room froze, watching the man who appeared. He took another step forward, and in the light it turned out that his face was covered in blood. He said that it seemed they had problems. Suddenly, someone grabbed his head from behind, causing the man to scream in horror. Someone pulled the man back and his body immediately disappeared from the doorway, flying back. The confusion of the men in the room turned to anger, and they began asking what was going on. Then it dawned on them that this was an imposition, and they rushed forward, wanting to find out what was happening. The body of the man who had entered the room earlier suddenly fell on the one walking first. The two of them flew into the depths of the room and fell onto the table, scattering cards in all directions. The surviving men grabbed their weapons and began shouting for the attacker to come into the room. At that moment, a silhouette of a man appeared in the doorway and only his eyes were visible, shining with a blue glow. Entering the room, Steve broke down the front door with one hand and lifted it above his head. The men in suits looked at the guy with fear, and one of them called our hero a psycho. After these words, a torn-off door flew at them, knocking down men like toys and breaking everything in its path. The door smashed the windows and a hail of glass fragments flew at the standing men. Steve went on a rampage, smashing everything around him and mercilessly throwing everyone to the floor. He stepped on the head of one of the men, and a pool of blood from his broken nose spread across the floor. The man at the computer looked at what was happening in horror and was shaking at the sight of our hero. Furious, Steve walked towards this man, while all the other men in the room were already lying unconscious. The man and his assistant watched in fear as our hero walked towards them. He asked his assistant in fear if he knew who this guy was. The assistant said that he seemed to be awakened, and it seemed that he even began to recognize him. But the man didn't have time to finish speaking, because our hero kicked the table at which they were sitting. Both men screamed in pain and fear, and one of them yelled that his leg was pinned. Steve threw the monitor and keyboard off the table, climbed onto it, and, squatting down, asked the man if he was Mr. Scott. The man was scared. He swore and said that everything was right. He was Mr. Scott. The man's face was covered in sweat, and he asked our hero who he was. Steve threw the envelope of money on the table with force and said that he had come to pay off Chad's debt. The man was shocked by what he heard and said that Steve had definitely gone down in the morning. He asked if an awakened being could just attack an innocent person and said that he wouldn't get away with it. But instead of answering, our hero hit him hard in the face with his palm and several teeth flew out of his mouth. Steve slapped him on the other cheek and asked why he did that to a man who came to pay him a debt. He continued to beat the man and said that he could have gratefully taken the money and gone peacefully about his business. The man's face was spinning from side to side from the blows, and Steve, not being half-hearted, was asking why he had decided to cross the line and start showing off. The man began to beg for mercy after another blow to the cheek. Steve's eyes lit up as he asked if the man would pay off the debt quietly and peacefully, or if he should be beaten until he died. Tears flowed from the man's eyes, and he, lisping because of his missing teeth, said that he would solve everything and do everything. Steve sat on the edge of the table, and every man in the room was on his knees, his head bowed. They all shouted in unison that the debt of the esteemed Mr. Chad had been paid. But our hero was not satisfied with this answer, and he ordered them to repeat it louder. The men shouted even louder that it was good that the debt of the respected Mr. Chad had been paid. Steve said that if he met them again, they would die, and advised to avoid meeting him. The men fell to the floor in a bow and said they would keep that in mind. Everyone looked tensely at the floor and heard our hero jump off the table. Mr. Scott also bowed his head and listened as our hero's steps became more and more distant. He was furious about what had happened, and his eyes showed a furious desire to avenge the humiliation. One of the men raised his head and looked around and said that the guy had already left. Grinning angrily with his bloody mouth, the man said into the void, "Does Steve really think that he has no connections?" and added that these two are already corpses. At this time, Captain Morris entered the office where the two men were sitting. He told the manager that it was urgent. The guy at the computer asked him what he wanted, and Morris asked him to look at something. Our hero's profile opened on the monitor screen, and Morris said that he was a top-level newcomer. The guy was surprised because he only had an F rank and he was only registered today. Morris said it was doubly cool and asked the disgruntled guy to get information about him. He tried to find something, but the monitor screen showed a message that access was denied. Both were very surprised that access to our hero's data was closed. The guy asked who he was, and Morris asked him to look for information about him illegally. The guy dug around for a while and finally said with satisfaction that he had succeeded. Both were surprised by the story of our hero, which they managed to find, and the boy asked if he was really at level F. The guy was also surprised why access to information about Steve was blocked at all. He also noticed that the information did not indicate what class our hero belonged to, and this aroused even more interest. Morris asked the boy to test our hero's skills, but after checking the information, the guy could only ask in shock, "What kind of bread and water is this?" Morris didn't understand the guy's answer and asked him again what he meant. The guy asked the man in confusion if Steve had really caught Sheik using only bread and water. They immediately imagined our hero throwing buns and bottles of water at the huge man, and he asking him to stop. The guy also noted that they say that our hero disappeared 10 years ago, and added that this is very suspicious. The kid suggested that maybe Steve was a government agent, and Morris said that maybe he was a hunter. The man did not want to believe that in the end, our hero turned out to be a statesman. The boy told him to give up because he was almost 100% a government agent. The guy smugly said that he had already found out everything about him, and Morris thought that this was precisely why he was so cold. The man sighed heavily and suggested that the guy go have a coffee. As he left the office, Morris still couldn't calm down and asked why the agent needed to participate in this. The man asked the boy to continue following him, and the boy again asked the man to surrender. Morris got angry and said that he was just asking to keep an eye on him in case something strange happened, but the guy stubbornly refused. Not realizing that they were trying to find out something about him, our hero came to the hospital to visit his brother. He entered the room and asked his brother if he was awake yet. Chad looked out the window. His head was bandaged, but overall he looked cheerful and very happy to see his brother. Steve put out a bunch of different fast food, and Chad asked why he bought so much stuff again, to which our hero replied that it would make him get better faster. Our hero asked his brother if he was feeling better, and the guy replied that they would remove his bandages tomorrow. Chad asked if our hero had an exam tomorrow, and he said that it was correct. The guy said that if he passes the exam and joins the guild, it will be great. Steve closed his eyes, remembering that in the jungle he was the king of the forest. He thought that after this, would he be able to live in this world under someone's protection? Chad knew what our hero was thinking, and suggested that he find out about the guilds for him. But Steve said that this was not necessary because he planned to create a guild himself. The brother was surprised by the news that our hero wanted to create his own guild and not join one. The day of the exam arrived and it was held in the building of the Bureau of the Awakened. The blonde with the katana, Jean, was also in this building and was walking down the corridor. Suddenly, a man from behind called her name and the girl turned around in surprise. The man was the head of the department and Jean asked him what he wanted. The man asked the girl if she had any problems lately, and she asked in surprise why he thought so. The man shouted that there had already been 2 riots in the girl's assigned quarter, and if a portal had opened there now, the city would no longer exist. The girl was not very surprised by this question, and she asked if they really couldn't do anything without her participation. The man went from anger to a request and asked the girl to help him, because he solves problems with portals every morning, and this is very difficult. Jean suggested that the man write a letter of resignation, but the man pretended that he heard her and complained of a headache. Suddenly, the man shouted again, asking why she was ruining good swords again. The girl calmly replied that she simply hadn't been able to concentrate lately. The man said that he had had enough of her stories and handed the girl a piece of paper, and she asked in surprise what it was. Suddenly, the girl got angry and said that it was annoying her because she wanted to rest today, and they were sending her somewhere again. The man said that she was not the only one suffering and added that such a task was not the first for her. The girl sighed heavily and turned around saying that she had had enough, and the man shouted after her, asking what she had had enough of. The man shouted that it was obvious how oppressive the atmosphere was now and said that it was enough to fire the new guys because they needed at least one more for the team. The girl replied that when they take just anyone, they go on missions and die, and this answer angered the man. People were already crowding inside the building waiting for the exam. Some said that they had to pass it this time, while others answered that it was already the 4th time they were taking it. One guy was recording himself on camera. He said that he was at an exam and asked for support so that he could pass. He promised that if he passed the exam and received the title, he would definitely film hunting content. The guy thanked me for the $20 donation and told me where I could find a link to support him. At that moment, 3 men in red caps entered the hall and looked around. Seeing them, the boy said that their guards would soon come in, and filming was prohibited here, so he said goodbye. Having finished the broadcast, the guy turned around and saw the intent gaze of our hero standing behind him. Steve looked closely at the guy's phone, and he asked if this was the first time he saw someone broadcasting. Our hero asked in surprise who the guy was talking to, but he just waved it off and asked him to leave him alone. Steve told the guy he was interesting, and the guy called him an old man. The show began on the podium. The guys in red caps were instructors, and the man at the podium began to tell that he was the supervisor for the 3 days of the exam. He said that the 21 guards stationed there would also accompany them for the next 3 days and 2 nights. The crowd of people who came to the exam began to line up. Some wanted to get to certain examiners, but no one wanted to get to Jean, because everyone who gets to her is immediately thrown out. The man at the podium said that everyone who entered had received tickets, and that they would now distribute them by drawing lots. He continued that everyone whose names he named would need to go to counter number 1. The man began to name names and people rushed towards their overseer. It was the turn of the guy who was hosting the broadcast. It turned out that his name was Donnie, and his title was Warden number 15, which greatly upset him. Our hero was also assigned to Warden number 15. He approached the right number and was extremely surprised to see his supervisor. Steve immediately recognized the blonde standing at the 15 sign. Our hero smiled contentedly and thought that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The girl did not pay attention to those approaching and looked ahead, but something caught her attention. She saw our hero standing in her squad and smiling contentedly. Jean couldn't believe her eyes and stared at Steve in surprise. The man announced that since everyone had been assigned, they could go to the dormitories assigned to their units and stay there until further notice. A crowd of examinees wandered towards the dormitory. They discussed who they had been assigned to, and some complained that they had been assigned to a blonde. One group of guys stopped near the room and were surprised that there was even a training room there. The boy walked with his head down. He thought he had jinxed it, since he had ended up with the blonde again. In front of his subscribers, he acted as if he had already given up everything, and now he was almost expelled. The guys entered through door number 15. Some were changing clothes, and some were just sitting on the bench. Our hero stood near the locker and noticed Donnie, who was sitting on the bench with his head hanging down. Steve sat down opposite him and asked him why he was so sad, since he had been giggling just a moment ago. But the guy didn't answer and only looked sullenly at our hero. Donnie looked at Steve smiling and thought he couldn't believe this old man was on his team. The guy asked our hero with displeasure why he should be happy, but he did not understand the question. Donnie asked if Steve knew the character of that blonde, because it was not for nothing that they called her a witch. Our hero was surprised that Jean was called a witch and frowned. And the guy continued to say that if she wasn't in the mood, she would ruin the whole squad. and he complained that it turned out they had thrown 2,000 down the drain. Steve didn't understand Donnie's complaints and said that since you failed, it means you're weak. And what does the warden have to do with it? But these words clearly offended the boy, and he angrily asked again what our hero had said. Donnie thought that our hero was looking down on him, so he didn't like him from the first second they met. But Steve didn't understand why the boy was so angry and looked him in the eyes openly. Donnie asked why he was speaking to him so informally, since our hero looked so much younger. Steve smiled and asked if the guy wanted to deal with him. This was just the right place for that. The guys in the locker room froze, listening to the brewing scandal. Donnie got really mad and asked our hero if he really thought he was a weakling. And our hero decided to answer this rhetorical question by saying yes. This answer made Donnie lose his temper, and he told our hero that he was dead. He told Steve to follow him, unzipping and taking off his jacket as he went. Jean entered the locker room of squad number 15 and was surprised to find no one there. She got angry, wondering where all the guys from her squad could have gone. And the guys were in the training room and were amazed at the size of the cage, joking that they could kill in it. Donnie and Steve were standing in the cage, and the guys around them were rushing them, saying that if they got caught, they would be thrown out. And another guy said that since they were in the blonde squad, they would all be thrown out anyway. Donnie called our hero a jerk and said he was showing off while looking at him. The guy asked if our hero hadn't heard of Stone TV, and he is a promising YouTube fighter. But Steve didn't understand what the guy meant and asked what a YouTuber was. Maybe food. This question completely angered Donnie, and he said that Steve was definitely making fun of him. The guys behind the cage started cheering for Donnie, shouting, "Keep it up!" The guy did a series of punches in the air and said that his hobby is to set the brains of people like our hero straight, adding that he has a ton of views on the video from the exam and doesn't want to stop. Steve listened to the guy's monologue in silence the whole time, and smiling, he only said, "Interesting." Donnie yelled at him to stop talking nonsense and called him a psycho as he prepared to fight. He began to close the distance and told our hero to take his blow. Donnie swung his fist at our hero's face, but he stood motionless. Suddenly, someone shouted, "Enough!" And turning towards the voice, everyone saw that the warden had arrived. Donnie turned around, looking at her and thought only, "Blonde witch." The girl angrily shouted for everyone to run away from here. All the guys immediately flew out of the training room, saying that now they were definitely finished. As Jean walked up to the ring to meet the guys, she asked if they really wanted to get eliminated so badly that they decided to go all out. Donnie forced a tight smile and said that it was not so, trying to justify himself to the warden. The girl stopped this conversation and suggested getting rid of one of them right away. The guys looked at the girl in surprise, not understanding what she meant. The girl with a sinister smile said that whoever loses will fly out of here and ordered to begin. The boys stared at the girl in shock after hearing her order. Donnie smiled nervously and thought that the girl was definitely crazy. But our hero understood the order and was not against carrying it out, approaching the boy threateningly. Donnie prepared for the fight and said that our hero asked for it, asking him not to cry afterwards. Steve smiled cheerfully and said that he even felt sorry for the boy. Donnie swung his fist angrily and told them to shut up and move already. And the next second, our hero's fist flew straight into the boy's face, and his blow missed. Donnie passed out after the first blow and fell face down on the floor. Our hero silently looked at Donnie lying on the floor, but did not unclench his fists. The girl's eyes widened in surprise. She clearly did not expect our hero to win. But Steve clearly had something in mind and just smiled slyly without saying a word. Looking at his satisfied smile, the girl realized that Steve was the instigator and decided that he was a bad person. The girl remembered his appearance from the portal and thought that from the first day he had irritated her and smelled unusual. But Steve couldn't hear her thoughts and asked her what she was worth. Didn't she want to try too? The girl did not understand his proposal and, frowning, looked questioningly at the guy. And the guy repeated the offer and said that if she wanted, she could come up here. Finally, it dawned on Jean what the guy was suggesting and she got angry. Our hero offered peace terms. If he wins, she will not expel the boy for losing. The girl looked at Steve as if he were a stupid child and said that this was simply unthinkable. But she decided not to refuse, took off the katana hanging from her belt, and placed it on the floor. Jean boldly entered the arena and stood opposite our hero. Tilting her head slightly to the side, she asked Steve if he was unusual. But our hero did not understand what was being discussed and asked what these unusual things were. The girl suddenly started the attack and told the guy that if he survived, she would definitely tell. But our hero was on the alert. He immediately saw that the girl was attacking and prepared to defend himself. He easily dodged Jean's first strike, opening to the side. He parried the next blow with his hand, and the girl decisively delivered a new one. Jean unleashed a barrage of blows on our hero, sparing no effort, but he dodged or defended himself from each of them. At first, the girl attacked only with her fists, but she got into the swing of things and started kicking. But Steve easily defended himself against these blows, as if he didn't even strain himself. Suddenly, our hero tensed up, sensing something was wrong and his eyes widened. The girl prepared herself for a blow that was impossible to avoid and told the guy that if he won, he could ask for something else. Jean did a backflip in the air, kicking our hero, causing him to fly backwards. Steve seemed to have lost consciousness. He flew back and showed no signs of life. The girl looked at the guy and thought that everything was somehow strange. Obviously, everything was not so simple. Jean landed lightly on her feet and looked in the direction our hero had flown. But in reality, our hero pretended to lose consciousness, and instead of hitting the bars, he landed on them. Steve admired the girl and said that she was stronger than she seemed. Jean was shocked and wondered how our hero was able to withstand her blow at all. She decided not to think for long and immediately began the attack, without waiting for our hero to strike back. The girl became enthusiastic and said with a smile that now she would not give in. Jean kicked the guy in the stomach with such force that splinters flew from the ring. Our hero fell to the floor on his back, and the girl began an attack from above, preparing to deliver the final blow. But Steve easily dodged the blow, jumping to the side. Jean began to deliver a lot of punches, and our hero only defended himself from them. The girl decided to sneakily kick him, but Steve easily parried this blow too. Our hero took the next kick while squatting and defending himself with one hand, while the other clenched into a fist. He smiled slyly, showing that not only was he unable to hit, but he was waiting for the right moment and swung his fist. The girl clearly did not expect this attack and only managed to curse. The punch hit the girl in the stomach, around which a blue glow suddenly appeared. Our hero's fist crashed into the blue light emanating from the girl's hands. But the blow was so strong that the blue glow shattered into small pieces, and the girl fell to the floor. Blue sparks danced around Jean like lightning bolts, and she slowly rose from the floor. She couldn't believe that our hero had broken her shield so easily. And our hero clearly got into the swing of things and, raising his fist again, said that it was now his turn. Jean was still sitting on the floor and looking at our hero's attack. She said out loud that he was definitely crazy. Steve's enthusiasm only grew stronger, and he shouted happily about how much fun he was having. The girl also smiled mischievously and said that the guy was definitely unusual, thinking that her intuition had not failed her after all. But our hero did not understand what unusual meant, and only looked questioningly at the girl. He was about to strike when the girl straightened up and extended her hand forward, palm out in front of our hero's face. With a serious face, without a trace of humor, the girl said that she had lost. Steve froze in surprise and asked why, because it was so much fun. Jean replied that the place was too small to use skills and promised that next time they would fight in a place with more space. Our hero said that he was very sorry and smiled sadly, not intending to continue the fight. The girl got a little angry, said that the guy can say whatever he wants, and repeated that she admits defeat. Steve asked if there were many strong women like her in the world, and the girl replied that she didn't think so. Our hero smiled contentedly and said that he then chose her and offered her to bear him a child. The girl did not believe what she heard and asked again what the guy had said. Steve saw nothing surprising in this proposal and repeated the offer to produce offspring. And at that very second, he received a strong slap in the face from Jean, and Donnie woke up from the sound of it. The guy opened his eyes, not understanding what was happening, why the brat was getting it from the blonde, and why he was lying on the floor. Meanwhile, Jean, angrily hissing curses, walked away from the ring, looking back at our hero with displeasure. Then the pain began to reach Donnie, and he remembered that he lost after the first blow. He sadly remembered the girl's words that if he lost, he would drop out without even going to the exam. Donnie fell to his knees sadly, thinking how shameful it was to be kicked out so quickly. Suddenly he noticed our hero, who was leaving the ring, and glared at him angrily. He asked Steve, with tears in his eyes from anger, if he felt better after he humiliated him. But our hero, with a peaceful smile, answered him that he had not lost. Donnie didn't understand what our hero meant and, still frowning, asked him again. And none of those participating in this performance noticed that there was a surveillance camera hanging in the training room. And at this time, when Donnie and our hero were talking, the man in glasses was sitting in the office and looking at the monitor screen. There was a mixture of shock and disbelief on his face, and he asked out loud if Jean had really lost. Our hero told Donnie, who was sitting on the floor, to go and walked forward without looking back. The guy jumped up and said that Jean had said that the loser would be kicked out, so how could he stay? And our hero replied that he had asked not to kick him out. Donnie, his cheek red and swollen from Steve's punch, looked at him blankly and asked, "What?" The guy asked why the girl hit him then, and Steve replied that it was none of his business. Donnie watched our hero go, trying to figure out what happened and how he didn't fly out. Suddenly, Donnie remembered the slap and wondered if they had really agreed that he would stay if our hero could withstand the girl's blow. Tears welled up in Donnie's eyes at the thought, and his gaze was full of gratitude. He looked after our hero and thought that he was a man, a real man. The boy's emotions burst out. Tears flowed down his cheeks from gratitude, and he called our hero brother. Donnie stood for a moment, then ran after the guy, saying that they would go together. Suddenly, a male voice came from the speaker, saying that Steve needed to go up to the guard's office. The guys stopped in surprise. Donnie asked if it was his name, and our hero replied that apparently yes. He came to an ordinary door with a white sign on it that read, "Warden's Office." Our hero entered the office and sat down opposite the very man who saw Jean lose to him. Steve was a little worried and asked the man what he wanted. The man took out a voice recorder and warned the guy that everything said in this office would be recorded. The man said that he just saw a sparring match with Jean, who is a B-level awakened, and asked if our hero was unusual. Steve said that the girl asked him the same thing and asked again, "What does it mean?" The man frowned when he heard the question and looked at Steve silently. He said that apparently our hero had not yet become familiar with the information about the Brit's portal. The man began to say that now 3 planets are connected to the Earth by a bridge portal. The first planet is Aruka, friendly, with elves and dwarves as the main races, and cultural exchange and land trade taking place there. The Earthlings who were there return and spread many skills, such as magic and making artifacts. The second planet is Kuchon. It is a world where the Moman tribes and the Chungwon people fight for control of the planet. When the portal opens with the Chungwon people, an exchange occurs, and when it opens in the Moman lands, a war begins. The last planet is Midial, a world inhabited by warlike orcs as well as ferocious monsters. So when a portal opens there, clashes begin. On these 3 planets, there are those who have learned the skills of another world and returned. Their combat power is difficult to attribute to the rank of awakened, so altogether they are called unusual. Steve listened boredly to this pile of information and in the end said that it was all a bit complicated. But after thinking for a moment, our hero said that in fact there are not 3 planets. The man opposite looked questioningly at our hero, waiting for him to continue his words. He thought that if our hero wasn't from one of those planets, then maybe he was raised in a dungeon. But he immediately dismissed that thought, thinking that then he wouldn't be able to defeat level B. Without waiting for an answer from our hero, he himself asked where he came from. Steve said he told that bald doctor everything, that he lived for 1,000 years with wolves. The man froze. Listening to our hero's story, he did not say a word and only looked at him tensely. Steve broke the silence and asked if the conversation was over. The man caught himself and said yes. He was tense but still forced a smile and thanked our hero for listening to him, saying that he could return to the dorm. Steve left the office, and the man continued to stare thoughtfully at one point, thinking that the conversations were true after all. A man walked into the office and introduced himself as Senior Sergeant Sheldon. The sergeant saluted the man sitting in the chair and asked if he had been called. The man in the chair said he wanted to assign the boy the position of Warden number 15. The sergeant was surprised at first, but then he pulled himself together and asked if Jean was really not coming. The man clicked his tongue in irritation, adjusted his glasses and said that she had run away. Sergeant Sheldon did not believe the answer and asked again how she had escaped. The man became serious and said that there was Steve in Team 15. The sergeant needed to keep an eye on him until the exam was over, and then he needed to send a report on his actions. An announcement came from the loudspeakers in the dormitory that everyone needed to put on their uniforms and gather at the stadium. Upon hearing it, the guys began to grumble that it had begun. In the hall, the guard stood next to the numbers on the signs and gave the order to stand in line according to the numbers. Sergeant Sheldon stood at the sign marked number 15 instead of Jean. The guys from his group, seeing that the blonde was gone, immediately rejoiced at this and decided that he had replaced the girl. The man in the red cap smiled and said that he was the new warden and his name was Sheldon. He said that today's exam was a 100-meter run in 9 seconds and 40 triathlons in an hour, asking if it wasn't easy. The guys in the group immediately began to complain that this was unfair because everyone had their own individual characteristics. Meanwhile, a plump girl was running on the treadmill. The warden said that she was being eliminated because she had run the 100 meters in 13 seconds. The girl said she was a healer. Shouldn't they lower the bar? But the warden said that the monsters wouldn't run slower after her if she was a healer. The warden called out group number 15 and called Donnie to the start. He said with a smile that 100 meters in 9 seconds was funny, and the guy from his group started complaining that he was already scared. Donnie made the victory sign with his fingers and asked our hero to cheer for him. Immediately after the whistle, he rushed to the finish line with a victorious cry, raising dust behind him. The warden looked at his stopwatch and said that he had run in 8 seconds, which meant he had passed. The guy in the red cap called out the next one, and it was our hero. Steve stood at the start, resting his feet on the special supports, and looked straight ahead. Donnie screamed at the top of his lungs, supporting the boy, while the rest of the group stood to the side, watching. Immediately after the warden's whistle, our hero rushed forward with such speed that it was impossible to keep track of him. Donnie, like everyone else who witnessed the run, looked at the clouds of dust in shock, not believing that a person could move like that. At that very moment, the phone rang in the man's office. It was Sergeant Sheldon. He reported that Steve had passed the exam and his results were shocking, adding that he would send a video. The man immediately tensed up and asked about the journalists. The sergeant turned around and saw how the men with cameras came to life and began actively photographing our hero. The woman in the office picked up the ringing phone and introduced herself as the manager of the Returned Persons Management Bureau, while the caller introduced himself as Major Swan. He said he had just sent her a couple of videos of Steve and asked her to look at them now. Looking at the video, the girl was clearly amazed by what she saw and could only ask, "What?" The screen showed a recording of our hero's run. The man said that apparently the major was a liar and added that it was now becoming obvious that the interview with the doctor was truthful. Looking at the video, the girl hoped that all the doctor's answers were true. She thought that if the patient was unusual and all his statements were true, then Steve might be a returnee from the 4th unknown planet. The girl ordered the man to bar journalists from entering. The guy looked at the screen of his phone and was confused. He said that it seemed they were already too late because he had found an already published article about Steve and his outstanding exam results. The girl got angry and told him to immediately sort out the articles and impose a ban. Journalists swooped down like flies to honey, some holding cameras, some holding video cameras. Seeing our hero, they all started asking him to say a few words, to spend time with them, or to give an interview. Steve looked at the screaming crowd with confusion, but did not answer them. The girl at this time was thinking that if she had gone through the portal without a protective suit, she would have received rank F due to the dispersion of spatial energy. And then she remembered that the problems in the center began just at this time. At that very moment, security guards burst into the hall and began detaining journalists. And the girl thought that if he really did return from the 4th planet, then the initiative for its development would go to them. The security guards blocked the passage for the journalists and did not let them through, despite their requests. The examinees gathered at the table and discussed Steve and how he was the reason so many journalists had gathered. Journalists were making noise behind the opaque windows, and our hero and Donnie were sitting at the table and eating. The guy looked at our hero with delight, hearing the journalists arguing outside the window. Steve, however, paid no attention to the commotion and calmly devoured a huge portion of lunch. Donnie thought that everything was right. He couldn't have fainted from a punch from an ordinary kid, and he only regretted that he didn't record this fight. Steve noticed his gaze and asked what he was looking at. Maybe he had finished eating already. Donnie began to fuss and suddenly offered to bring our hero something to drink because he definitely wanted water. Leaving the table, where our hero had already dealt with a mountain of food, Donnie thought that just by looking at how he was eating, one could understand that he was different. After lunch, the guys returned to the changing room. Our hero sprawled on a bench, and Donnie sat opposite. He looked around the lockers and said that there were fewer things because many had fallen through. Suddenly, the boy closed his eyes and gasped, as if he suddenly remembered something. Our hero opened his eyes and asked in surprise what had happened. He replied that the next task was a dungeon, and it was more profitable to go there in a large company, and he hoped that the other groups would be redistributed. Steve relaxed and closed his eyes and said that everything was fine. He didn't need anyone. Donnie was delighted by these words and admired our hero's confidence. The guy said he knew how strong Steve was, but they didn't know what to expect in the dungeon, and it would be good to have a few different skills. Steve said that was bullshit and changed the subject by saying that when they first met, Donnie was saying something on the phone, what it was, and the guy replied that it was YouTube. Our hero even rose from the bench, not understanding what kind of word this was. YouTube. Donnie was surprised that he really hadn't heard of this site and asked if our hero had really come down from the mountains, and he said that you could say so. The guy looked at Steve in surprise and wondered what kind of concept this was. Donnie took the phone, walked up to Steve, and said that this was YouTube, showing the video. He pointed to a number and said that it was the number of subscribers, and next to it was the number of views. Steve was interested in one video with a lot of views, and Donnie replied that it was a mukbang. In the video, the girl sat in front of a variety of dishes and bit off a huge piece of meat, which delighted our hero. Seeing Steve watching the video with interest, the boy thought he had an inhuman appetite. Donnie said he knew a lot of YouTubers who filmed similar things and said he could arrange a joint video, and our hero said he remembered the promise. The boy smiled indulgently, looking at Steve's violent reaction. Our hero turned to Donnie and told him that it turns out he was a good guy. Donnie recalled how he attracted the attention of journalists and thought that he had the potential to become a YouTuber because our hero is strong and handsome. Watching Steve watch the video, he thought it was only a matter of time before the guild recruited him, especially if he gained combat power in the dungeon tomorrow. And our hero repeated that he liked Donnie and invited him to join his clan. Upon hearing this proposal, the boy did not immediately understand what was being discussed. They sat and looked at each other in silence, Steve waiting for an answer, and Donnie couldn't believe the offer. He finally managed to speak and asked if he was really creating a clan and not joining a guild. And our hero calmly replied that everything was exactly like that. Donnie was overwhelmed with emotions. Not only could he join the clan of the most talked about hero, but he would also shoot a video with him. Then that would be it. He remembered his childhood when during a sparring session, after another blow, he fell into the ring. Donnie thought he had a difficult childhood, living in poverty. He trained hard but still failed the licensing exam every time. But he didn't give up. But due to the cataclysm, all his dreams were erased. And his friends suggested that he become awakened and get a license because boxing cannot make money. Donnie grabbed YouTube like a lifeline when his friends didn't believe he could make it. And now, looking at Steve, the boy thought that this was the very good content and he was finally starting to get lucky. He happily said that he would follow our hero even to the end of the world. Steve said he really likes it and reminded him again about the mukbang video. Tears streamed from Donnie's eyes and he said that he would not forget. And to himself he thought that success depends on connections. Steve asked why the guy suddenly started crying, and he asked not to pay attention to it. Donnie became serious and said that in fact you can only start your own clan with 3 members. Suddenly the guys heard the door to the locker room open sharply and someone entered. They turned around and looked questioningly at the man who had entered, studying him. A bald guy in monk's clothes stood in the doorway with a weapon behind his back. The boys looked at the guy with distrust, waiting for him to say something. But Donnie was the first to speak, asking where the monk was from. The guy replied that he was assigned to team number 15, his name was Munch, and at the end, he added Wamata Buddha. The guys were very surprised and Donnie asked out loud how a Buddhist could be a hunter. The monk didn't answer and only looked questioningly at the guys. Suddenly, a voice came over the speakers, announcing that everyone was invited to gather in the briefing room after they had changed into their combat suits. After hearing the announcement, the boys were surprised that a meeting was about to take place. Donnie grumbled discontentedly that not only were they being assembled at night, but they were also being assembled in combat suits. Steve asked thoughtfully if the dungeon raid wasn't tomorrow. The monk said that, depending on the circumstances, the raid could begin earlier and again added Wamata Buddha. Donnie was shocked by this news and asked how they could start without warning. Everyone gathered in the room and the head warden said it was time to begin the briefing. The major began to explain that for the test, they would go down into the dungeon. It is located at the 5th station and is under the supervision of the Phoenix Guild. When our hero asked about the guild, Donnie said that although this guild is not among the top best, it is also pretty cool. But Steve was interested in something else and asked what under surveillance meant. Donnie was surprised by this question, and he finally decided that our hero was not from here. He said that it is difficult for the state to manage all the portals that appear and disappear every day, and it hires clans for protection. A private clan that has signed a contract becomes a guild, and the more dungeons, the more people come to the guild. Steve said that, simply put, it is a hunting game where the state can make money, and Donnie confirmed the guess. Our hero thought he wanted to create a clan because he missed life in a wolf pack. Suddenly, he smiled slyly and said out loud that it was possible to govern an entire state. Donnie continued to say that it was good to have your own dungeon, but for that you needed to get permission to use it. Steve didn't seem to listen to him and said that their goal now was to create their own guild. Donnie smiled nervously and said that they needed to pass the exam first. Steve looked at him absently, and Donnie thought he looked like an idiot now. The major continued his briefing. On the screen he showed what the dungeon looked like now and said that it was abandoned 15 days ago, level 1. This is not a simple dungeon, but has its own labyrinth. If the monster is weak, it will be more fun to receive and deliver spatial energy if there is a lot of it. The man said that the briefing for the raid in dungeon number 1 was starting now. Donnie thought that since it was a maze, wasn't the problem with the monsters. If you did something wrong, you could get trapped. He grabbed his head and said out loud that he could use some intelligence skills right now. Steve heard these words and told the guy that he had this skill. Donnie was happy at first, but then he began to think that the exam had not even started yet, and he had already acquired a skill that was worth more than 20,000. Suddenly, the guy had a thought. What if our hero is actually rich? The monk looked thoughtfully ahead, barely listening to what they were saying around him. Donnie got his attention by asking about his awakened skill. Munch looked down thoughtfully, as if deciding whether to speak or not. After thinking, he decided to talk about the skill, but said only one word, Thevarada. The monk's thoughts were transported to memories of the past and the attack of monsters. Munch sat in the temple, opposite the statue of Buddha, and meditated. In his hands he held a Tibetan bowl, with which he produced a sound that echoed throughout the temple. It seemed that the monsters heard this sound, and it attracted them. Soon, a huge crowd of monsters gathered near the temple, and everyone rushed towards the temple building. Another monk burst into the room where Munch was meditating, shouting at him to stop immediately. Not understanding what was happening, the monk asked what brought him there at such a late hour. But the man only shouted for him and the chief monks to get out of there immediately. At that moment, a huge monster appeared behind the monk, preparing to attack. The monk was pulled out of his memories by the major's voice, announcing that the briefing was over. The boys continued to look questioningly at the monk, and Donnie quietly asked what was wrong with him. The major said that they would move to the target point and begin attacking the monsters under the supervision of the guards, and reminded them to read the manual again. The man said he wished everyone good luck, and the buses set off to their destination. The buses arrived at the portal, glowing with blue light, and were watched from above by a helicopter. The guards urged the boys on, asked them to listen to instructions, and warned them that if they didn't get ready now, they wouldn't get out of there alive. The warden asked Team 15 if they were ready, and Donnie advised Steve to secure his gear better. Sheldon said that once they get inside, they can pretend he's not there, complete freedom of action, and added that even if the team does well, they could be left behind due to individual scores. Donnie got a little nervous and said that there were only 3 of them on the team. Would he help them if something happened? Sheldon smiled meaningfully, but said nothing and told them to move on. Getting off the bus, our hero asked Donnie why he was so scared. The guy smiled guiltily and said that he wasn't scared, but he couldn't finish the sentence. The monk was also calm and asked the warden if he could use his personal weapon. The warden replied that of course they could, and the boys headed towards the exit. Donnie was surprised again, this time by the monk, because this was only an exam, and he already had a weapon made of dimensional matter ready. The guard at the portal escorted the 14th team and told the 15th to go forward to the right door. Sheldon smiled contentedly and told the boys to come in. The boys walked into the portal, listening to the warden say that their team had entered. Steve walked forward, and Donnie wondered why he was walking ahead. It was scary. He decided to stop our hero and told him that there was danger around. But then he covered his mouth with his hand in fear. He thought that now his grade would be lowered, because the main thing was to quietly enter and get to the safe zone. Suddenly, from somewhere to the side, a monster that looked like a skeleton in a robe jumped out at our hero. But Steve didn't even bat an eyelid and blew the monster's head off with one blow. Donnie said that his screams attracted the monster, but they defeated it and added that Steve was perfect, as expected. Donnie asked Steve if he would use the recon skill if something went wrong. Suddenly, everyone heard a click, and the tile under one of the guy's feet began to shine. Munch looked down at his feet in surprise when he heard a click. Donnie immediately realized what kind of tile it was and started telling his friends about it. And along with the word trap, a hail of arrows fell upon the boys. The monk reacted instantly and quickly grabbed the weapon behind his back. He again returned to the memories of the attack on the temple, when the military rained missiles down on the monster. His mentor, who tried to save the boy, fought off the monsters with all his might. He was all wounded, but did not give up. Munch cried and asked the man to forgive him, because everything that happened was his fault. The missiles reached the monsters, and along with them the temple was destroyed. And now, on the battlefield, Monk deftly fought off a hail of arrows with a stick that had been behind his back all this time. Donnie admired his skills and said that he had excellent weapon handling. Suddenly, from under someone's foot, a click was heard again and the stove lit up white. The floor beneath the boys' feet melted, and the 3 of them flew down. After the fall, Steve and Munch were standing on their feet, but Donnie was lying in a pile of rocks and quietly groaning. He lay on his back and lamented what would happen to his dream now. Suddenly, from the depths of the tunnel ahead, a growl and some sounds were heard. Donnie jumped to his feet and told the boys that they must be a monster magnet. Monk prepared for battle, apologizing to the guys because his monk skills attract monsters. Donnie was shocked to hear that Munch's skills attracted monsters. But Steve was happy and said that it was even good, because now he wouldn't have to look for everyone. Steve looked forward seriously and said that it was even better this way, because he was too lazy to look for each one individually. Munch looked questioningly at our hero, not expecting such a reaction from him. Steve jumped up, doing a somersault, as if his body weighed like a feather. Donnie was delighted by the jump and asked out loud if he was even human. Once at the top, Steve told Munch that he liked him and invited him to join the clan. The monk looked at our hero in surprise and asked him again what he meant. Meanwhile, a crowd of monsters was approaching our heroes. Steve turned around, looking calmly at the crowd of approaching enemies. He activated the reconnaissance skill and his eyes began to flicker with a blue light. Thanks to his skill, he was able to identify the main monster in this crowd. Steve saw the monster he needed. It was a skeleton in a red robe. Having accelerated to inhuman speed almost from a standstill, our hero headed towards the desired monster. Donnie looked at the crowd in shock and said that it looked like they screwed up big time. And at that very moment, a large stick fell in front of him and hit the ground with a crash. It was the monk, he shouted from above for Donnie to grab onto her. The boy confidently grabbed the stick, casting aside his fears and suggested luring the monsters into the pit and then starting to hunt them. Groaning, Donnie somehow climbed out of the hole, holding tightly onto Munch's staff. Having got out, the guys turned around at the crowd of killed monsters and couldn't believe their eyes. They were in shock, and Donnie could only quietly say that it was crazy what it was. Far ahead, Steve told the boys to deal with the monsters along the way and follow him. The guys were inspired by our hero's words and boldly went forward, and Donnie, smiling cheerfully, said that Steve was definitely crazy. Monk easily scattered the attacking monsters with his weapon, and they flew in different directions. The monk wondered if our hero had learned about the trap using the reconnaissance skill, and was surprised by the speed of the skill and the guy's strength. One of the monsters was approaching our hero from behind, moving along the wall. Having dealt with the monster in front, Steve turned towards the noise, looking at the approaching skeleton from behind. But he didn't have time to get closer to our hero because the stick stuck into his neck. It was Munch who threw his weapon at the approaching monster, accompanied by Donnie's encouraging shouts. And Steve finished off the monster with one kick, and bones flew in all directions. At the observation headquarters, one of the soldiers said that there was a team returning from the dungeon, and the second was surprised because only 30 minutes had passed. Major Swan came closer and said that usually the dungeon was given 5 hours and asked for the team number. Watching the boys exit the portal, the soldier said that this was team number 15 and their vital signs were normal. Swan dialed the sergeant's phone number and asked why the boys were already returning. Sergeant Sheldon, who was watching the boys, said that they were going back because they were finished. He added that it is difficult to understand the statistics of the first level from the video, but even so, our hero's performance is top-notch. The city street was filled with people, some were leisurely strolling, some were rushing about their business, and several people had gathered near one of the signs, animatedly discussing what they had seen. And among these people, Donnie, with a camera in his hands, talked to his viewers, promising to show the life of Steve's clan. He read a comment asking what he would show today, and the guy happily replied that he would show the clan's housewarming party today. From the building with the sign Clan Steve, Donnie's cheerful voice could be heard, who was about to introduce the person responsible for food and simply the breadwinner of this clan. A granny appeared in the frame, chopping greens, and Donnie asked her to say hello to her subscribers. The concentrated expression on her face changed to a frightening grimace, and the granny, with a knife in her hand, told Donnie to leave or she would let him in for dinner. Donnie's ear started bleeding from fear, but he didn't answer his grandmother. Bill was sitting at the table with his dad, and he asked why Grandma wanted to let a guy in for dinner, and Donnie responded to the comment that she wasn't a gangster at all. The next commenter asked why they had a Buddha statue. Donnie said it belonged to the one they had seen before, the third member of Steve's clan, a monk who attracted people with his power. Donnie walked into the room with a camera in his hands, greeting the guys. Steve turned to greet him. Donnie pointed to Munch, who was sitting at a dining table laden with food, and said that he was the monk. The guy asked the monk to say hello, but he became embarrassed and couldn't get a word out. Monk nevertheless gathered his strength and showed the audience his bat, saying that he had been through a lot, but a scream prevented him from finishing. A white truck pulled up to the house and Chad, who was driving, yelled to Steve that everything was ready. The boys ran to the van with satisfied smiles, and Donnie asked for the bill. A white van sped through the dilapidated streets, with a quadcopter with a camera hovering above them. Steve noticed it and asked what the thing was, offering to smash it, and Donnie sighed sadly that he didn't even know about drones. The guy in the van said they were heading to the 4th station now, the 30th gate quest. He asked if they could see the blue portal and added that it would be a momentous day, the first quest of Steve's clan. Donnie said with a smile that his skill was video memory, and he would upload the video to YouTube when they returned. The guys entered the portal. There were a lot of bats around them. Steve was surprised by this, and Donnie said that this was their dungeon. The boy asked if our hero had a long-range skill and he replied that he didn't have one. Donnie frowned thoughtfully and asked how they would catch the monsters then. Munch, who had remained silent until then, confidently told them to leave it to him. Steve and Donnie looked at the monk with surprise and disbelief. Munch dropped to one knee and began to hit the bull with his stick, causing a ringing sound to be heard. The bats began to gather together above the boys' heads, and Donnie asked in surprise if it was because of the monk's thing that they began to behave like this. The bats began to gather in a flock and began to rapidly approach the boys. All the mice flew towards the monk, who was already ready for battle and raised his bat, preparing to repel the attack. Munch began swinging the bat furiously, and a ring of fire formed in front of him, burning the bats. Suddenly, a bat of unimaginable size appeared in front of the monk, and Donnie exclaimed enthusiastically that they had finally dealt with this dungeon. At that moment, Steve struck the giant bat, cutting it in half. Finishing off the remaining mice, Donnie said contentedly that the mission was accomplished. Sitting over a mountain of dead monsters, Steve said that the door had opened and they needed to hurry, and Donnie said he would make another one. At headquarters, a guy approached a girl sitting at a table and she sighed heavily, looking at the monitor. The guy reported that they had walked around the headquarters 4 stations and could complete 20 missions a day, and now they had incinerated a dungeon nearby. Reading the comments under Donnie's video, the girl grabbed her head and said that they barely imposed an embargo, but it turned out that Steve's clan has a streamer. The guy said that this video was already in 3rd place and asked if they needed to do anything. The girl replied that she was aware of the popularity of the video, but suddenly something distracted her attention. This was a video of a fight between Russian bear Mikhail and Hero. The video said he silenced him with his special move and named his next opponent. Hero's next opponent, a tall, brunette man with long hair, looked strong and confident. He was also unusual. The video asked the question of what if the state quickly intervened and encountered the guy's second appearance. The girl suddenly stood up from the table and told the guy to get ready for contact with our hero. She confidently took the jacket and said that she would go to the meeting in person. The market square was bustling with activity, with vendors loudly calling out to customers and offering their wares. Our guys were sitting at a table in the cafe. Chad asked if Munch was coming and Donnie confirmed it. Steve asked with interest where he had gone, since there were no temples anywhere nearby. Chad said that Munch was living in the city with the survivors of his temple, and Donnie complained that without him, their effectiveness was diminishing. Chad asked Steve if it wasn't a good idea to take a day off since their clan had already risen so well. Donnie was happy about this news. Chad said that their capital was already 80,000, and Donnie said that now they could go down to the 2nd-level dungeons. Donnie was happy. All he did was collect stones and he had already earned 2,000, and now they could go down to the 2nd-level dungeons. Steve looked questioningly at the rather grinning guy. Donnie looked at the monitor with a smile, happy with the award he had received, and next to him, Steve saw the guy's name, rank, and profession. Steve folded his arms, thinking that he had bought 3,000 worth of skills and had already surpassed many. After thinking about it, our hero smiled and said that since that was the case, today would definitely be a day off. Chad closed his laptop and said he was taking his son and grandma to the park, and Steve saw a sign next to it with his name and the phrase, "No information." A granny came into the room and brought food for the puppy. Next to her, there was also a sign saying, "No information," but next to Pekka, there was information about the level and power. Steve wondered if the dogs might wake up too. After some thought, he called his brother, who responded in surprise. He said that his brother had been fixing the car a lot lately, and Chad replied that it was hard to buy and even harder to fix. Steve smiled and suggested that his brother go and buy a car, a brand new one. The younger brother's eyes sparkled with joy when he heard this proposal. Steve was clearly up to something and agreed with his brother with a sly smile. Our hero also turned to the puppy and called him with him, which made Pecky start wagging his tail cheerfully. The manager showed a blue car, Hyundai Dragon, and Chad said enthusiastically that it was a dream car for all mercenaries. The manager continued to explain that the fuel for this machine was heliotrope, and with a price tag of 80 million, it was considered the best on the market. Steve asked his beaming brother if he liked the car, and he replied, "Of course." Our hero told the manager that he had cash and asked if they could pick up the car right away. The brand new blue car sped through the destroyed city, and Chad was truly enjoying the ride. He was delighted to say that this car was simply something and could not be compared at all with his old van. Smiling contentedly, Steve replied that even in the passenger seat the ride was amazing, and added that he should have bought it a long time ago. Chad asked why they were going to the 4th station, entrance 23, since it had been closed for a long time. Our hero became serious and said that Chell had told him a long time ago that he could not wake up because he had no money. The smile slid off the guy's face and he looked questioningly at Steve, not understanding where he was leading. With the same serious look, our hero replied that he would wake up today. Hearing these words, Chad was shocked and sweat broke out on his face. The blue car drove further and further, passing destroyed buildings overgrown with grass. Chad continued to drive forward, fear and panic washing over the boy, but he didn't say a word. Suddenly, Packy, who had been sitting quietly in the back seat, bristled and began to growl. Steve smiled and asked the dog, as if he could tell if he could smell the goblins. Upon hearing this, Chad said he wasn't ready right now and asked if they could just leave. But Steve didn't listen to him. He got out of the car, said that he would be back soon and asked him to wait. Chad panicked, reached for the door Steve had just exited, and asked him not to leave. But Steve did not hear his request, as only dust remained in his place, and our hero was already rushing forward. Chad looked at the spot where Steve had just been, and was both amazed and shocked by his older brother's speed. Meanwhile, in the instant loan office, they couldn't forget the two brothers. The men watched a video on YouTube with our heroes. One asked if it was really him, and the second answered that yes, and he is now a YouTube star. The man said that our hero was unusual, and it was impossible to measure his strength, and the man in the chair irritably said that then the mercenary would not be able to cope with him. The man standing there was indignant that he couldn't just sit there with his hands folded. The man at the computer asked for a list of all the guilds they cooperate with, and the second one said that if it was Station 4, then it was Mr. Vincent. They remembered a mercenary for whom removing a person is not a problem, because he had already removed 6 debtors. The man at the table grinned sinisterly and told me to call Vincent and give him as much money as he asked for. Leaden clouds were gathering over the city, foreshadowing not just rain but a real thunderstorm. The rain caught the grandmother who was hosting Chad and his son while she was shopping, and she said they had to hurry. Suddenly, a black car stopped in front of her, blocking the road. 3 people in black suits got out of the car, 2 men and a woman. The woman approached the grandmother, showed her her ID, said they were from the bureau, and asked how they could see Steve. The grandmother said nothing and just silently looked at the people and the ID. The storm also caught Chad, who at that time was still sitting in his brand new car, waiting for his brother. The guy muttered that he couldn't see anything because of the rain, and Steve had been gone for 30 minutes. Suddenly, Pecky bristled and growled, looking somewhere ahead. At that very moment, the head of a giant monster crashed into the glass of the car door, frightening the guy. The monster's body slowly slid down and only a clawed paw and the creature's wheezing were visible. The car door swung open, startling Chad even more. It was Steve, telling the guy to get out. The guy was very scared, but when he saw Steve, he calmed down a little. The guy stood around the monster lying on the ground and bleeding. Despite the wounds, the goblin continued to growl and tried to attack the guys. Chad let out a startled cry as the monster tried to attack him and covered himself with his hands. A knife fell onto the wet ground, and the sound of its fall echoed throughout the street. Steve turned to his younger brother and seriously told him to follow him, killing monsters. Chad grabbed the knife in fear and stuttered for Steve to stop. Hearing his brother's request, Steve turned around and sternly asked him what happened. Chad stuttered and asked our hero if he had to wake up. But Steve was adamant and said, "If you are weak and will not survive, kill." The younger brother sadly lowered his head, realizing that he could no longer argue with his brother. Suddenly, the monster lying on the ground jumped up, baring its toothy mouth. Little Pekka stood before him, baring his teeth, ready to fight on command. Without thinking, Steve ordered Pekka to bite the monster. The kid boldly rushed forward towards the monster, obeying our hero's order. Pecky bit into the goblin's paw, despite the fact that the monster was many times larger. The goblin grabbed the puppy by the head with his huge paw, trying to detach it from his hand. Steve had no intention of interfering and calmly said that Pecky was still too young, adding that if Chad didn't intervene, the baby would die. With tears in his eyes, the younger brother begged Steve not to do it. A flash of lightning tore through the black sky, and with it, Steve shouted loudly, "Kill him!" Chad was breathing heavily and looked at the knife in fear, clutching it with both hands. And while he was thinking, the monster had already torn Pecky from his hand and was ready to sink its teeth into him. Chad swung the knife with a scream. He knew that if he didn't do something, Pecky would die. The guy thrust the knife into the monster's head with force, and blood splashed in all directions. The monster's lifeless hand fell to the ground, releasing Pecky from its clawed paws. But one blow was not enough for our hero, and he shouted for Chad to continue. Screaming in anger, Chad swung his knife and began to furiously stab the monster. Chad threw the bloody knife away from himself, and a stream of blood began to flow from it onto the wet ground. The guy fell to his knees, breathing heavily and forcing air into his lungs. Chad looked at his bloody hands in horror, not believing what had happened. Steve walked up to his younger brother and looked down at him and told him to hold the blade. Tears streamed down Chad's blood-stained face, and he cringed, telling his brother that he couldn't do it anymore. But Steve was adamant and repeated that if he did not kill, they would kill him. Suddenly, Pecky jumped up and began to growl threateningly. Chad's eyes widened in fear when he heard the puppy growl, because Pecky was growling at the monster that was approaching the boys. Steve told his brother without a trace of emotion to kill the monsters because they didn't have much time. Our hero turned and walked away from Chad, not intending to help him. Looking at the back of his brother as he left, Chad called out to him again pitifully, and tears welled up in his eyes again. The scene from the past came back to him, with the bullies bullying Chad and Steve walking by. He walked with his head down, pretending not to notice how his little brother was being bullied. And then, as now, Chad reached out to his brother, calling him and asking him not to leave. But Steve in the past, without even looking back, moved on. Even now, in the pouring rain, Chad saw the back of his older brother walking away. Tears streamed down Chad's cheeks as he called out for his brother again, knowing he wouldn't come. And along with this thought came the realization that the fear on the guy's face was replaced by determination, and his gaze became stern. The younger brother watched as his older brother left, but he no longer called him or asked him to come back. Chad reached over and picked up the bloody dagger he had thrown earlier. The goblin growled and bared his toothy mouth, intending to kill Chad. As if in a trance, the guy began to rise, tightly clutching the dagger in his hand. He said quietly that his brother had always been like this, without addressing anyone. Lightning lit up the sky again, and with it, Chad rushed from his place towards the screaming goblin. He pierced the monster's head with such force that the tip of the knife came out of its head. Chad woke up, his eyes glowing red, and he hissed softly at the screaming monster to shut up. He thrust the knife deeper into the screaming monster's mouth, ignoring the splashes of blood. There was no longer any fear or alarm on Chad's face, only bloodlust and hatred. He pressed even harder on the blade and yelled at the monster to shut up already. The dagger emerged from the monster's head, cutting it in half and leaving behind a fountain of blood. But this was no longer enough for Chad, and he leaned over the monster's body, screaming, "Die!" He plunged the dagger into the dead body again and again, continuing to scream for it to come down. Chad stood over the body of the mangled goblin, breathing heavily and air whistling out of his mouth. The rain continued to pour as the boy raised the dagger to his face. Lightning lit up the sky, and Chad's face, who seemed to have gone mad, and was smiling as he looked at the dagger. At that moment, another goblin approached him, clutching his hand with a dagger, and his mouth was very close to Chad's face. The goblin pounced on the guy, and they both flew down to the ground. Chad plunged the dagger into the goblin's toothy, drooling mouth. He swung the blade harder, cutting the carotid artery, and blood flowed like a fountain onto the guy. With the goblin dealt with, Chad walked forward, muttering under his breath that it was sticky and going up his arm. The feeling of cutting into flesh. The crazy smile never left the guy's face, and he whispered nonsense. "What are you doing? Don't, save me." Looking at the building on whose roof our hero was sitting, Chad laughed. Steve saw that his brother had awakened and his status had become a cold-blooded killer, which surprised the guy. Looking down at the boy, Steve said what a cute little brother he had. Steve asked Chad, louder now, if he happened to work part-time at a slaughterhouse. Chad was unrecognizable. His eyes were mad and filled with hatred and murderous lust. But Steve didn't react to his brother's changes and told him to get up. Giggling stupidly, Chad obeyed his brother, but the aggression in his eyes was still visible. Steve said they would end here, and behind him lay half-dead goblins. Dozens, maybe hundreds, wheezing and growling. The rain still hadn't stopped when, having dealt with the monsters, the guys came to the Bureau of the Awakened. They walked up to the counter. Steve stood there with a frown on his face, and Chad was unrecognizable because he was covered in goblin blood. The girl at the reception was clearly surprised by this duo and asked what their business was. Steve pointed to the bloody Chad and said that he had just woken up. The girl said that first he needed to wash himself, then go through a quarantine inspection, and then come to the measuring room on the 3rd floor. As he walked up the stairs, Chad asked what the measuring room was. The guy replied that there was a device that measured strength. If the number was more than 100, then he would be registered as an awakened F rank. Steve complained that he failed the test last time because he got a 96, but Chad didn't believe him. The boys came into the strength measurement room, and Chad was asked to lie down. The guy was dressed in a special suit and connected to a device that measured strength. The machine showed 111 points, and the employee said that he could go to the Hall of Ability Manifestation. The doctor turned to Steve and asked if he wanted to measure his strength too. Our hero agreed and lay down in the apparatus that Chad had just been in. Steve closed his eyes, listening to the hum of the machine that measured the force. Suddenly, he saw many eyes in front of him and a sign saying that someone was watching him and that information about him was in. Part of the text was hidden. Steve opened his eyes and saw that his strength was now 189. But even this did not shock the guy as much as the picture he saw while measuring the force. The doctor, looking at the indicators, said that the rumors were not lying, and his strength was growing at an incredible speed and soon he would become level E. Steve was not interested and asked the doctor who created this device. The doctor laughed at the strange question and said that it was created by scientists. But Steve didn't understand why the doctor was so cheerful and asked again which scientists he was talking about. The girl at the reception handed Chad an awakened ID and a box with a phone in it. She said the phone was a gift and added that he had received a score high enough for a mercenary. Steve praised the guy for a job well done, and he sheepishly thanked him. Our hero asked if he had seen anything strange when the force was measured, and he replied that he had seen nothing. He assumed that he was simply too sensitive and asked about his brother's skills. Chad clearly didn't like his skill because he sadly said its name, decapitation. Suddenly, that same blonde walked past the guys, surrounded by several subordinates. Steve noticed her immediately and turned around in surprise. Our hero ran after the girl and joyfully shouted to her, "Blondie, surprise her subordinates with this." Hearing a familiar voice, the girl turned around and looked questioningly at our hero. One of the guys asked in surprise who had addressed their leader like that, asking if he really wanted to die. Another guy recognized our hero and said that it was Steve, and everyone else realized who he was. With a peaceful smile, Steve apologized for what he had said earlier, adding that he was not used to talking to civilized people. But the girl interrupted him, saying that everything was clear to her and suggested that they never meet again. Jean moved on, and the guys began to discuss how quickly she turned down our hero. The other guy said she didn't blow him off, it was just a small argument. Jean thought Steve was crazy, remembering what he had just said, not believing he was wrong. Jean and her subordinates left, but their conversations could be heard. One said that there was definitely something between them. The second suggested that she was getting married, and the third said that Steve would save them. Jean shouted at them, asking if they were going to get up, and the boys ran forward briskly. Steve looked after them thoughtfully and said, "It's a pity that she has the character of a shrew." A black car was parked near a building with a sign that read, "Steve's Clan." Inside, two people clinked glasses of booze, nearly spilling the contents. The girl from the office drank it with pleasure and said that the strawberry liqueur was ideal. Grandma said that young people like it. Her son-in-law insisted on it for 10 years but never got to try it. Finishing the tincture, the girl sincerely said that she wished death on all monsters. Granny smiled broadly and said that she spoke very beautifully. The girl, in turn, said that this dumpling soup was the best in her life, and the granny added that it would go perfectly with a drink. The girl noticed that Steve was late, and at that very moment Grandma said that he had finally arrived. Steve and Chad walked into the room where the granny and the girl were sitting and looked at them in surprise. Bill ran out to meet them. He was glad to see his dad and Pekka back. The boy ran into his dad's arms and asked what took him so long, and Chad asked if he had a good time. While the father and son were talking, a girl approached Steve and addressed him. Steve was wary and asked who she was, but despite his question, he already saw her name and rank on the sign, a 2. The girl said she was Manager Melissa from the Returned Management Group from the Bureau of Awakened People. Steve asked why she was there, and the girl replied that she had come to make a deal with him. Our hero did not expect such an answer and asked again what exactly she wanted. Melissa asked if he knew the official name of the repatriate, and our hero replied that he had no idea. The girl mysteriously lowered her voice and said that they were called coordinators. Steve was surprised, but the name intrigued him. Melissa asked if he had gone through a red portal when he returned. The guy said yes, and she explained that such a portal means that the repatriate has fulfilled the condition for safe return. But Steve didn't understand this story and asked again what it meant. The girl explained that this portal would appear again and would work in both directions, and our hero asked where it would appear. Instead of answering, the girl raised her hand and pointed forward at our hero. But Steve again did not understand what this meant and looked questioningly at the girl. The girl explained that the portal would appear next to the coordinator, that is, next to him. Our hero thoughtfully rubbed his chin, digesting the information he had received. He remembered the pack of wolves he had lived with for 10,000 years in another world, and thought he could meet them. Melissa said that their administration assumes that this will be a 4th new planet. The girl added that if their guess is correct, then their country will have the only planetary portal to the 4th planet in the world. But all this was not interesting to Steve, and he asked when this portal would appear. Melissa replied that the portal would appear within 99 days. Our hero asked the next question, asking what she wanted from him. Melissa said that until the portal opens, he cannot travel abroad. Steve did not expect such a condition and asked in surprise, "Why?" The girl answered directly that they did not want Steve to become the second hero. But our hero was not familiar with this name, and he asked who it was. Melissa was surprised that Steve wasn't familiar with Hero's case. She said that Hero is #1 in the world, and he used to be a citizen of their country. Steve asked with interest what that meant. The girl said that in the first days after the disaster, the government detained many repatriates because there was little information about the unusual. Hero was an awakened Class B who escaped from the facility after returning, and the gate to planet Kuchun, which is now in another country, was created by him. She asked if Steve knew what the dimensional industry was, and added that if the portal was activated while Steve was abroad. Because of this, their country will suffer great losses, and after that Steve told everything. He understood. And the first thing he asked after this story was what he would get in return. Melissa was prepared for this question and asked what he wanted. Steve said he wanted to promote the clan to a guild and expand the territory of Steve's guild. All this time, Donnie was eavesdropping on the conversation behind the wall and was shocked by such conditions. The girl didn't object and said that if he had any questions, he could ask them. And then Steve remembered that he hadn't asked the main thing. Melissa was used to conducting such negotiations and boldly asked what our hero wanted to know. Steve asked how he would know when a portal had appeared. The girl replied that an agent specializing in searching for small energy faults would be sent. She added that this was their best agent, and Steve was intrigued by these words. Jean remembered Steve's offer to create offspring with him, and she was filled with anger. The girl was working out in the gym and was shouting angrily, asking him if he really thought she was that simple. Colleagues watched this training in shock, wondering what was wrong again. The girl hit the punching bag with all her might, and the stuffing flew out in all directions. She decided that he should have been charged with sexual harassment. Melissa suddenly appeared next to Jean and asked who should be charged with harassment. Jean replied that it didn't matter and that she was in a bad mood, and Melissa asked when she had ever been in a good mood. Jean irritably said that she had dragged it out and asked why she had come, and was told that she was going on a mission. The girl was not happy with this news and she irritably asked what the mission was. Melissa handed Jean the mission documents, and the more she read, the more she began to shake. She was so angry that she could only ask why her. Melissa responded immediately, expecting this question, saying that she is a professional. But Jean was not satisfied with this answer, and she asked again why her, to which the girl replied that she was the best. Jean couldn't say anything and just looked angrily at Melissa, as if this could cancel the mission. The girl asked in response what she thought would happen when the portal opened. Jean had already seen what was happening at that moment and, having calmed down, replied that hell would break out. Melissa said that if she noticed cracks in the space, then she needed to leave with Steve. And until that happened, she needed to be with him all the time. With a sly grin, the girl repeated the word, always again, and asked if Jin understood what it meant. Without waiting for an answer, Melissa walked out of the room, giggling at the furious Jean. Looking after the girl, Jean angrily said that she would definitely write a letter of resignation. Chad sat in his room, holding his head, into which strange thoughts were creeping. Don't leave, they'll kill you, don't leave, they'll kill you. The boy was brought out of the depths of this obsession by his son's voice, who called him to eat. The guys, as usual, gathered in a cafe where the sign of the Wall clan was hanging, from where a joyful cry was heard. Chad asked what was going on, and Donnie replied that their clan was doing great. He happily said that Steven's clan could now descend into the second-level dungeons. Steve was delighted to hear the news and said it was wonderful. Cha said that for the second-level dungeons you need a D rank, and they don't even have a lot of warriors. He asked if it might be better to go down to the first-level dungeons first. Donnie agreed, but immediately added that since he was with Steve, they could go to the second-level dungeons. Steve said that first they will collect more money in the first-level dungeon and try to get stronger, and then they will think about recruiting new members. Everyone agreed with this decision, and at that moment someone approached them. Donnie was the first to hear someone approaching their table and turned around. Munch stood next to them. He greeted everyone, folding his hands and saying, "Save us, great Buddha." Donnie asked if the monk had eaten, and Bill waved his hand at his appearance. Monk replied that he had already eaten and suggested that they move on. And next to him on the sign was level F5. At the entrance to the dungeon there was a crowd of cars. Some were honking, and some were cursing at the driver. There were many other teams at the portal, all of whom were inspired and moving forward with briskness. In this crowd, one of the guys noticed our guys and turned to them. The four of them went into the dungeon, and Chad brought up the rear. The guy called Steve by name, smiling happily at him. Our hero happily shook Jim's hand, and he said that he had heard about the creation of the clan. Steve asked the guy about the guys he was with last time. For a moment, the smile was replaced by a stern expression on his face. Jim was collecting his thoughts, deciding what to say. But he smiled again and said everything was fine. Steve asked why he was alone then. Jim was called by the guys from his team, saying that it was time for them to come in. Avoiding the question, Gene said he had to go and promised to contact Steve. Our hero smiled and waved his hand, saying that he would wait. Munch asked Steve who it was, and he replied that it was his friend from the dungeon. The guys went into the portal, and their bodies were enveloped in a blue glow, and their faces were filled with enthusiasm and readiness for battle. And they didn't even suspect that someone was watching their team. It was the mercenary, Vincent, who was watching the team with interest. One of the guys from Gene's team recognized Steve, and the other one said that it was time for them to go too. And Jin thought that he couldn't tell Steve about the disintegration of his clan. Two of them left the team under the pretext of rest, and when the main core members of the clan are gone, it disintegrates. Null clans are easy to create, but also easy to disintegrate. The stress of death and murder has decided everything, and those two may no longer be mercenaries at all. Entering the portal, the commander said that he had hopes for Jim and the Vanguard. And mercenaries without clans organize one-day teams and attack dungeons, and among them are people who are destined to become comrades. But Jin did not lose hope and firmly decided that he would start all over again. At this time, a motorcycle was racing through the city streets, with a girl in a red suit at the wheel. Jean reported that she left the office of Steve's clan. They say that in the morning they went to the dungeon. Melissa, who was in the office, said she would send her the location now. Jean saw the information on the helmet screen and said that she received the data. She raced on her motorcycle towards the specified coordinates. Her long hair caught in the wind. And in the dungeon the battle raged. Monsters flew in different directions, and cries of the spell could be heard. Chase the dragon. The summoned dragon glowed with blue light and scattered the monsters, leaving them no chance. This was Monk's new spell, the summoning of a dragon. Nearby, Chad wielded a knife, cutting down monsters, and Donnie explained that he had recently joined a clan nicknamed the Bounty Hunter. Donnie also talked about his new skill, chasing. Donnie was slashing at the monsters, wanting them to die, when Donnie shouted to look behind him. At that moment, a monster was flying at Chad from above, preparing to attack from behind. But the guy managed to react and, raising the knife up, ripped open the monster's belly. And at that moment, there was a smile on Chad's lips that looked more like a beast's grin. Donnie noticed that smile and wondered in horror if he really enjoyed killing monsters. Meanwhile, Steve stood above and watched as the guys dealt with the crowd of monsters. Our hero was pleased with what he saw and praised the guys who were able to deal with the monsters together. And nearby, another team was not fighting so smoothly, and a series of explosions swept through the forest. One guy was running from a crowd of monsters and kept throwing fireballs at them, causing them to fly in different directions. But he didn't even think that his comrades, who were also caught in the explosions, were suffering along with the monsters. Jin fell to the ground, injured and cursed at his comrade, asking what he should do when fireballs were flying at him. Suddenly, the guy with the fireballs was wrapped around the belt by the monster's red tongue. Monsters that looked like giant frogs devoured Jin's comrades, and they called for help. Almost losing consciousness, Jim remembered the guys from Steve's clan and thought that he was jealous. He stood up with difficulty, deciding that they would not accept the old man from the E-clan into the clan. And at this time, our guys were already returning and exiting the portal, shining with blue light. Donnie happily said that this time they saved time and their fatigue was reduced. And Munch added that he tried out skills that he didn't know before. Steve praised the boys and said that from now on, they would split into groups and attack. At that moment, a man approached them and asked if they were Steve's clan. Our hero immediately asked who he was, looking at the man with distrust. The man introduced himself as Vincent from the BDG Guild and handed over his business card. Donnie thought in surprise that this was a level 5 guild. They had 4 stations and the right to their own portal. They were in 20th place on the list of guilds. Steve took the business card and, looking at it, asked what his business was. Vincent said that they were in the same territory as Steve's famous clan and decided to give them a gift. All the guys were surprised by the words about the gift. The man said that he heard about the clans leveling up, and as a congratulation, he wanted to give them tickets to a second-level dungeon under their direct control. Donnie happily said that since these were the first tickets to the second-level dungeon, they were very expensive. Vincent smiled and asked if they wanted to go down there right now. Chad was cautious and said that since it was a second-level dungeon, shouldn't they prepare first? Winston replied that there was no need to worry and that they would provide everything necessary for the descent as a gift. Donnie said with admiration that with such support they could definitely cope. But Steve said that they should go to the first level dungeon to improve teamwork, and he himself would go down there. It would be more efficient. Hearing this, Vincent smiled contentedly, but immediately tried to hide this smile. The guys agreed with Steve without arguing and said that's exactly what they would do. Vincent pointed to a brown SUV and invited them into his car. The SUV drove towards the entrance to the dungeon, through destroyed buildings overgrown with grass. Vincent radioed that they would use entrance number 47 and was told that they could enter immediately. Steve noticed that there were no mercenaries visible along the road, and Vincent confirmed that it was empty. The man said that this portal had appeared recently, and that he had taken care of all the details so that Steve could enter right away. Steve said that it was very kind, and the man replied with a smile that if his clan continued to use their portals, they would be very grateful. After some thought, Steve said that they were indeed close enough. Arriving at the portal, Vincent asked the worker if everything was ready, and he answered yes. The worker handed Steve a backpack and said that it contained everything he needed to go underground. Putting on his backpack, Steve turned to Vincent and said that if he came back, they would have lunch together. The man waved at him and said that they would definitely have a drink together when he returned. Steve pressed a button on the suit around his neck and a helmet began to appear around his head. Once the helmet was fully formed, Steve walked boldly into the portal, which enveloped him in a blue glow. Watching our hero enter the portal, Vincent began to whistle contentedly. At that moment, he heard the roar of an approaching motorcycle behind him and turned around. Jean took off her helmet and asked if the one who had just entered the portal was Steve or not. Vincent said that everything was correct and asked who she was. The girl rushed to the portal and said that she was from Steve's clan and was also entering the portal. Vincent said, "Okay," and smiled slyly as he watched the girl run into the portal. He remembered a conversation with a man from a credit institution. Vincent immediately set a price of $2 billion for both, but the man said that it was too expensive because it wasn't even murder. Vincent replied that this was not a simple manipulation. Steve was a famous person, so the risk was high. Unaware of anything, Jean boldly ran into the portal, her body enveloped in a blue glow. A long time ago, she found the guys from Steve's clan and approached them. Looking at the guys, Jean asked where Steve was. Chad stepped forward and explained that Steve had recently been invited to the dungeon, indicating where they were going. Jean jumped on her motorcycle and took off after the SUV, telling them that Steve was going to enter the dungeon again. Melissa watched everything through the monitor screen and told the girl to follow him. Jean asked in surprise why she should follow him. The girl replied that she should check his skills personally and then send her a report. Jean asked irritably what she was looking at in the second-level dungeon, especially since she was in casual clothes. Melissa also began to get irritated and reminded that Jean had a bracelet. Jean declared fiercely that she treasured these things, but Melissa replied that she would double the bonus. Jean cursed in irritation and asked if it was really necessary to go to such extremes. Melissa calmed down and asked in a peaceful tone if it was time to catch Steve. But Jean was still angry and asked if the contract wasn't signed, to which the girl slyly replied that insurance is the basis, adding that she relies on it. Things began to dissolve as the girl entered the portal and she cursed mentally. At this time, Steve had already entered the portal and began to look around. Looking around, he said out loud that there was a completely different atmosphere here. Suddenly, he saw the portal behind him open again and began to turn around. But he didn't have time to turn around completely when he heard a furious cry, "Don't move, naked." Jean walked out of the portal, and Steve obediently stood with his back to her, only glancing sideways at the portal. Jean pressed the bracelet and a dark substance began to spread around her hand, and she said that if our hero turns around, he will die. The substance slowly spread over the girl's body, turning into a suit, while the girl complained about her mood. Glancing angrily ahead, Jean said that she needed to demand that her salary be tripled, and then she saw that Steve had been looking straight at her the whole time, without looking away. The girl became furious and screamed that she had told him not to look, calling him a pervert. Steve sheepishly said that he just liked her bracelet and asked if it had an inventory function. The girl's cheeks turned red, and she asked how long he had been staring at her, and the sign next to her showed her level, B8. Suddenly, Steve remembered the day he appeared from the portal and said that she saw him naked that day too. Our hero smiled triumphantly and said that now they were even. But Jean got angry and said that she didn't see him that day of her own free will, and Steve decided to change the subject and asked why she was there. Steve voiced the first thought that came to mind, asking if she wanted to fight. Jean asked if he hadn't heard from Melissa that she would send someone to him. Steve remembered this conversation and said that she was talking about a pro. The girl glanced sideways in embarrassment and said through clenched teeth that she was a pro. But Steve had a different opinion and said, "It seems not." The girl clenched her fists and said that she was dressed like that because she was in a hurry to get here. Our hero seriously told her not to interfere in any case. Jean replied that he shouldn't worry. She came as an observer. Suddenly, the girl felt something, as if an electric current ran through her body. She said that they had guests and our hero turned around in surprise. And behind him stood a huge monster in a loincloth with an axe in his hands. This monster was clearly stronger than those encountered earlier in the dungeon. He did not rush into battle, but watched carefully. Jean said that this orc is incredibly strong and added that our hero was unlucky to meet the orc boss at the very beginning of the dungeon. But Steve was calm and said that there were actually 4 orcs here. The girl looked at Steve with disbelief, asking again what he meant. Suddenly, from different directions there came a roar and the sounds of approaching enemies. Jean said in shock that this couldn't be happening, especially in a second-level dungeon. Steve repeated after the girl with a smile about the dungeon being only on the 2nd level. Jean didn't understand what our hero meant and asked what was wrong. In response, Steve asked if she didn't feel it when she passed through the portal and asked if she was really a pro. The girl got angry and tried to justify herself by saying that it was because of the bracelet. Steve prepared to run and asked the girl not to interfere with his hunt. At that very moment, he rushed forward so quickly that the ground flew apart in different directions, throwing the girl back. Covering her face with her hands, Jean wondered in surprise what kind of crazy speed he had. Our hero found himself next to the orc and hit him hard in the chest. Turning around, he grabbed the axe that the orc had dropped and prepared for another blow. The orc fell to one knee and rubbed his head in surprise, trying to recover from the blow. Meanwhile, the noise from the orcs approaching from all sides was getting closer and closer. Steve turned and struck the orc with his axe, splitting his head in half. At that moment, a second orc was already approaching him, enraged by the death of his fellow tribesmen. Seeing the orc approaching, Steve swung his axe. Torop pierced the monster, knocking out the last wheeze and a fountain of blood. And another orc was already running to replace the fallen one, tightly clutching an axe in his hands. Steve jumped onto the rock and ran along it, and the orc ran below, chasing the guy. After running a bit, Steve jumped off the cliff, seeing a forest with vines ahead. He flew on vines, watching the monster, who at that moment had lost Steve and was looking back questioningly. Our hero jumped from the vine, right above the head of the unsuspecting monster. Meanwhile, Vincent called the customer and asked to transfer the rest, because even with level C, it would be difficult to get out of this dungeon. The man grinned predatorily when he heard the question about what level this dungeon was. Meanwhile, Steve killed another monster by plunging a dagger into its head. Jean, who was watching our hero's fight, looked at what was happening in disbelief. Steve crouched down next to one of the slain monsters, as if not noticing that the next orc was already running towards him. The guy got excited and said that it didn't matter what level they were as long as he could kill everyone here. The monster thrust the axe a few centimeters away from our hero, who managed to react and jump to the side. Steve hit the monster hard in the chest, sending him flying to the side. With the next blow from above, he finally finished off the orc who fell to the ground. Steve, with his helmet bloodied, looked straight into the face of the orc, from whose mouth blood was flowing. The dead monster sat near the tree, and Steve saw a sign saying he had received 32 points. Our hero exclaimed with satisfaction, saying that this dungeon was a real treasure trove. Without turning around, he handed Jean the backpack that he had been given for the trip to the dungeon. The girl took the backpack in surprise, and Steve asked her to help with the bloodstones. Without saying anything else, our hero walked towards the monster, leaving Jean standing behind in surprise. Looking at the guy, Jean thought that although he was unusual, he was only an F level. And while Steve was carving the stone, the girl thought that despite this, he could easily have carried out a bloody massacre. As a result, Jean came to the conclusion that our hero was simply crazy. Suddenly, the girl felt something and glanced to the side. She turned her head to the side and used the reconnaissance skill. Meanwhile, Steve cut out a bloody stone and told the girl to look at how huge it was. But Jean wasn't interested, and she said through her teeth that now was not the time. Steve looked at the girl in surprise and asked why. Throwing her backpack on the ground, Jean said that even after killing 4 orc bosses, the portal would not open. The girl added that there were only stones in the backpack, asking if he knew about it. Steve started taking stones out of his backpack and said that in that case he would put all the bloodstones here. The girl became more and more angry and nervously rubbed her head, wondering what was wrong with our hero. Unable to bear it, Jean said that this was a 4th level dungeon, and if its level was higher, then even if they joined forces, they would not get out of here alive. Steve was shocked to hear that he just sent him to the 4th level dungeon, and for free. The girl realized that our hero had ignored half of what she had told him and looked at the guy in horror. And Steve, delighted, shouted that if he gets out of here, then he will definitely pay for Vincent's dinner. Jean couldn't believe what she heard and asked in disappointment if they were really idiots. Suddenly, the girl felt that she was being attacked and turned around just as the monster was flying at her with a weapon. She wanted to grab the sword, but the side where it usually hung was empty. Then Jean remembered that she had left the sword on the motorcycle because she was in a hurry to catch up with Steve. But Steve came to her aid and cut off the monster's head before he could get the girl. Jean watched in surprise as the monster's head flew away from the body. The headless body collapsed next to the girl, drenching everything around with blood. Steve smiled as he looked at Jean and said that he was strong, although he had been stronger before. The girl did not believe his words and looked at him with a skeptical gaze. Suddenly, Jean felt something, and her eyes widened in surprise. They turned in the same direction with Steve and listened warily. The girl used the clairvoyance skill, and her eyes lit up with a blue light. In the infrared light, she saw dozens of monsters moving towards them and cursed. Jean immediately told Steve that a bunch of orcs were approaching them, and they were at a dead end. Looking at the running orcs with the leader at the head, the girl asked in fear if there really was a whole army against them. Steve smiled and said that even though Munch wasn't here, the monsters were still coming towards them, and Jean asked him to shut up. The first to approach them were the orcs, racing on harnessed wolves. Looking around at the attackers, Jean shouted that it seemed like there were only orcs here. But Steve did not hear the girl and was delighted with the harnessed wolf. Meanwhile, the ogre was getting closer and closer and had already begun to swing his weapon. Steve rushed forward, telling the girl not to touch the monsters, and she replied that he was thinking about other things. The girl used the shield skill and successfully repelled the orc's attack, and Steve rushed towards the next attacker. The orc's head split into two parts, and a surprised grimace froze on his face. And at the moment when the dead body fell to the ground, Steve was already rushing to the next task. At this time, Jean used the next skill and took out a sword from her inventory. She made several blows at the monster that attacked her, but at the sight of the blows, only small cuts remained, and the orc looked at his wounds in surprise. Jean clicked her tongue and thought that she had only taken the blade, looking at the minor wounds. But at that moment, Steve ran up to them and shouted, "I told you not to touch mine," and jumped on the orc from above. With one kick, he knocked the monster out of the harnessed wolf and it flew to the side. Our hero landed easily behind the girl and prepared for a new blow. Like a meteor, he rushed forward, cutting down all the monsters in his path. Our hero boldly rushed into battle as a new wave of orcs approached him. But the next moment, he was knocked down by a blow to the side from a huge club. Huge even among the other monsters, the ogre threw our hero aside with blows from the back of the club. That orc looked like, if not a leader, then an army general. He was larger than the others, wearing a fur cape and with decorations on his neck. Jean immediately realized that this monster was the head of all the orcs. Steve fell to the ground and the dagger flew out of his hands. But he immediately jumped up and, clenching his fist, enthusiastically asked the monster if he was the boss of all these monsters. But the orc only stamped his foot with such force that dust rose up around him and swung his club. Jean ran towards Steve, shouting that he needed to be destroyed first. At the moment when the club almost reached the guy, he jerked to the side, dodging the blow. He deftly dodged the second blow and found himself above the head of the huge monster. Clutching the dagger tightly in his hands, our hero brought it down on the monster's head with all his might. Jean couldn't believe her eyes and asked out loud if he had really succeeded. Steve, surprised, pulled the blade out of the monster's head and saw that it was broken. At that very moment, the orc boss managed to reach our hero with his club and hit him in the stomach, throwing him away from himself. Jean couldn't believe her eyes when she saw that Steve had actually been hit. Meanwhile, no one in the Bureau of the Awakened suspected a trap. Melissa received a call from a subordinate asking if it was too weird, and she asked what it was. The guy asked if Jean hadn't gone to Steve, and Melissa asked what the point of the question was. He said that Steve and Jean's phones were too far apart, and there had been no traffic for almost an hour. The guy said that, judging by the signal, Steve was in the first level dungeon, but he didn't finish telling where Jin was now. Melissa started to get nervous and asked the guy what he was talking about because they were supposed to be together. At this time, the rest of Steve's clan came to the truck to rest and drop off their equipment. Donnie looked into the car and saw that Steve had left his phone on the car seat. Meanwhile, Jin's phone was still on the motorcycle and was ringing off the hook. Unable to reach Jean, Melissa asked her subordinate if he had found out what was going on and where the guys were. The guy replied that he had just checked everything and found Jean in the 5th level dungeon. The girl began to remember what Jin had ordered to enter the portal and wondered if it was worth it to go to such lengths. But then Medusa gathered herself again and asked who was in charge of this dungeon. The guy replied that it was the DGB Guild and sent her information about the guild. She gave the order to check the history of the entrances to the 5th level dungeons and asked to connect her with the guild leader right now. The fight continued. Steve let out a quiet yelp as he hit his back against the wall, and the monsters kept arriving, ready to join the battle, growling menacingly and waving their weapons. Seeing our hero fly into the wall, Jean rushed towards him, shouting his name. Steve was unconscious from the powerful blow when suddenly a voice sounded in his head telling him to get up. Hearing the voice, the guy came to his senses and saw a crowd of monsters rushing towards him. But this further increased the interest of our hero, and he said with a smile that it was a bit difficult for him. Leaping into the ground, Steve grabbed the nearest monster and threw it over himself with force. The orc flew back, hitting another monster, and they tumbled to the side. Our hero picked up 2 axes that the orcs released. He jumped into the air and threw them with all his might at the approaching monsters. Both axes hit the orcs' heads and they fell to the ground, but the rest of the monsters continued to approach. Jean continued to run forward towards Steve as a hail of arrows rained down from the sky. The girl was surprised by the preparation of this army, since they even had archers. She deftly dodged several arrows by doing a forward somersault. But because Jean had to stop, a crowd of monsters headed towards her. The girl didn't lose her head and used her defensive bomb skid, and light poured out of her hands. From this light, the monsters began to crumble like dust. And when the monsters began to surround the girl again, Steve ran up and grabbed her hand, pulling her forward after him. And the orc boss watched their escape from afar, growling loudly. Jean asked what Steve was doing, and he replied that they needed to run, without letting go of the girl's hand. Jean angrily said that they were surrounded by monsters. Where else could they run? Steve pulled the 2-room apartment toward the mountainside, saying it was empty. She answered in fear that she couldn't go there because there was only a cliff ahead. But our hero continued to pull her forward, saying that this was exactly why they needed to go there. Suddenly, Steve picked up the girl in his arms when they were almost on the cliff. The girl asked fearfully what he was doing, and Steve told her to hold on tighter. Our hero jumped off the cliff at full speed, holding Jean tightly in his arms. The guy, clutching the girl to himself, flew down, and several orcs fell after him. He landed on both feet, and the ground around him cracked and flew in all directions. And around our heroes lay the bodies of orcs who had fallen with them and crashed to the ground. The girl, hugging Steve tightly, looked around in surprise, not believing that she was alive. Steve exhaled heavily after such a jump and dropped his hands, dropping Jean to the ground. He walked forward, saying that they were about to die, leaving the girl lying there in confusion. The girl's confusion turned to surprise when she looked up. She looked at the top of the mountain where the orcs stood and couldn't believe that they had jumped from such a height and remained alive. The boys found a cave to rest, and at that time a howl was heard throughout the forest. Jean and Steve were sitting in the cave, the girl hugging her knees with her hands, complaining that the monsters were howling disgustingly. She turned to our hero and, calling him Mr. Unusual, asked what his plan was. Steve replied that we needed to kill more Sokor orcs. Then there would be a level up and we could go on the offensive. Hearing the answer, Jean lowered her head and closed her eyes, sighing heavily. She said that level ups have no restrictions, but power-ups do. To which the guy replied that he has no restrictions at all. Jean didn't understand his answer and asked again what he meant. Steve just smiled and repeated that he had no limits even in power-ups. Meanwhile, the Earth was in turmoil and 2 military vehicles were racing towards the portal that our heroes had entered. And near the portal, a crowd of onlookers, journalists, and military personnel had already gathered, driving the crowd away from the dungeon. The reporter said that he was at the dungeon of the 5th level of the DGB Guild. 2 days ago, an accident happened here. Steve's clan was also near the portal, and Donnie was on his knees sobbing, worried about Steve. The police led away Vincent, who said that Jean and Steve had entered the dungeon themselves, but eventually confessed to the crime after questioning. Reporters asked Vincent to comment on the situation and asked what Steve's last words were. And Vincent was angry at this time because he didn't know that Jean was from the control center. The reporter said that Steve was getting so much attention because he was a repatriate from the 4th planet, telling what it meant for the world and the country. An excited Melissa walked into the boss's office. She sternly asked the man what he was doing now, surprising him with this question. Melissa scolded the men who hired Vincent and said that he should detain them. The boss said that these notorious guys had already been detained. Only the boss's assistant had escaped, but they were already looking for him. The girl replied that it was unfair. This was a 5th level dungeon. How could one use the word famous? The boss asked if she wanted him to shut down their entire guild. Would that bring Steve and Jean back alive? But Melissa was furious at this answer and asked if it was the same thing. The boss said that the fact that Steve is from the 4th planet is just an assumption. Maybe he is from the dungeon and not the planet. Melissa was outraged by these words and the boss's distrust. The voice on the TV said that due to the recent cases of criminal organizations Countermeasures must be taken to strengthen control over the illegal management of the dungeons, angering the chief with these words. He said that they were spreading news that was putting pressure on the guilds so that the inspection could come to them. But Melissa didn't listen to him, and with tears in her eyes said that it was she who sent Jean there. The boss turned around in surprise and looked at the girl. He said that it was not easy for him either, but they could only believe and wait, while the reporter said that the chance of surviving in this dungeon was very small. These words finally finished Melissa off and she fell to her knees, sobbing. The girl tried to stop her sobbing by covering her mouth with her hand, but in her head there were only thoughts about Jean. Meanwhile, fog descended into the dungeon. The trees were already leafless, but yellow-red leaves still remained on the bushes. The orcs continued to search for our heroes, and one of them was just checking the surroundings. Suddenly, a tiny fairy appeared in front of him, enveloped in blue light. The orc looked in surprise at the tiny baby that flew up to his face. But the next moment he tried to catch her, however, the fairy was quicker and managed to fly away. The orc lost his temper and shouted a spell in his own language at the top of his lungs. His axe glowed yellow, and he tried to reach the fairy again, swinging the axe. But the little girl was quicker and deftly dodged all the blows, flying into the bushes. The orc followed the fairy, and looking behind the tree, was surprised that she had disappeared. And at that very moment, Steve's blade pierced his head from above, cutting it in half. Steve smiled contentedly and said that there were 3 more to kill and then there would be a level up. Meanwhile, Jean used her clairvoyance skill to find enemies. Thanks to the skill, she saw in the infrared light that there was one orc not far from her. She relayed to Steve, who was nearby, that there was another orc within 100 meters. Our hero rushed forward from his place, leaving a shockwave behind him. The girl did not expect him to rush forward so quickly and tried to stop him. But Steve was already flying towards the next orc, swinging his dagger, aiming at his head. Jean ran after him, screaming at the top of her lungs that it was a trap. But she didn't have time, and the orc activated the trap. Several sharpened logs emerged from under the ground, right under our hero, throwing the guy back. He flew into the wall, hitting his back, and the dagger fell out of his hands. Jean watched in horror as our hero was attacked. Suddenly, the orc took out a horn and blew into it, sending a signal to the rest of his tribe. All the orcs around heard this sound, realizing that the trap had worked and one of them had found Steve. At the same time, after the signal, several orcs who had been sitting in ambush began to crawl out from underground. Jean ran as fast as she could towards our hero, shouting along the way for him to get up quickly. Thanks to Jean's scream, Steve came to his senses and turned around angrily. Our hero was still coming to his senses, and a crowd of orcs was already rushing towards him, ready to tear the guy apart. Suddenly, the guy's whole body began to tremble, and he grabbed his chest, surprised that he had fallen into a trap. He didn't understand what was happening. His senses were dulled, and all his strength seemed to leave his body. Meanwhile, the orcs were getting closer and closer, and one of them was already swinging his arm to strike. And then it dawned on Steve that he felt sick because he had been hungry for 2 days. Jean arrived just in time. She used her defense bomb skill, scattering the approaching orcs. Thanks to the spell, the first line of orcs was hit. Some were completely dissolved, while others were mortally wounded. After the spell, Jean collapsed to the ground, exhausted, and Steve rushed towards her. He grabbed an axe lying on the ground and killed 2 orcs with 1 blow. A mischievous smile appeared on his face again, and he thought that there was 1 more left. And jumping up to strike the next orc, Steve thought that this was his level up. But our hero was unable to strike, because a blow from the orc boss's huge club landed in his chest. The monster threw our hero back with force and he flew back like a doll. At this moment, Jean came to her senses, having lost consciousness after using the skill. She saw in front of her a huge orc with a club in his hands, who was growling menacingly. The girl said with disdain that this orc was just some fat guy. And Steve flew forward until he met an orc on his way, into whom he crashed. The axe fell from Steve's hands and sank into the orc's head. And at the same time, our hero received a message that his level had been increased. Lying on his back, Steve saw a message that suggested choosing the skill of transforming into a beast. Steve was surprised by the skill he received and wondered whether it was worth spending the points he received on it. At this time, the orc boss was approaching Jean, who was trying to get up. But the girl didn't even have the strength to just stand up. Standing on one knee, she summoned her sword, not going to give up without a fight. Meanwhile, night had already fallen in the city, and in the clan's house, Steve was called Packy. Granny carried a red bowl of food for the puppy and helped him eat. Hearing Granny, the white puppy rushed towards her, barking joyfully. The granny sadly told the puppy that now it was unknown what had happened to his owner, whether he was alive. But the baby did not understand anything that was said and happily approached the bowl of food. And the battle continued. Jean, with the last of her strength, repelled the orc's blows with a summoned sword. At this time, Steve activated the beast summoning skill. Suddenly, Pecky, who was eating food, flew up and began to glow blue. Granny looked with fear as the baby shone and slowly rose above the floor. Black smoke began to rise from our hero's back. And Jin parried another blow, jumping up, avoiding the huge club. Steve's face began to turn into a toothy black maw, shrouded in smoke. And the girl struggled to fend off the blows, trying to gain at least a little time. But, unlike Jean, the orc boss had a lot of strength and swung his weapon with ease. The black smoke began to dissipate, and the black fur covering Steve's body began to change to snow white. Jean missed one blow from the orc, and he hit her with his club with all his might, throwing her to the side. The girl's sword fell from her hands and fell to the ground with a clang. The orc boss rushed towards the fallen girl, and she only helplessly covered her head. And at that moment, a half-wolf with snow-white fur, in black armor, approached them. The orc noticed the beast approaching, but it had already raised its clawed paw to strike. With one paw, the beast knocked the orc boss to the ground, squeezing his head. Jean was surprised to see a werewolf that was the size of the orc boss and easily knocked him down. Steve unleashed a hail of blows on the orc, turning his head into a bloody pulp. The orc boss was no longer moving, and Steve continued to punch him, driving him into the ground. Jean watched the fight in shock, barely able to take in what was happening. Meanwhile, Steve was devouring the monster's body, receiving 45 points for the kill. Having finished with the orc boss, Steve turned his gaze to the girl and caught her surprised look. Taking a closer look at the werewolf, the girl asked in surprise if he was Steve. The beast opened its bloody mouth and barked, first once, then several more times. Jean was surprised that the werewolf was barking. She was amazed and said, "It turns out that he is not a wolf, but a dog." And he barked again. The reporter said that 3 days ago it became known that 2 people had fallen into the dungeon, but had never gotten out. And now there was a lonely motorcycle standing near the entrance. He interviewed the head of the Awakened Bureau and asked him to explain to the audience what this place was. The man said that this place is called the Orc Castle, and it is recommended that a group of 30 people, including at least 10 level A mercenaries, go down there. Listening to this story, the operator said that it was a circus, and the government sent Steve there to get rid of the guilds. He asked how much longer he had to film this interview, and the host asked how many people Steve would disturb if he returned. The operator asked how he would get out of there since he was not hero, but only level F, and added that in 2 everyone would be writing about it. He added that they will write about how their country has lost its place in the ranking. Meanwhile, in the house of Steve's clan, Pecky became an ordinary dog again, barking happily. Granny asked in fear what the hell was going on. Jean, like Granny, was very impressed by Steve's transformation. Returning to his normal form, Steve said that he could merge with the animals he had tamed. That is, it was not a transformation, but a unification. He turned to a bewildered Jean and asked why she was standing there. They needed to gather everything they could and get out. But Jean said with despair in her voice that it was all useless. Our hero did not understand why Jean said this and asked why she thought so. Instead of answering, Jean only said that this place would become their grave. Steve turned to the girl and asked what she meant. The sky burst into rain when the girl said that they killed the main one, but the portal did not open, and asked what he thought this meant. Hearing Jean's words, Steve suddenly realized that she was right, and the portal had not opened. Steve pointed to the body of the orc boss and asked if she really meant to say that this freak wasn't the boss. Without a shadow of a doubt, Jean replied that everything was exactly like that, and that there was someone stronger here. Steve smiled and asked who this guy was that had made her start talking about graves. The girl's face was serious, and in the pouring rain she began her story. About 3 years ago, when Jean had just reached level B, she and her group went down into the dungeon. She joined a raid of 20 people, 10 of whom were A-level from the Management Bureau, and they began to explore the 5th level dungeon. Jean walked in a group with the other guys, and there was complete concentration on their faces. The guy in front of Jin suddenly turned around and looked at her. The girl was surprised by such a close look and asked what was going on. The guy asked her how her ankle was, embarrassing her. She replied with a smile that there was no need to pay attention. It had already passed. The guy smiled at her sincerely and with warmth in his eyes replied that it was good. Melissa followed behind and said that they were a sweet couple, and that was why she said that a couple can't go on missions together. The squad stormed the orc castle and one of the walls was blown up by explosives, flying into pieces. A squad of orcs came out to intercept and ran towards the mercenaries. One of the mercenaries commanded them to storm the tower further and ordered Melissa to hold off the orcs in the direction of 3 o'clock. The girl scattered the crowd of orcs with a spell and said that it was done for 3 hours. The guy continued giving orders and said that the defense was weakening for 4 hours, asking who was there. The guy replied that he had been on the road for 4 hours, but an orc's blow didn't let him finish, and Jean picked up the message and shouted that they needed help. Melissa rushed towards Jean, screaming at her to hold on a little longer. But Jean was knocked off her feet and fell to the floor, screaming in pain. And a huge orc was already approaching her, baring his teeth. The girl stared at the orc in horror and couldn't even move. But they came to her aid, and the guy used a spell to scatter all the monsters approaching her. This spell caused the orcs to crumble into dust like stone statues, and Melissa continued to run towards them, scattering monsters with fireballs, clearing the way. The orcs burned and exploded from these blows, but still did not retreat and moved forward. Melissa shouted at Jean and Tim to look in the 2 o'clock direction. The boys turned around and saw another squad of orcs approaching them. Tim smiled at Jean and invited her to move on. But Jean was scared and tried to tell Tim something. The guy grabbed her hand and pulled her forward, offering to talk outside, but the girl tried to stop him. Turning around, she thought that a strange feeling was following her. Holding hands, Jean and Tim ran away from a squad of orcs who were almost catching up with them. Jean thought she felt like they were being watched. And in the distance, a huge orc with 3 eyes appeared. One bright flash, and the arm along with the sword was torn from the body and flew to the ground. Jean flew forward head over heels, trying to stop. The girl was still lying on the ground when a sword plunged into the ground in front of her, a few centimeters from her stomach. All the members of the mercenary squad turned around and confusion could be seen in their eyes. And Tim, his face covered in blood, lay on the ground with glassy eyes. And above him towered the Orc King in iron armor, who raised his weapon over Tim, who was lying on the ground. Tim met Jean's gaze and whispered the word, sword. But the girl did not understand what he meant. The girl remembered how she and Tim trained in the dojo, and heard his voice. Put a part of your soul into your sword, just as a fan cannot live without the wind. So the sword, faith, and heart must become one. Tim smiled warmly at her and said, Here's the sword, Jean. The Orc King brought his spear down with force and blood spurted out in all directions. After finishing her story, Jean lowered her head and secretly wiped away her tears. Steve put his hand on her shoulder and turned her towards him without saying a word. Our hero placed his hand on Jean's head, trying to comfort her. He put his arm around the girl, pulling her closer, saying, So that's what happened. And the sword that Jean had forgotten on the motorcycle seemed to start burning, and white smoke began to emanate from it. Donnie, meanwhile, was on air and was sobbing loudly, mourning Steve, asking how he could leave them. And the commentators discussed what happened. Some did not believe that Steve died. Some said that even he could not survive in the 5th-level dungeon. And others wished Steve to quickly deal with all the orcs. And next to Donnie sat Melissa, crying over Jean. The reporter said that the great shaman would be performing a ritual today for the safe return of the missing. He continued to tell that a raid of local high-ranking mercenaries was gathering in front of the dungeon, seeking revenge. Morris was one of the volunteers and thought sadly that if Steve had joined the guild, this would not have happened. But as it was just the right thing to do. A man with long hair was watching this report while sitting in the living room. The woman's arms wrapped around the man's neck from behind, and the girl asked what it was. And the guy replied that it was just a transfer from his homeland. It was the famous hero. He said that the shows in this country remained just as boring. And Steve and Jean had a real feast in the cave. The guy was surprised that after leveling up, you can buy more food in the store. The guy advised him to try a steak sandwich, and the girl replied that with such an assortment he could open a fast food outlet. While chewing on a burger, Steve told Jean that she, it turns out, is also a food lover. Taking a bite of the new burger, she asked if 12 pieces was a lot. But apparently Steve's words confused her, and she put down her uneaten burger, saying that she was full. Our hero did not understand how she could have eaten her fill and added that he was already on the 22nd, suggesting that the girl continue eating. Jean smiled softly and kindly at Steve and said that she was very grateful to him anyway. The fire in the cave gave way to a cloud of fireflies, and Steve asked with interest if it was really Jean who took the sword and killed the Orc King that time. The girl sadly replied that she had lost consciousness on the spot, and when she woke up, she was already in the hospital, and Melissa brought her Tim's sword. And that orc was only defeated by 2 elderly rank A mercenaries who sacrificed themselves. The Orc King's attack was comparable in strength to the attack of 5 orc chieftains at once. Steve said that it means there is such an orc here and asked where he is. The girl replied that he was in the orc castle, which was not even within a radius of 1 kilometer. And at this time, a fairy, who had previously distracted the orc, flew up to the cave where the boys were sitting. Jean said that the orc chieftains are in 4 small towers, and the lords are in the spire in the middle. And if you cross the wall, There are thousands of orcs moving there. A fairy flew up to Steve and whispered something in his ear. Hearing the news, he smiled contentedly and said that he had found the orcs' fortress. Jean was surprised by the speed and asked in surprise if he had really found her that quickly. Steve was confident in his abilities and with a smile suggested that they go forward. Jean wasn't so sure and asked what their plan was. Steve's smile turned serious and he replied, "Find and kill." Jean laughed at these words and said that she would have hit him, but she didn't have the strength left. Meanwhile, the orc castle was noisy, and roars could be heard from everywhere. The wooden gates of the fortress began to slowly descend, rolling over the moat near the castle. And from the gates, dozens of orc warriors rushed out, riding on wolves. Suddenly, Steve ran out of the bushes in the guise of Packy, and Jean was sitting on top of him, holding him by the mane. The boys rushed towards the open gates from which squads of warriors had just emerged. But they couldn't slip through unnoticed, and the goblins on the castle walls immediately discovered them. The warriors on wolves who rode out of the castle also saw the boys and began to turn around, and Jean noticed this. The girls shouted to Steve that they were being followed by an army of orcs and asked him to hurry. They were running forward as fast as they could when they saw the gates slowly begin to rise, and the archers on the walls prepared for the attack and pulled the bowstring. A hail of arrows fell on our heroes, but Jean put up a shield and not a single arrow reached them. Running up to the half-closed gate, the girl shouted at Steve to jump. He jumped at full speed onto the gate, grabbing onto its edge, and the warriors remained behind. But even outside the castle gates, a detachment of orcs was waiting for them. Ready to attack and defend the castle, Jean used her skill, Defense Bomb, shouting its name. The explosion cleared a path for them, sweeping away all the orcs in its path. Steve continued to run forward, avoiding the surviving orcs. The girl commanded him to run to the center, and Steve mentally told her to hold on tight. Steve lunged, and the orcs behind him were scattered by the shockwave. Our hero rushed forward straight along the castle wall. Jean was surprised and grabbed the beast's mane tighter. Several orcs jumped from above and flew past our heroes, one knocking Jean off Steve's back. The girl flew down along with the orcs, and Steve began to turn around. But Jean shouted at him not to think about the girl and to run on. She turned over in the air and, noticing the platform, grabbed hold of its wall with her hand. Jean deftly jumped onto this platform, avoiding further fall. But as soon as the girl landed, a crowd of orcs rushed towards her. But Jean didn't lose her head and summoned a sword, which appeared, enveloping the girl in blue lightning. Steve continued to run up the wall at this time, and the orcs could only watch him and growl. And at the top of the spire stood a throne, around which there were no walls. The three-eyed orc king, who had been sitting with his eyes closed, suddenly opened them. He sat proudly on his throne alone when he felt something. The monster stood up from his throne and walked forward to the edge to see what was going on. And at that moment, our hero jumped out at him, baring his mouth with the sharpest teeth. The beast grabbed the orc king by the throat, gnawing at his neck. Steve knocked him down and they both flew down from the tower where the throne stood. The giant monster king fell down, his chest pierced by the spire of one of the towers, and Steve received a message that his level had been increased. Shards from the tower fell like hail, falling on the orcs standing below. Suddenly, an explosion was heard in one of the towers, and the orcs turned around in surprise at the sound. From the place where the explosion occurred, orcs and Jin flew to the ground, and during the flight the girl thought, "Is this really how she's going to die?" But suddenly a clawed white paw grabbed her hand and she looked up in surprise. Steve pulled the girl close to him just before the ground and rushed forward, and the orcs ran after them. They ran a little forward and the girl asked what happened to the king, and Steve answered that he killed him. Throwing the girl onto his back, Steve said it was time for them to go, preparing to break into a run. Jean grabbed the guy's mane and asked if he really was able to kill the king, and Steve suggested that she scan the area. Jean activated the clairvoyance skill and, in disbelief, said that the portal had opened. She couldn't believe that Steve was able to kill the Orc King, and so quickly. And at this time on the ground, one of the devices began to beep and the time appeared on the screen. The guy from the DGB guild could only moan in shock, surprising his partner. He still managed to say that it was the 127th dungeon, and the second guy, shocked, asked again what that meant. Donnie also saw that a time counter had appeared above the dungeon and asked in surprise what it was. Melissa heard the announcement that the countdown to the portal explosion was beginning at dungeon number 127. Tears welled up in the girl's eyes when she realized that Jean might be alive. The crowd gathered at the portal roared as they saw the countdown to the portal's explosion begin. Steve asked Jean if she found the portal. The girl was a little confused and replied that she had found it. She immediately got ready and said that he was at 11 o'clock, 700 meters from the castle, and there were 10 minutes left before the explosion. Steve and the girl rushed forward, but the orcs did not lag behind and caught up with the guys. Suddenly, Steve turned a corner, smelling a familiar scent. Jean asked where he was going and added that they didn't have time for that. Steve didn't say anything. He ran to the pen where the pack of wolves stood. He activated the taming skill with a smile on his toothy face. Jean, in shock, asked again what he was doing, why he was taming them. And the wolves, hearing the command, froze and stared at Steve. Our hero turned and ran back to the portal, commanding the wolves to run after him. The wolves obediently followed Steve, jumping over the pens. Looking back, Jean asked if Steve wanted to take them with him. Steve replied that yes, because now they were one family. But because of this maneuver, the orcs were now in front, blocking their passage. Jean said that they were surrounded, clearly expecting this outcome. At that moment, a fairy flew up to Steve and whispered something in his ear, and Steve conveyed that there was a passage somewhere nearby. Jean was surprised and asked where he was. She immediately activated the clairvoyance skill and saw the right turn. The girl commanded that they needed to turn right now, and Steve ran into the right turn. And a crowd of wolves ran in the guy's footsteps, also running into the turn. The orcs ran after our heroes, growling with anger. The girl pointed to a huge gate ahead and said that they needed to go there. Steve became inspired and said that they were leaving here, picking up speed. Our heroes and a pack of wolves ran out of the gate and raced across the bridge. Jean said there was 1 minute left before the portal exploded. Suddenly, they saw a shining blue door in front of them and joyfully said that the portal was here. Jean said that there were 23 seconds left before the portal closed, and someone from the chase threw a spear at the guys. Jean sensed the approaching danger and turned around. Steve ran forward, not noticing how the spear hit the girl in the back. The blow caused the girl to fall to the ground and roll head over heels while the orcs approached her. The wolves had already run into the portal when Steve turned around, noticing that Jean had fallen off his back. The orcs were getting closer, rapidly approaching the fallen Jean. The spear pierced the backpack on Jean's back, and rocks rained down from it, knocking them out of the monsters as she tried to get up. Steve had already turned around and was running towards the girl, standing on his hind legs. Jean tried to get up, but she had no strength left and she lowered her head, resigned to the situation. Seeing Steve running after her, she shouted at him to stay away. But our hero did not listen to her and approached faster and faster, picking up speed. Jean once again screamed desperately at Steve to stay away, and the boy grabbed the spear that knocked the girl down. And the orc was already near Jean and swung his spear, preparing to strike. But Steve was faster and threw his spear into the orc's chest, knocking him off the wolf. And on the other side of the portal, a reporter said that there were 8 seconds left before the explosion and the people gathered were starting a countdown. Donnie and Melissa continued to shed tears while waiting for the guys, and the operator said that it seemed like things were going badly. The guy said that the audience rating is 60%, and if the guys come back, it will be a real sensation. Steve ran up to Jean and picked her up, gently holding her head. The girl sadly said that there were only 4 seconds left before the explosion, calling Steve a name. The beast seemed to glow and mentally conveyed to the girl that she should hold on tighter. Another orc was already close to the guys and swung his axe to strike. But the next second, only dust remained in the place of the guys, and the blast wave from Steve's jerk threw the monster's back. The countdown ended and the crowd froze, not believing that no one had returned. The orcs stood near the portal and watched as it changed from blue to yellow, and finally the portal exploded. The orcs standing nearby exploded, and the survivors ran away. The presenter said that the residents had finished the countdown and were frozen in anticipation. However, Steve and Jean were nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, flashes of lightning began to appear from the portal, causing excitement among the spectators. The first to appear from the portal were wolves, and people began to shout, asking what was happening. The entire flock ran out of the portal, shocking all the spectators, who stood silently frozen, their mouths open in surprise. And after the wolves, the guys flew out of the portal at the speed of a bullet. The viewers were unable to clearly see who appeared from the portal and were not sure that a person appeared there. Military personnel and reporters rushed to the supposed landing site of Steve and Jean. The impact left a hole in the ground, with Steve lying in it, clutching Jean tightly to him. The crowd roared that they had managed to get out alive and wondered how it had happened. And the wolves joined the noise of the crowd, howling at the full moon. The ambulance rushed to the portal, and the presenter said that a miracle had happened. 2 people were able to get out of the 5th-level dungeon, having been there for almost 5 days. In the office, Melissa showed the assembled group a photo taken at the scene of the incident. She said that they had now been taken to the hospital. Someone asked why they looked like that, and they were told that the conditions there were not the best. Melissa also showed an article that talked about a miraculous return. that a guy of F level had passed the dungeon of the 5th level, and they asked if Hiro had challenged him. The boss laughed nervously and said that the article was quite provocative. Melissa said with displeasure that someone had spread the information, adding that it was a great job. The boss replied that their job was to take action, not to look for the guilty, and suggested continuing. She said that as word spread about Steve, people from various organizations began to enter the country in an attempt to get him. The boss was angered by this news and called them all bastards. Melissa showed photos of the men, calling them by name and telling them who came from which organization. When the chief saw the photo, he got angry and said that this shameless agent was here too. The girl confirmed that he had also arrived and added that it was he who had lured Hiro away last time. The boss said that first we need to get a hold of Steve and asked if there was a way other than a contract. The doctor who spoke to Steve immediately after his return said that his family was here and he would not leave them. The boss asked in surprise if he really valued family more than money, and the doctor replied that he had lived with wolves for about 1,000 years and missed his family. The chief added that when he returned to Earth he missed the wolves and decided that he could not be understood. The doctor said that the most important thing for him is to be in his family, and it seems that this is quite understandable. Doc continued, saying that Steve should be given a place to live with his family and not be bothered. Then, he would not go against the government. The chief agreed and asked if they should take action in connection with the foreign agents who had arrived. Melissa showed a photo on the screen and said that it was an abandoned house near the city. The boss didn't understand why she showed this and asked what next. She suggested giving Steve the area to use and assigning people to watch over him, adding that the area was far from people, making it safe even if a portal opened. The boss said the house looked decent but needed some repairs and asked about Jean. Melissa said that Jean was the best in her business, and the boss asked if she was awake. The girl answered seriously that the girl was still undergoing treatment in the hospital. The boss asked irritably if she was really writing reports to Steve and just chilling out. Melissa showed one phrase on the monitor screen and said that some people say exactly that about Steve, a scumbag. The chief's face became serious and he gave the order, to work. The crowd was raging in the arena, and the host greeted all the SPFC fans. The host, dressed in a bright outfit, said into the microphone that this was the best competition on Earth and that the main event, the Match of Champions, was finally beginning. The crowd roared with anticipation, boys and girls shouting and waving their arms. And then in the darkness, the silhouette of a man in a cloak and with long hair pulled back into a ponytail appeared. The host stood on a platform under the spotlight and said that we would introduce the champions to everyone. A figure of a man appeared on the screen of a huge monitor, and the presenter said that he was #1 in the world rankings. 21 fights, winner among all 45 SPFCs. The presenter shouted into the microphone that he was the strongest man in the world and the hope of humanity. The presenter continued the presentation, adding that he was an unusual SS level, the strongest magical swordsman. A long-haired guy appeared on the screen. He was dressed in a black classic suit. Black smoke began to gather around his hands, and the presenter introduced him by name, Hiro. Hearing his name, the crowd erupted in a new wave of enthusiastic applause. Meanwhile, in Hiro's hand, the black smoke turned into a sword, and the host said that, as if in response to the applause, the sword burst into black flame. A girl with long hair sat among the spectators and watched what was happening attentively. As the host performed, Hiro jumped off the pedestal he had stepped onto, surrounded by black flames. Someone from the crowd said that this was the famous Phoenix. The second was surprised that Hiro really wanted to finish the fight with one sword, since he was facing Mikhail. And Hiro had already landed in the ring, leaving cracks on the floor after his jump, and the host said that he had entered the ring. The guy stood quietly. He didn't respond to the crowd, and didn't seem to react in any way to the screaming fans. The host commented that Hiro appears in the ring with his signature Phoenix Flame. The host began to introduce the second participant, a man-machine class C, a rising star, 13 victories, number 32 in the ranking. The guy appeared on the podium, and the host introduced him, the Russian brown bear, Mikhail. The guy easily jumped off the pedestal and rushed into the ring. The ground where he landed was covered in cracks, and the presenter said that he too had entered the ring. Mikhail immediately rushed into the attack, and the weapons in his hands began to shine. The guy with an evil grin told Hiro that everything would end here for him. The weapons in his hands began to charge, and Mikhail jumped up, preparing to strike at the standing Hiro. The weapon fell with force on the place where Hiro stood, and pieces of stones flew in all directions. The guy was thrown back by the blast wave, and he covered his face, shielding himself from the rising dust. Michael saw that Hiro was able to dodge and called him a little rat. The guy fired his gun, and the host said that Mikhail started using mana shooting. The host commented that the shrapnel even hit the fence, but Hiro dodged the shots with incredible speed. The presenter saw Mikhail's next charge and called it a mana bazooka. The weapon on the guy's hand fired a blast of incredible force, destroying everything in its path. But Hiro was able to dodge this shot as well and began to approach Mikhail. The presenter excitedly said that Hiro's sword was damaging Mikhail, but the guy immediately responded to the attack with a mana shot. Hiro attacked with his sword again, but Mikhail managed to block it. Mikhail's weapon was cracked from the enemy's blows and he was breathing heavily. But Hiro didn't give him time to catch his breath and attacked again, and the guy could only defend himself. Suddenly, a sword appeared from Mikhail's weapon and he tried to strike at Hiro, but he easily dodged the blow. Hiro landed behind Mikhail and readied both swords to strike. He moved with incredible speed, striking Mikhail one after another. But when the guy stopped, he noticed that his entire body was entangled in steel chains. Michael grinned smugly and said that he caught himself. As he prepared to fire, he screamed that his bones would shatter. But Hiro calmly replied, "The seventh note, Mikhail. You've already lost." The next second, Mikhail let out a strangled wheeze and blood began to flow from his mouth. His entire body was covered in cuts from which blood gushed out, causing the guy to scream in pain. The audience was shocked to see the huge bear Mikhail fall to the ground and Hiro throw off the chains without the slightest effort. The crowd roared and the host asked what happened and declared that Mikhail had lost. The host said that Mikhail, who was determined to win, lost and couldn't get up. The match was stopped and help was on the spot. The men surrounded Mikhail, trying to heal him, but Mikhail showed no signs of life, and one of the experts signaled that regeneration was impossible. The screen showed that Hiro had won, and the host said that this was the guy's 22nd victory. After leaving the stage, one of Hiro's retinue asked him if he had used the new method, but the boy replied that he had struck him with an ordinary sword. Hiro looked calm and thanked everyone for their work and promised to have a drink with them later. But as soon as he entered the waiting room, he was hugged tightly by the girl who was watching the fight. With sadness in her eyes, the girl asked if he had killed him. Hiro also sadly responded that Michael is one of the 7 evils of the future. The girl said that he shouldn't take all the worries on himself. She took the guy by the arm and Hiro asked if something had happened. The girl replied that nothing special, except for the call from the administration, and the guy asked who called. The girl said that the boss called, told her to take care of herself and suggested that she pack up and leave. While Hiro was getting dressed, the girl said that the guy who was locked in the dungeon on the 5th level had gotten out. Hiro was surprised and looked at the girl questioningly. She showed the phone and said that he could become the second hero, and now this news is on all channels. The girl said that his name was Steve. He was locked in the dungeon of the 5th level and asked in surprise if the guy really didn't remember, because she even collected articles for him. Hiro looked closely at the guy's photo and said that he didn't remember him. The girl asked again in surprise if he really didn't remember him. Not at all. She said that maybe he was an awakened swordsman, but Hiro replied that he would awaken in a year. The girl said that he was a druid, and if he really returned from where they say, then a portal to the 4th planet could be opened. Hiro didn't show it, but he was very worried about the news about the 4th planet. She said Steve was only F level. It's amazing he came back. Hiro listened to the girl and thought that this was simply impossible. He reflected that he had been living for more than 500 years, and this was the 25th regression. Thanks to this, he knows all the awakenings and the main events. However, Steve is not among the great names, and in all this long time he has never heard this name. He continued to reflect that history, of course, can change a little. But the butterfly effect has its limits. Mikhail was supposed to die in 10 years. And the fact that Anna is alive, although she should have died 2 years ago, can also be called the butterfly effect. However, the main events, such as the appearance of the 7th level dungeon or the connection with the 4th planet, never changed. This means that there will be no 4th planet appearing in the next 5 years. The girl asked if it would not have been better to lure Steve to their side. Hiro thought for a moment and answered honestly that he didn't know. The girl added that for an hour he is the most popular guy in the country. But Hiro said that for now they should watch him. Remembering the scary giant monsters, Hiro thought that the end would soon come. Monsters devoured people like snacks, and humanity, having survived the cataclysm, began to collapse due to the hacking of dungeons. Huge red wyverns flew across the ground in flocks. They attacked people, spitting fire, and all because the monsters covered the sky and the earth. The mercenaries fought the monsters, but the only option for the awakened to survive was the country he moved to. This is the reason why Hiro stays in this country despite being called a traitor to his homeland. As long as the dungeons in this country are organized by truly talented people, this place will be the best for survival. Refugees will arrive in this country on boats, happy to have made it. and Hero will meet them, and people will say that since he is here, they are definitely saved. He thought that his surviving fellow countrymen would call him a savior, not a traitor to the homeland. He imagined how they would call him the hero, and a barely noticeable smile appeared on his lips. The girl looked at him in surprise, and Hero, embarrassed, said that it seemed like it was just a show. Anna didn't understand what he meant, and the guy explained that it was just a deception. But the girl didn't believe him, and said that it wasn't only the Ministry of Defense that was thirsty for him. Hero said that if he survived the end, it would not be too late to pick him up, and again suggested waiting. Shinsum Hospital is one of the few surviving buildings in the city. Melissa entered Jean's room without knocking, interrupting her reading. The girl approached the blonde and asked if it hurt, but she replied that it still hurt. Melissa didn't believe it and said that everything seemed wrong. But the girl repeated again that it hurt a lot. The brunette didn't believe it and said that the whole hospital was talking about how a guy in a mask came to her every night and asked if it was Steve. But Jean quickly changed the subject and asked if she had bought what she asked for. Melissa put the bag on the table and said that luckily she found both a man and food for her. The girl pulled out food and a jar of coffee onto the table, but displeasure was evident in Jean's gaze. She shook her head and said she wanted a different flavor, to which Melissa replied that it was the same color. Jean looked at the food box with disappointment and added that she wanted a different chicken. Melissa started to lose her temper. Her palm glowed white and she said, "Eat what they give you." Despite the dissatisfaction, the chicken was eaten and the coffee was drunk. Jean leaned back on the pillow contentedly and holding her stomach said that she was full. Melissa smiled irritably and said that since she was full, it was time to get to work. But Jean had already closed her eyes and said sleepily that she would start when she had had a little nap. Melissa's palm glowed again and she asked the girl with an evil smile not to talk nonsense. The next moment, the room was illuminated by a bright light and Jean's scream could be heard from the ward. Meanwhile, at the CIA headquarters, the screen showed news that Hero had finally defeated Mikhail. The man behind the monitor did not believe the news and was surprised how Mikhail could have been defeated. The guy standing near the table said that Hero was progressing a little more and he would reach the SSS level. The next news was that after returning from the dungeon, Steve did not show up anywhere, even in raids. The guy showed the photo and said that it was taken quite recently. The man looked at the photo of Steve feeding the pigeons and asked where that place was and what he was doing there. The guy said that he often goes there and the man asked if he was lonely. The man was surprised that he was talking to pigeons, and the guy said that he seemed to be in unrequited love or something like that. The man got angry and said that he could introduce him to many beautiful girls. He added that in any case, it was impossible for Steve to be taken over by anyone else and asked the guy if he understood this. The guy said that in the morning a special group of his people went to the country where Steve lives, however. He was clearly frightened and added that the sky was a bit choppy at the moment. But the man did not understand what was being discussed and asked why. The huge airliner flew across the sky, cutting through the clouds, against the backdrop of the azure sky. The girl and her mother were sitting in their seats and the girl was looking attentively out the window. Suddenly, she called her mother and said that a beautiful bird was flying outside. The woman looked up from her reading and looked out the window with interest, searching for a bird. But the curiosity on her face turned to fear when she saw the bird. A red monster with a fanged mouth was flying outside the window. It was a small wyvern that was flying near the plane, as if playing tag. Other passengers also noticed it and began to approach the window, thinking that this bird was somehow strange. But the two men knew for sure that it was not a bird, and listened excitedly to the conversations of the passengers. One said that it was a wyvern, and the second added that although it was small, it was still dangerous. The guy said that it turned out that the wyvern dungeon was open, and added that they needed to report this when they landed. Suddenly, the guy said in fear that if the wyvern dungeon is open, but he didn't finish because a huge wyvern, larger than an airplane, appeared outside the window. She flew up to the plane and opened her mouth, breathing fire, setting the plane on fire. The plane caught fire and began to melt at the same second. After finishing in the plane, the wyvern flew on and joined the flock of other monsters that filled the sky, and the news reported that an explosion occurred in the wyvern dungeon and many monsters escaped. Meanwhile, two SUVs were driving along a dirt road and someone asked if they had really entered the wilderness. Chad was driving and said they were there, but Donnie didn't believe him and the guy started to doubt it too. Donnie looked ahead in fear and asked Steve if this was a cursed house, but Steve saw nothing. Donnie pointed to the two-story house ahead and Munch sighed heavily. Driving closer, the guy exclaimed that this was a truly cursed house. Covered in ivy, the glass was cracked, and a raven was sitting on the roof. The guys got out of the car and couldn't contain their emotions from what they saw of the house, complaining that it wasn't even suitable for an overnight stay. Donnie asked if there was internet reception. and Jean said in fear that she thought she saw a ghost on the second floor. The boys didn't believe that they would actually have to sleep here. It seemed like the building would collapse if they entered, and Jean continued to talk about the ghost. Jean angrily told Melissa that she couldn't live there, and she asked the girl to be quieter. Melissa turned to Steve and asked if they felt uncomfortable because they expected something different. The girl said with a wide smile that restoration work would begin here tomorrow. But Steve said that he didn't need anything. He liked everything as is, and asked if he could settle in. Jean grabbed the guy by the jacket and, pulling him slightly towards her, asked if he had gone crazy. But Melissa intervened in the conversation, saying that people with wild instincts have a special point of view and suggested marking the territory. Steve didn't understand the proposal, and the girl said that they could do whatever they wanted on their territory. Steve liked this proposal and his hand began to glow. Fireflies began to gather around our hero, while everyone else just watched warily. Melissa asked in surprise what it was, and Jean calmly replied that it was the tree spirit. The stream of fireflies became larger and smaller, and little fairies began to fly out of them, scattering in all directions. Melissa asked what he was doing, and Jean replied that she had told him to mark the territory. The little fairies scattered around the perimeter and began to throw seeds into the ground, from which shoots immediately began to sprout. From these shoots, trees began to grow at incredible speed. The guys from Steve's clan watched in awe at the speed, and Chad said that huge trees grew in an instant. The guys didn't believe that what was happening was real, and someone said that now they had a fence. The spirits began to return back, and Steve finally said that the job was done. He said that it goes out about 1 kilometer from the house, so be it. Melissa giggled nervously and said that it was just wonderful. Coming closer, she said that this place will be designated as Steve's Guild, and everything that is on this territory belongs to them. Our hero said that, apart from the ban on traveling abroad, everything sounded good, but the girl said that this point was mandatory. Melissa said that their first concern was Steve's family, and Jean snorted when she heard that. But our hero did not notice this and said that he liked everything. Melissa said that if that was the case, he needed to sign the contract and handed the guy some papers and a pen. But then Jean intervened and said that it needed to be read carefully. But Melissa pushed the girl away and showed her where Steve should sign. Melissa praised Steve and handed him his copy of the contract. The girl shook the guy's hand and suggested that he work hard until the portal opened. Steve said he would keep his promise, and Melissa asked him to trust the government. As Melissa left, she asked Jean to behave herself, and she replied that she would run away if people were not sent here tomorrow to fix the house. The girls exchanged displeased glances, and Jean stuck her tongue out at her departing friend. The SUV drove back through the newly grown forest. Melissa sighed heavily, calling Jean a brat, and the driver asked if it was possible to manage such a large territory with such a small number of people. Melissa replied that if they couldn't do it, they would help. The girl gave the order to collect a raid list of level 5 or higher and put it into standby mode. And somewhere in the ocean, motorboats sailed up to a large ship. They swam closer and opened fire on the ship. The guy shouted the call sign Coral Emerald into the radio, reporting that they were being attacked by pirates and needed help. Another ship reported that it had received the coordinates of the Coral Emerald and added that help would arrive in 2 hours and asked to turn off the engine when the pirates were on board. The pirates swam close to the ship and began to rise. The soldier reported that they were already on board, and there were more of them. The captain said to shut down the engine, turn off all power, and gather in the staff compartment. Suddenly the ship tilted, and the soldiers could barely stay on their feet. The ship's crew watched in horror as something overboard scattered the pirates' boats in different directions. And the next thing they saw was a huge tentacle heading straight towards the ship. The monster entangled the entire ship with red tentacles, breaking the deck like a toy. The ship's crew flew in different directions, and glass rained down on them. In a matter of seconds, the monster had its tentacles gripping the ship, breaking it into pieces, and some of the survivors fell into the water. But in the water, an open mouth with huge teeth was waiting for them. The size of the mouth made the man look like a tiny grain of sand, and it was impossible to escape. And while the huge monster with tentacles dragged the remains of the ship to the bottom, the monster, similar to a shark with many tails, swam forward. The shark returned to the school, where there were dozens, if not hundreds, of the same monsters. Soon, a relief ship arrived at the scene, along with a helicopter. It was reported that the ship had arrived at the scene, however, as a result of patrolling within a radius of 10 miles, no signs of the vessel were found. But this ship also suffered the same fate as the Coral Emerald, and tentacles began to entwine it. And in Steve's guild house, fireflies flew around the trees, helping them grow even taller. And the ringtone of the telephone echoed throughout the house. The sound came from the room where Jean was fast asleep. The girl sleepily answered the call without opening her eyes. Melissa, who called the girl, said that she felt like she had a taste of life. The girl sleepily scratched her stomach and asked what she needed. She was already at work. Melissa asked her point blank if she was with Steve now or not. But Jean only sleepily mumbled that she didn't know, without opening her eyes. Melissa lost her temper and screamed that the sun had already risen and she was not going to get up. The girl looked angrily at the phone, as if she could convey her mood to Jean, who hung up. After making coffee, Jean went out onto the balcony, looking at the giant trees. The girl sipped coffee from a mug, thinking that Steve had planted a lot of things here. Overnight, the tree near the house grew several times taller than their house, surrounded by fireflies. At this time, Steve was watching a pack of wolves, opening the system settings. He gave names to the wolves, calling them any food. Each had an energy level, as well as information about where they were tamed. Steve read a status from one of the wolves that if the energy level increases, then loss of sanity may occur. The guy thoughtfully read the warning and thought that in this case it would be problematic to increase the level. At that moment, Jean came up to him and asked what he was doing. Steve explained that he was naming new members, and Jean asked in surprise if he was talking about wolves. Yawning, the girl said that he should have woken her up and asked why he went out alone. Peku, who had grown bigger, ran up to them. Jean said that he was growing quickly and asked about the younger ones. Steve replied that they had left for breakfast and were probably at the dungeon now. Jean praised his diligence, especially in this heat. Our hero pointed to the forest and asked the girl if she wanted to take a walk. Jean tilted her head to the side in surprise, asking the guy again. In an instant, Steve turned into a huge white beast and extended his hand to her. Jean easily jumped onto his back, and the guy said that he was going to show her something now. The girl smiled and asked if he really wanted to brag about his achievements to her. But Steve didn't answer her question and asked her to hold on tighter. Our hero, in the form of a beast, rushed forward as usual with incredible speed. Jean could barely stay on Steve's back and asked him to go slower. The wolves rushed after them, trying to catch up with the boys, and Jean screamed that she had lost her shoes. In the forest where Steve's guild had settled, several journalists had pitched tents when they heard the howling of wolves. One of them said that there was nothing to catch here, adding that it was also very hot. Another guy said the company told him to get something and complained that he hadn't seen his salary for over a month. He turned to the other guys and asked if there were any who had already been in this forest. Another partner pointed to a number of cameras and said they belonged to the military police, but before they arrived, they would be eaten by wolves. Another guy said that it is impossible to predict when the portal will open, so not only journalists, but influential people were banned from entering. Suddenly, the SUV that Steve bought for Chad appeared on the road. The journalists found out that it was Steve's car and began to look for him excitedly. The car sped past the journalists without stopping. Chad said that even the heat doesn't stop the journalists, and Donnie wondered whose channel it was, his or Steve's. He read the comments under the video. Some were discussing Steve and were surprised that he was only level F, while others were discussing the fight between Hero and Mikhail. Donnie suddenly let out a surprised cry, but when Chad asked what was wrong, he sheepishly replied that nothing. Donnie watched tensely as several major countries sent large donations, totaling 4 billion. The guy was thinking that most of the donations were coming from Europe and couldn't decide whether to tell Steve about it or not. Suddenly, the car pulled up alongside a pack of wolves, led by Steve, and Donnie shouted to him in surprise. Jean noticed the boys' car and waved to them from astride Steve. Donnie waved back and called her his brother's wife, surprising Chad with this phrase. In response to these words, Jean threatened Donnie with her fist, narrowing her eyes angrily. The boys smiled cheerfully and said that they use the same toilet, eat and sleep in the same house. He looked with resentment at Jean sitting astride Steve and said that he had never ridden them like that. And at that time, our hero picked up speed, overtaking the SUV, which surprised the guys. Donnie playfully asked Chad to push himself, and he replied that they wouldn't lose. Chad shifted the transmission into sport mode and pressed the gas pedal to the floor. The car pulled ahead, slightly overtaking the wolf. Donnie shouted that the last one buys dinner and added that the speed of light is against the rules. Suddenly, Jean felt something and excitedly called out to Steve. Steve was calm and only asked the girl if she felt it. The girl's eyes glowed blue, and she said that a crack had been discovered within a radius of 200 meters. Jean remembered the conversation in the hospital when Steve snuck up on her. She was tired and her eyes were closing, but Jean still asked what planet she was from.